deep under the lower world. In a hall carved into a valley that has swallowed one tribe after another, an ogre chieftain sits on a pedestal watching enslaved elven girls carry his dinner to him. One of them is moving too slowly for his assistant's taste, so she gets kicked across the floor for it. She apologizes through tears and explains she has not eaten in a long time and her body is failing. He decides the most helpful thing he can do about that is put her out of her misery, and he stands up and reaches for an enormous sword, which is when every lamp in the room goes out at once. Ruga, chieftain of the ogres, elite of the underworld, personally unbeatable, starts yelling at somebody to bring the fire back. And when the light returns, most of his kin are on the floor, and there are 4 intruders standing in his hall. A human, a wolf, and 2 goblins. His minions genuinely cannot stop laughing about it, because 4 of them came. 4. Is this man making fun of them? Ruga laughs along, entirely comfortable, and observes that they may look weak at first glance. And they did somehow get all the way in here. He is even a little curious. Very few creatures have ever dared challenge him, so he tells his people to go and put the escaped slaves back in their cages, and to deal with the guests on the way. The first ogre to reach the goblin girl draws his weapon and announces that it is time these 4 got what they deserve. She flips through the air and kicks his head through a wall. The second one reassesses the situation with impressive speed and proposes a change of tactics, on the grounds that this goblin appears to be carrying strength well past anything her demon name should allow. New plan. Everybody concentrates on the wolf since the wolf is clearly the strongest and fastest thing here. The wolf turns out to be a werewolf king and he tears them in half. And Ruga, watching his hall empty out, starts wondering whether skills that rare genuinely exist or whether these people have very powerful support behind them. He is asking the wrong question. What the ogre chieftain does not know is that the quiet human standing in the middle of his throne room has already been inside this fortress 3 separate times, walked its corridors while every one of his guards looked directly at nothing, and decided in advance which walls the trap magic goes behind and which corridor the prisoners leave through. He does not know that the reason his cells are open is that a lock-picking skill opens magical locks as easily as wooden ones. He does not know that when he swings and hits nothing but air, it is because that man is layering an assassin's concealment on top of a silent step technique on top of a strength enhancement, and that he owns all 3, along with roughly 30 more. Because this is a man who was thrown into the lower world at 15 for having a skill that did not work. His family called it a lie in front of the entire church. His father called him a disgrace and had him teleported into a monster forest with a sword he had to beg for. The skill is called Gacha. It spins for points. The points come from dead monsters, and there is no cap on how many skills one person can hold, which is a fairly stupid thing to hand a boy with nothing left to lose and an entire underworld full of monsters to work through. Ruga is about to take a punch that puts him through the air and across the room, and by the time he understands he cannot win this, he will already be running. Hold that image because that is not where the story starts. To understand how an exiled 5th son ends up leading werewolves, slimes, dryads, golems, and vampires into an ogre lair, we have to go back to the morning it all went wrong. Back to a boy in a carriage, riding to a church with his father in a genuinely good mood beside him, about to receive the greatest skill the kingdom has seen in generations, and about to be thrown away for it. So, from the beginning, it starts with Cross Backhurst standing on a staircase inside a dream, in front of a being that calls him by name and tells him the skill he has been granted is called Gacha. We are in Reziel, the main capital of Rakand. His father says the skills bestowed on him are truly wonderful, and our boy thanks him, privately noting that he is the 5th son of an earl. Now, in this country, a person turns 15 and an evaluation ritual is performed, and a god hands that person a skill. The ritual shows you your own future, a dream handed down by a god, and when he told his family what he saw inside his, their jaws very nearly came off. His father looks out of the carriage window with a joyful expression and tells him to take a look, because the church is already in sight. He looks at the man and thinks about how this is the first time he has ever seen his father this happy, because his mother died after he was born. His life cost her life, so the family hates him and treats him as evil made flesh. Just another sinner, and one they can shut away whenever it suits them. Even so, he has lived reasonably well, entirely thanks to— He does not get to finish the thought because a girl named Ellis Rayfield calls his name and wishes him a good morning. He is slightly startled, turns to her and says he heard she was not feeling well today. She says it is such an important day for her betrothed that she could not stay away. Or did she interrupt him? He denies it, and privately notes that he is only alive at all because of one useful political instrument, his wedding, because she is a beautiful girl, good-looking at first glance, and in reality a sadist. He has been bullied by her horribly since childhood. She asks in a tone with real venom in it, whether it is not useful to have such a good skill as his. He registers the sheer quantity of killing intent behind that sentence and concludes she must be tired. There is a reason she stopped needling him about the gacha skill, because the nagging would only intensify once he actually started using it. Except he cannot spend his whole life being frightened of her. So he smiles, thanks her, and says he hopes this skill turns out useful to her as well. She goes red, starts backing away from him and says they will see each other again. He finds the entire performance strange, because for some reason she is not angry. His father calls his name and says it is time to go. The protagonist agrees, thinking that the terrible days he has been enduring end today. With his new gacha skill, his new life starts here. Somebody announces in a serious tone that the Backhurst evaluation ceremony now begins. He places his hand on the stone monument, which honestly looks like an enormous phone. What nobody in that church knows is that the thing about to happen has never once happened at a Backhurst ceremony. The word gacha appears on the screen, and people say out loud with surprise that this really is the skill. Rumor has it a man can accumulate with that thing infinitely. His father calls his name and tells him to show them immediately how it works. He agrees, waves a hand, a system window with a gacha opens in front of him, and he wonders why it is so bright and how a person is supposed to share the screen. Apparently he's the only one who can see it. So he announces loudly that the gacha screen is right there in front of him and he can spin it. He thinks, smiling enormously, that his new life finally starts now. He presses the button and says out loud that all he has to do is spin. Naturally, nothing happens. He starts getting nervous because the gacha is not spinning. He looks around and a system window opens in front of him saying he does not have enough points. He becomes extremely worried and wonders what points those are supposed to be and why the thing will not turn, because in his dream he could spin it. So how does a person get these points? His father, with that joyful expression still on his face, calls to him and asks whether he got his skill and tells him to hurry up and show them. The MC is very nervous and says it appears he cannot use it right now. The man is stunned and asks in a serious tone what he just said. His brothers come up onto the stage, call him over, and ask whether he is genuinely trying to deceive them. He denies it in a frightened voice and says he really did see it in the god's dream. They ask loudly, then why he is not spinning the gacha. His legs start shaking, and he says he does not have enough points to spin it. They tell him loudly to go and earn some then. He starts hunting through the system window for information and cannot understand why there is nowhere at all explaining how to earn them. Why was he not told about this in the dream? He starts crying out of pure anxiety while trying to work out how his own skill functions. He turns around with horror in his eyes when he hears his father say, in a very angry voice, that he has brought shame on them. Killing his own mother was not enough for him. Now he is dragging the family name down as well. He denies it and tries to justify himself. Ellis is startled at first by what is happening, and then a sly grin arrives on her face, and his father says loudly that he should shut his mouth. He is a disgrace to this family, and this time there is no forgiveness. And just like that, he is exiled. Our boy drops to his knees in despair and asks himself whether there is genuinely nothing he can do to change this. After which the knights put him in a carriage and tell him he really is an idiot. Did he seriously try to trick his own brothers with a lie that enormous? Because if he had listened, he would be living somewhere in a prestigious house. They bring him to the ruins where he sits down in the center of a magic circle and asks politely for a sword. Because walking in unarmed means some monster kills him immediately. The knight refuses and says their orders are to treat him exactly like the sinner he is. So he points out that the original reason for sending sinners down to the lower world was subduing demons, and he intends to kill as many monsters as he possibly can in order to recover. He wants the upper world to be a safe place where people live long lives. The knight calls his companion over and they hand him the sword, and he thanks them for it. Then the magic circle teleports him down, and they remark that they will probably never see his face again. In the end, Cross lands in a forest, looks around and says, so this is the lower world. He throws off his cloak thinking about how monsters live down here, because in the upper world live people connected by a single magic circle through an indestructible gate, and they are the only ones like that anywhere. Transport circles are used to send criminals down. They are sent to random places, which makes coming back impossible. He stretches and says he is wondering what exactly he does now. Right away, a monster comes out of a bush at him, and he notices it in time and dodges at the last possible moment. Our boy looks at the thing and wonders whether that is a wolf, which are larger and more ferocious than ordinary wolves and unafraid of attacking armed people. He picks up the sword wary and reminds himself that nobody in his year at the Knight Academy was better with one, and he has even fought a monster once, except upper world monsters are weaker than the local ones, so his sword training most likely ends right here. The wolf comes in for another attack, and when it gets close, the protagonist swings a leg and throws dust into its eyes. The monster stops and shuts its eyes, and he puts the sword in. Sadly, the monster survives. He thinks he cut its face, and it did not so much as flinch, because down here fighting is a natural instinct. The wolf jumps again to bite him, and he changes his grip fast and drives the sword through its head. He kills it, breathes out, and realizes he had to move a great deal more than he expected. Good blade though, worth every second of that awkward begging at the circle. For now he simply bleeds them, since he has heard monster meat is delicious. What our boy does not know yet is that his family threw away the single most valuable skill in the kingdom this morning, because he notices the words 100 points hanging above the body. He thinks about how nothing like that appeared when he killed a monster in the upper world. Still, he gets a hunch, opens the gacha, and thinks it cannot be, because his points have changed in the system window, which means points come from killing monsters. The MC looks thoroughly confused and says out loud that this means his failed skill is only useless in the upper world, where there are no monsters. This makes him angry, and he shouts asking what the hell that is supposed to be. Somebody might at least have warned him that this skill is difficult to use up there, and he does not know. Perhaps he was always coming down here eventually, and it would have gone considerably better with proper equipment and handling. He drops onto the ground, sighs and says perhaps it is for the best. It is too late anyway, and he does not want to accept anything from those people. He went through an enormous number of pathetic events and humiliations to have what he has. He would have been genuinely furious if he had come out of all that with no skill at all. He sits up and says he will make this gacha work regardless. He simply needs to find more monsters. He has been learning to survive and now he finally has hope. He smiles and thinks with real confidence that he survives here, and he definitely does not die. Meanwhile, Ellis is lying in her room hugging a body pillow with his face printed on it, saying his name out loud, because earlier back at his house she came into his room, called him by name, and asked whether he is genuinely that stupid. He turned to her with a completely lifeless expression and said her name, and she said that to think he tried to raise his standing with a stupid god's dream. Does he have anything to say for himself? He asked with visible displeasure whether it is not wonderful for her, since now she has to break off an engagement with an idiot like him. She said she could not honestly claim to like that attitude of his, and that she is nonetheless doing her absolute best to save him from this. He was surprised and asked what she meant. She said she meant exactly what she said. He is her dog, her toy, and her slave, so leaving him like this is not something she is willing to do. She put a chair down in front of him, and he asked, "Fine, then what? How does she help?" She sat down on that chair, took off her shoes, held out one foot to him, and said that first he licks it and demonstrates his devotion. Then she restores the engagement, and once they are married, the two of them leave this place. There would have to be a ceremony, and she would destroy the Rayfield family for him personally. So he had better make an effort and prove his devotion. He leaned slightly toward her, and at the last moment pushed her legs away and asked whether she is not demanding rather a lot, calling him her toy and her dog. Besides which, he refuses to listen, because he is not her slave. She was thrown by that and asked loudly whether he understands that being sent to the lower world means he definitely dies. She wanted to say something else, and he was not listening, and asked whether she is finished, and whether she would kindly leave, because he has already decided everything. To nobody's surprise, she was extremely angry about that, walked out of the room and announced that he had better remember this moment. All he can do now is come to her in tears afterward, after which she felt ill and had to go home and rest. Currently, a maid knocks on her door and apologizes before coming in, then helps her get ready and asks the lady how she is feeling. Ellis says she is almost entirely better, and tomorrow she is going to meet Cross again, so her things should be prepared. The maid tells her in a slightly worried tone that she did not want to raise this, and he has already been sent to the lower world. She is extremely surprised by that and asks loudly what she just said. Meanwhile, in the lower world, he kills another wolf and says delighted that this is the second one, and he is already getting sticky with sweat, although there is a large concentration of monsters in this place. He kills a few more and reflects that Gacha is a very rare ability, which lets a man hold an unlimited number of skills. Except spinning it requires defeating monsters and collecting points off them. One wolf gives 100 points. He needs 500 to use Gacha once, so that is 5 monsters minimum. At first he intended to spin the moment he had the required number, because catching them one at a time and without complications means collecting a great many points, easily, which is why he aims for 5,000 instead, since that opens something genuinely impressive. Light body, for instance. He has heard that skill scales with the strength of the body itself. It looks like drifting above the ground, as though a man were reaching straight for his own hope. Sometime later he says he has 37 kills. Everything is going well, and he collects 5,000 easily, while the sun is still lighting the way. He opens the system window and says he wants to see how much he has. He looks at that window and asks in a shocked voice whether it is not increasing. Why does he have this few points? Where did all of them go? He grinds his teeth and tells himself to calm down, because there is certainly a reason for this. What is wrong with his hunting? Could it be that every creature carries a different number of points? He looks at the monster body lying nearby and asks what that is, because it appears the interface has stopped showing points at all. Perhaps he hunted too much. He is fairly certain he should have checked those numbers considerably earlier. Sometime later, the protagonist kills another one and says exhausted that one day, by the light of the sun, he will earn 5,000 points, because after all of that he changed hunting grounds and ran into goblins, and after them fanged rabbits. A goblin is weak and dies without complaint. A fanged rabbit hits roughly as hard as a small wolf, and moves fast enough that landing a sword on one is genuinely difficult. Later he walks through the forest looking wrecked and says that since he was sent down here, all he has done is fight monsters. He imagines how quickly he would have died without this skill. Luckily, he opens the gacha window and finds 5,000 points sitting in it. The MC is delighted and says he is finally going to see what is inside. He thinks that his 3-point skills are presumably healing, appraisal, and cultivation, all of which are extremely rare and require high levels. Normally a person gets exactly 1 skill at the appraisal ceremony, and he could walk out with all 3. He asks, excited, what he should do. Spin here or find somewhere safe first. He clicks the window and decides he is not waiting a second longer. Within seconds, a chest falls out of the sky in front of him, and he screams in fright. He opens one eye slightly, looks at it, and asks whether that is a treasure chest. He reads the inscription above it, and asks whether he is supposed to touch it. The instant he presses the button, the chest opens and several balls come out and hang in the air in front of him. He counts 11 and asks whether all of those are skills, because there appear to be different variations of ball. That one is copper colored. He touches one, and it starts glowing, which frightens him. Several open, and he asks whether these are all skills, or rather changes to his abilities, because he cannot tell from this alone. So how is he supposed to continue? There is a silver ball on top. He opens 4 more with different skills and says cheerfully that the tempting ones are over here. Although how does a person check whether sword mastery works only on one-handed swords? Next come the golden balls. He touches one and receives fire and earth magic, and says these are magical skills, and survival becomes very easy with those. those. The last one is the rainbow ball. He starts getting nervous because he has not received a 3-point skill yet. Of course, he touches it and gets evaluation. He is thrilled and decides it is incredible, and he is testing it immediately because he does not want to lose any more skills. It appears he has to picture the skill's name in his head. He does that, and a system window opens saying data update, and then a great many marks appear all around him, and he asks loudly what they are. He picks up a fruit and says, with surprise, that this is so cool, so he can evaluate all of this. The data processes, and a window opens. Peach. It weighs 152 grams, holds 137 grams of water, carries 70 kilocalories, and contains no poison. 2 further information plates stay locked until the skill reaches level 2 and level 3. The MC works out that as the level rises, the number of things he can identify rises with it. Although he is glad that even at the first level, he can determine whether something is poisonous. He uses the skill on himself and a window with his own status opens. Our boy sees 9 existing skills and genuinely starts crying with joy. Then his stomach rumbles, and he says he is so hungry that the tears are coming out on their own. Sometime later, when night falls, he gathers branches, produces fire out of one finger, and says that at level 1 this is all he knows how to do. And he lights it and starts roasting monster meat. He starts eating. A joyful smile arrives on his face and he says out loud that it is so delicious. It appears he survives the cold somehow. There is a great deal to do tomorrow, and it appears gacha points are what monster hunting is actually for. He goes to bed, covers himself with a wolf skin, and says he wants to improve his base and his doctor skill if possible. In the end, he falls asleep and has a nightmare in which Ellis calls to him and says that it appears if not for her, nobody at all would take trash like him. He obeys every order. If he understood, he answers her. She says his name over and over, and he sits up sharply and screams out loud in fright. He takes a few deep breaths and asks whether that was a dream. Why is he still seeing things like that now that he has finally escaped it? He cannot get back to sleep, remembers the aristocratic school uniform, and reflects that her true nature came out around then. Now, in her own estimation, Ellis is beautiful. Somebody once told her she is like a reincarnated angel, and she does not care for the comparison, because she is 100 times more beautiful than any angel. She remembers meeting him as a child and being warned that she had better not get involved with that boy, because he is the devil's child, which was, as she remembers it, their first meeting, because he was the first person who paid her no attention whatsoever. She decided, grinning enormously, that he had better stay alert. He is going to be crazy about her. And just like that, the next day she started going to him. She announced that today the two of them were going horse riding. He was confused and pointed out the obvious absence of any horse. So she put the boy down on all fours, climbed onto his back, and told him to pick up the pace and start neighing like the animal he now was. She remembers the time they spent together and reflects that he accepted her and accepted what she actually is, and somewhere in there she became attached to him without noticing. On the other hand, she remembers a ball and aristocrats coming over to tell her how noble she is, visiting a talentless boy like that on purpose. She asks who exactly they meant. They said the protagonist's name and started laughing loudly. And she decided they had not even noticed his charm and were making fools of themselves, being talentless creatures in their own right. To nobody's surprise, it hurt her. Is there a way to put scoundrels like that in their place? Ellis had an idea, called her father over, and said something to him quietly. He understood her perfectly and said he would handle it immediately. Then she walked to the center of the hall, and he called for everybody's attention, because his daughter has an announcement. With a completely determined expression, she introduced herself and said she's getting engaged to the 5th son of the Backhurst family. Everybody present was stunned, including the MC, and every head in the room turned to him. After which the two of them went to a school for aristocrats, where different houses meant they could not see each other often. Rumors about his skills reached her house, and she was proud of him. One day the two of them waved at each other, and the girls in her faculty said that the boy from the Knights faculty is so cute, although it appears he is already seeing somebody and they wonder who. Then they noticed the waving and wanted to ask about it, and she agreed instantly, and told them the two of them are already engaged. They started discussing it, and she wondered why she had said anything at all. Later the two of them met, and she was extremely unhappy to see a box in his hands, and asked what he has in there. He said they are gifts. She reflected that he has suddenly become popular with the girls. Apparently a beautiful lady and a handsome man falling in love is the finest entertainment those girls have access to. And they genuinely like him because he carries himself like a real duke. She laughed and said that he has become very popular, although one detail should stay firmly in his mind. The fiancé is her. Naturally, he agreed. And Ellis reflects that she was only a little jealous at first, and she was losing her mind more with every passing day. Her jealousy climbed steadily, and at various intervals she told him he is not to speak to anybody except her. She chose him as her fiancé deliberately. He is worthless without her. She reflects that the flame of her jealousy was burning fiercely, and that it drove Cross away, on top of which she ruined his reputation at that school. He lost his confidence and withdrew. She reflects that her goal was keeping him away from other people, and what she was actually doing was devaluing him and fixating on how pathetic he had become. Later she asks the maid combing her hair what she just said. She says it appears he has acquired a very unusual gacha skill, so he is a worthy fiancé after all. Ellis gets slightly nervous and says she thinks she needs to prepare her speech for the performance, because if this continues, the two of them get separated. She was extremely worried about that on the day of the ritual, and when his expulsion was announced, she was delighted, because he had painted himself into a corner. After a shame that stains the Backhurst line permanently, the engagement is certainly dissolved, and when she extends a helping hand to a man driven into total despair, his life belongs to her. This was meant to be. For the time being, Ellis stands at the window in her house and says she made a mistake. If he had been slightly more obedient, it would never have come to the two of them never meeting again. Still, she wants to ask something and starts crying instead. The maid knocks and calls to her mistress and begs forgiveness for disturbing her rest. She is startled and says, loudly, that nobody is allowed to open that door. Then she agrees anyway and asks what she needs. The maid says the head of the family asked for something to be passed along. She is to prepare for an audience with the king of Rakand. She calms down and turns silently toward the door. Meanwhile, in the lower world, the protagonist shouts with delight because fruit actually grows down here. He starts eating a peach and says the sweet, juicy taste removes every bit of his exhaustion instantly. He reflects that this peach tree is twice the size of a normal one and started bearing fruit in 5 days. Because 5 days ago he announced that 25 fish arrows were ready. Excellent. Now he can pull 11 gacha skills. He pulls them and announces, delighted, that he now has 2 rainbow skills. He has gained a great many new ones. His valuation dropped, and his level still climbs. Now rainbow cultivation skills reduce the time involved and enhance any quality of whatever is being cultivated. Taste strengthening, weakening, and so on. He took a seed, activated cultivation, and a system window asked whether he wants to grow a fruit-bearing peach tree. Estimated time, 5 days. He was extremely surprised and asked out loud whether he gets a fruiting tree in 5 days. Rainbow skills turned out to be even stronger than he thought. Currently, he says that across those 5 days he concentrated on learning skills, and he finally has points for gacha again. He killed skeletons and fairies. He presses the button and gets 11 skills again. He sees a rainbow skill. Healing. Our boy is thrilled and says out loud that he has finally got the one he has been waiting for, because with that he can make potions. He reads the description and says he understands, and he needs ingredients. He searched for 5 days, and there are very few medicinal herbs around here. Although this does at least remove his worries about injury and illness. After lunch he goes looking for somewhere with a lot of medicinal herbs. Meanwhile, in the lower world, he runs into a fanged bull, which breaks his sword with a single blow. The MC is alarmed by that and says loudly that he does not have much time left to kill this thing, because its durability was low to begin with, and apparently that sword has now reached its limit. Against a monster like this, durability dropped to 0 instantly. He also cannot use magic yet, and fishing and cultivation are useless here. Then he remembers something, turns to the bull, and settles into a hand-to-hand stance. He puts a straight punch into the monster's head and knocks it onto its back. He says he is not far off level 1. He did not expect an opponent this strong. His attention goes to the fact that this monster gave 200 points, and he notes that he normally receives no more than 100. So the stronger the opponent, the more points they carry. Martial arts, even at level 1, have astonishing power, which is to say a few seconds after using that skill, his hands, he removes the glove from the hand he punched with and finds it broken and bleeding heavily. The MC is honestly shocked and asks loudly what this is. He screams in pain and activates pharmacist. 2 ingredient slots open in front of him. He puts Chiu herb into one and magically purified water into the other. He says he has done it and he wants it applied to the damaged area. The water runs onto his broken hand and he screams in pain, after which he lies down on the ground, looks at the healed hand and says it barely hurts anymore. Rainbow skills are simply incredible. Although it appears that neither martial arts nor pharmacist is at a high enough level to be used comfortably, he still has to deal with the sword. He uses blacksmith and a board with 9 sectors opens in front of him. He places the hilt of the broken sword and 2 bull tusks onto it. In the end, he manages to create a sword and says it is good and it comes together in the shortest possible time with maximum durability. He reflects that the fight taught him his weapon is insufficient. After all of this, he has to find allies, because spinning the gacha means continuing to defeat new monsters. And if an opponent that strong turns up again, going into a fight alone is far too risky. With friends, they take turns keeping watch while one of them sleeps. Also, tactics are born in battle. Now, he originally lived in the upper world and was driven out by a ruthless human being. It is possible that innocent demi-humans still survive down here. Making friends with sinful humans and wild subraces like goblins is difficult. Perhaps some more advanced subrace, the kind that lives a long time or builds proper generations, would be willing to help. So from here on, he watches carefully for any demi-human trace at all, and the moment one turns up, he calls out to them. He thinks about that, and then with a distinctly tense expression, wonders how a person actually makes friends, because he has never once done anything like that in the upper world. How does anybody even do it? Then he remembers something, because there was one such person. The practice sword fights at the knighthood faculty, and how hard it was to fight her every single time. In fact, a considerable number of his sword skills came from her. He remembers the 2 of them training together without telling Ellis. Our boy wonders how she is doing now. What our boy does not know is that 400 miles above him, a letter from the Pope is about to make his name the most important one in that room. Meanwhile, in Recifal Castle, With an extremely displeased expression, she asks loudly why she is here. She says the name Mainu Mycelian out loud, and the girl looks back at her with a completely calm expression. She says calmly that she is here because the king called her, and asks whether she was called too. Ellis looks at her and thinks about who she is. Illegitimate daughter of the Mycelians, one of exactly 3 houses in Rakend carrying an archduke's title. Her own evaluation ritual handed her something extremely rare. She studies in the same night faculty as Cross, always finds something to talk to him about, and gets genuinely animated doing it. She spends more time with him at the academy than Ellis ever has. This is the girl she hates more than anybody alive. The eldest children of the Backhurst family come over to them with joyful faces. One of them says Ellis's name and tells her she is charming today, as always. She says calmly that this is indeed the case. His brother says Minue's name and asks whether she is the one who killed the monster that appeared in the city. What a magnificent achievement. She thanks him, and he asks whether protecting commoners is genuinely worth the effort, and whether a man as incomparable as himself might suit her as a groom, especially since his incompetent brother has vanished. An audience with the king is very boring, so the two of them could run away from here and go and enjoy themselves. Both women apologize and say with visible displeasure that somebody like him is not suitable as a replacement for the man she chose. She would ask him not to voice delusional maxims about being better than his own brother in future. Her power exists to protect all people. Commoner or aristocrat, it makes no difference to her. Although if he is ever the one in danger, perhaps she will reconsider her beliefs. Right away they say goodbye and go into the audience. In the hall, the king of Rakend, Recifal VII, addresses the representatives of the 3 archducal families and apologizes for summoning them this abruptly. The protagonist's father, wearing a joyful expression, asks what he is talking about, because the Backhurst family always rushes to His Majesty instantly at the first call. Minu's father remarks that, incidentally, about that monster which appeared not long ago, the Mycelian family dealt with it. Perhaps His Majesty has some comments. The king says no and that they handled it excellently. What he wants is to tell them in detail about a letter he received from the Pope. The head of the Knight detachment steps forward, opens the letter, and reads aloud. Concerning that mysterious monster which recently frightened the castle town. The contents of the divine dream were opened to him, and he sets them down here. By the word of God, the day on which monsters appear in enormous numbers is already close. The people hearing this become very worried. The reading continues. There is no need to worry, because the gods have already worked out how to counter those attacks. They will grant special skills for that purpose. Below are the 3 people who will hold them. So, first name on the list, Intercession of the Providence of the Holy Maiden, and it belongs to Ellis Rayfield. She is startled by what she hears. Her father praises her, and she thanks him for it. She reflects, smiling happily, that her skill was indeed far too powerful for a peaceful upper world. And it turns out of nowhere to be one of the rarest anti-monster skills in existence. Starting today, this very day, her heroic tale begins. The head of the detachment continues. Second name, Brave Strike, and it belongs to Minu Mycelian. She merely bows, and Ellis looks at her with visible displeasure, thinking that of course it is her again. Although it is fine, since Ellis has a rear support skill. If every vile, filthy monster is entrusted to that girl, she is perfectly content. Because working shoulder to shoulder with commoners and soldiers buys a person sympathy fast, and there is no avoiding it. If her life happens to end on a battlefield, where she is brutally killed. What the Backhurst family does not know is what the third name on that list is. The head of the detachment is about to read it out, and the eldest Backhurst sons are entirely certain it is one of them. And then to everybody's surprise comes a Gacha skill. The head of the Backhurst family becomes extremely worried when the MC's name is read out. Recifal smiles and says these 3 skills have come up in discussion more than once already. Are these not special skills used against monsters, considering they were bestowed on representatives of every ducal family? Moreover, according to the Pope's assumption, the future holds further wielders of anti-monster skills. Therefore, there is no need to fear a monster attack, because they will guarantee the safety of this country. Of course, he laughs loudly, and Ellis works out that apparently the king does not yet know what happened. So does this mean they now handle the monsters by themselves? What terrible mistake has the Backhurst family made? The king asks what they said about the third family, their 5th son. Where is he, and what is he doing now? The one with the Gacha skill is Cross of their house. Correct. The head of Backhurst, with a very worried expression, looks away and says that, in general terms, he has health problems. He does not get to finish, because the head of Rayfield steps forward, calls out to His Majesty and says the 5th son of that family will not be able to appear here. Recifal becomes slightly wary and asks what he means by that. He says it seems best to hear this firsthand from the head of the family, who says with genuine fear all over his face that his 5th son committed an offense and was exiled to the underworld. The king is genuinely stunned and asks loudly what he just said, because that son earned the special favor of the gods. What did he even do? He is extremely nervous about what is happening, and says in a confused voice that the offense was a very serious one. The king cuts him off and asks loudly what kind of offense justifies exiling a 15-year-old child to the underworld. Naturally, he cannot come up with an excuse, and Minu steps forward and says the boy committed no offense at all, because during the evaluation ritual, Duke Backhurst decided his 5th son was lying on the grounds that he could not demonstrate his skill and exiled him to the underworld for it. The king grabs his own head and asks how anybody could possibly do something that stupid. The head of the Backhurst clan is furious with her and says loudly that she interrupted somebody else's conversation and has the audacity to tell lies in this hall. The head of the Rayfield clan asks whether nearly everybody standing here was not present at the time. Besides which, does the letter that was just read not confirm that every word his son said was true? So the root of all of this is that he did not believe his own child. He denies it loudly in a worried voice, and Ellis decides he has it coming. Her father calls out to His Majesty and says that before this country finds itself in a critical situation, he would dare to offer his opinion on how difficult all of it has become. His family will go and search for the fifth son of the Backhurst clan and relieve him of that particular worry. The king calls that encouraging news, and the man says that, with permission, he would also like to offer advice. Permission granted, he adjusts his glasses and asks whether, should they succeed in bringing the fifth son home, that son could be appointed head of the Backhurst family. The Backhurst patriarch is stunned and demands to know whether the man is joking. Transfer the right of succession to a fifth son. The head of the Rayfield family says that is precisely why he wanted to consult His Majesty first. Besides which, it has to be done, or bringing him back becomes considerably harder. Recifel asks what he means by that. He names the protagonist and says the boy was called a liar without cause, handled like a criminal, and thrown down into the underworld. His own family was genuinely cruel to him. So if another mistake is made here, there is a genuine chance he decides to take revenge on the country itself, which is why passing the title to him by inheritance, raising him above the very relatives who designed his unfair punishment, hands him the chance to bury the hatchet personally. The head of the Backhurst family is extremely nervous about this, calls out to His Majesty, and begs loudly to be forgiven. The king, entirely serious, asks whether the purpose of their lives is protecting this country or whether he is mistaken about that. Since the offer came with a condition attached, the title, he intends to fulfill that condition. And just like that, the man drops to his knees in despair. And Ellis understands everything, because using her relationship as the pretext, her father is planning to seize the power of two ducal houses at once. Succeed, and he becomes more influential than the king. Perhaps, before very long, that family even reaches for the throne. Except this is a story about how the two of them build their wonderful relationship. Whatever her father is scheming does not matter, because thanks to it she might see him again. And if she meets him, she needs to apologize for every part of what happened. Meanwhile, in the lower world, the MC opens the gacha and says he acquired the gold skill Magic Imbuement, presumably a technique for putting additional properties into weapons and defenses. He wants to try it immediately and uses it on his sword. A system window opens saying a sword made from ox tusk can be imbued with one type of ability. Option 1, the hidden power of an ox tusk, meaning increased durability, with a tusk ox magic stone as the consumable. Option 2, the slashing technique, which spends magical power to produce a slashing blow, with a monster magic stone as the item used. He reads that and says both abilities interest him, and he only gets one. In the end, he takes the slashing technique, besides which, it looks cool. He clicks to confirm, and then his attention goes to a smell nearby. In the end, he follows it out of the forest and reaches the sea. He comes to the shore and says the sea down here is exactly like the sea up above, and the distance is wrapped in fog. Now the world is shrouded in fog. That is humanity's generally accepted position on the matter, and nobody knows what lies on the far side of it. Studies have been organized any number of times, and every one of them failed, because the ships never came back. Gradually, people stopped even thinking about reaching the other side. Walking on, he finds a pier and notes that there are no boats anywhere near it. Did the people who fished here for a living move somewhere else? Or did something happen and they simply could not return? Although the reason hardly matters, he sits on the edge of the pier, casts a line into the sea, and says, smiling, that all this time he has had nothing but meat and fruit. Sometimes a man wants seafood as well. What our boy does not know is what has been swimming toward that pier for the last minute. He notices a bite and pulls. Sadly, a monster comes up out of the sea at him. Our boy is genuinely surprised by that and asks loudly whether that is a Sahagan. The thing lands on the pier, screams, and attacks him with its spear. Our boy dodges and counterattacks immediately with his sword. The monster dodges too, and blocks his way off the pier. He finds that frivolous, since nothing is going to approach him along a bridge this narrow, so he decides to test his new skill, uses the slashing technique, and sends a wave of magical energy off the blade. It opens a deep wound across the monster's body, after which he jumps straight at it and runs it through. He receives 200 points for the Sahagan, and says that once his level climbs, one blow might be enough. Even at the second level of fishing, he should be able to catch something decent. Still, he looks at the sea, and notices a great many monsters coming toward him. He looks at the system window with visible displeasure and says he genuinely thought he was finally getting his hands on seafood. The protagonist sees that this monster's meat is edible, and says he refuses to eat it regardless of what the window claims. After that, he fishes a while longer, catches no fish whatsoever, and accumulates nothing except more points. Meanwhile, Recifel calls Duke Rayfield over and puts the hunt for that missing fifth Backhurst son into his hands. He says His Majesty can rely on him. Then the current head of the Mycelian family calls to the king and says they will help with that search as well. The king turns and asks whether his family is joining too. He agrees, and adds that they will even put his brave daughter Mainu into the search. People around them start worrying at that, and the king asks him loudly to wait, because who exactly defends the country then? His daughter's skill is, after all, an invincible power. If an enormous number of monsters attacks while she is away, he says the one they are looking for is currently in the lower world. He has been in a far more dangerous position than any of them for this entire time. In a situation like that, there is no time to waste. Is it not obvious what comes first? Recifal considers it and says there is some truth in that. He says her name and asks whether she agrees to this. She smiles and agrees with His Majesty and says they can leave it to her. He finds her manner very sweet and says that is fine, and he is relying on her. With that, everybody is free to go. Ellis asks whether he might perhaps allow her to join the search as well, because she also acquired a skill, and her body has gained incredible power. Besides which, she is engaged to him, so a better candidate simply cannot be found. He thinks about it and says that indeed it is hard to argue with. She reflects that this is true, and that she is by now already his ex-fiancée. Then Minyu raises a hand, calls out to His Majesty and says this is not the best idea, because he always told her that this woman drove him into a corner with insolent, rude behavior. Ellis becomes very worried about what she is hearing and starts loudly asking her to shut up. She does not listen and says with a completely serious expression that if he unexpectedly runs into that woman, he most likely tries to run away in fear, in which case getting him back becomes even harder. Moreover, in the worst case, he takes his own life. Ellis gets angrier still, covers the girl's mouth with both hands and loudly demands silence. She starts dragging her backward, and the king calls to her and asks whether what she said is true. Ellis becomes nervous about that, and Minyu gets out of her grip thinking that whatever he said to her privately was certainly a lie, and suspicious even so. Ellis says it is a fact that she is sometimes rude in the way she speaks to him, although there was a reason for that, because even though the two of them were engaged, this girl was constantly making eyes at him. The king takes her side, which makes Ellis laugh privately, with a distinctly evil grin. And then, entirely unexpectedly for her, Minyu says that is not true. She only ever spoke to him as a friend, and if that was how Ellis felt, discussing it with her in person would have been enough. Except she was also constantly lashing out at him and taking her anger out on him. Ellis looks at her with visible displeasure and asks whether she did not pay her enough attention. Except she would not listen to her, so she had to talk to him instead. The two of them start arguing with each other, ignoring Recifal's attempts to say anything at all, which begins to make him angry. He asks them, loudly, to stop and says, looking worried, that it does not matter which of them does it, they simply return him as quickly as possible. Right away they leave, and Minyu asks how exactly she intends to get him back. She turns to her with visible displeasure and says she will persuade him, because her father has already prepared an excellent gift. She asks whether that means he gets granted a title on his return. Ellis laughs loudly, entirely confident, and says it is wonderful that her father came up with the idea of having him made head of the family. Minyu sighs at that and says that indeed this woman knows nothing about him, because what he has always wanted is freedom. Ellis, displeased, calls her annoying out loud, and says that once he is a duke he manages the house, and the money however he likes. She smirks back and says that particular arrangement is not going to make him happy, although whatever she says next is presumably going to be no use at all. Ellis is furious about that, and Minyu turns, starts walking away and says goodbye. She asks her, loudly, to wait, and gets ignored completely. Left alone in that hallway, she asks, thoroughly confused, what this freedom is supposed to be. Meanwhile, in the lower world, the MC looks at the pile of skills Gacha has handed him, and says that today is April 30th, which is the deadline. Last day available for mastering the Gacha skill, so he has been spinning 11 times daily, and more than one rainbow skill came out of it. He worked out that the maximum level for a rainbow skill is 3, and that leveling one up requires pulling 4 copies of the same skill. Since he has come this far already, he may as well take the cultivation skill. He gets it, the one he needs for maxing out, and he is delighted and announces that every rainbow skill he owns is now at maximum level. Later, he stands at the entrance to his cave and asks whether he is genuinely parting with this place today. Because yesterday, after a spin, he finally got the silver construction skill, which means he finally fulfills his cherished wish and builds his own house. He has even picked the spot. Cross arrives where he already gathered the materials and says the place sits on a small hill with a beautiful view. There is a river nearby for fishing, plus convenient access to areas where his research has not reached yet. Time to get started. He activates construction and a variety of house plans opens in front of him. He looks at them and says the skill is level 1, so the design and the size are going to be modest, although he is planning to live alone anyway, so it hardly matters. The materials go into the build in advance, so all he does is choose one. The room layout is likewise chosen in advance, which is excellent. Naturally, he clicks the option he wants and the house he chose is built in front of him immediately. The MC is honestly surprised by how fast that was, walks up and says the walls are strong. It appears this protects him from attacks by weaker monsters. Within seconds he is inside looking around and says everything in here is also quite well made. The curtains are monster fur, and the window glass came from coastal sand. There is even a kitchen stove, which is the thing he always wanted. Using cooking skills means the food is done instantly, and it tastes worse than food cooked by hand. Since there's nothing else to do down here beyond research and earning points, he got thoroughly carried away with cooking. Our boy lies down on his bed and asks out loud with a joyful expression what this is, because he now owns a bed made of fanged sheep wool. Is that not warmer than the one in his parents' house? Later, he looks at the calendar, then opens the gacha window. He looks at it and thinks about how this is where all of it started. Before the next month arrives, he checks his stats again. He opens the window and reads it off. Strength sits at 130, endurance at 123, agility at 102, intelligence at 124, and magical ability at 155. By now he has accumulated 50,000 points. 40,000 of those are spent, and the number of gacha rotations has already reached 88. 10,000 points are left, and that is fine. He looks at the window and says that a man exiled over a loser gacha skill now has 30 skills. How did he lose his sense of reality this fast? Which is how a beautiful house came to exist. Life without skills is something he can no longer picture. Perhaps a man with no emotional connection to another living soul simply loses his sense of the world being real. Incidentally, expert assessment and healing sit in the same category. So what happens if taming and raising monsters is also something a skill can do? May starts tomorrow, and perhaps the new gacha carries options along those lines. The protagonist goes to bed and asks whether circumstances are genuinely going to be that favorable. Who knows? Perhaps the next gacha comes with restrictions of its own. In the worst case, unused points are lost. Still, spending all of them would be better. Perhaps he receives a notification about that in May. Because this bed really is far too warm. It is as though it were built specifically to turn a person into a useless, lazy creature. Meanwhile, in the residence of the Duke of Backhurst, the disgruntled children discuss the evaluation ceremony and the recent audience with the king. That idiot has now disgraced them twice. Does it matter what he says, given he is cursing the next head of the family? It does not frighten him in the slightest. He never teased him, so why would the boy want revenge on him? After all, he was simply following orders. Father slams a fist onto the table and tells all of them to be quiet. Because who goes looking for him now? That is what gets decided first. Of course, the brothers start arguing quietly among themselves about who has to go down there. Then Albert raises a hand, calls to his father and says he will go. The man is glad to hear it and asks loudly whether he genuinely means it. He says, grinning enormously, that he has a secret plan. He will see. He definitely brings him back. What Albert does not know is what his brother has been doing with his afternoons down there. Sometime later he meets the knights, who are looking at what he is holding, and he asks whether that is a slave collar. He confirms it, and says that whoever wears it obeys every order without question, except it is a weapon meant for criminals, and if his brother finds out he intends to use it, he cuts the man off and asks whether he is trying to tell him what to do now. Perhaps he burns him instead. The knights are extremely frightened by that. After which they arrive at the gate, and they say this is the gate connecting the upper world with the lower one, although entry only happens through the tunnel, and he needs to be careful. Because the lower world is so overflowing with magical power that it not only blocks movement, it strengthens the bodies of demons while they transform. He says they had better keep quiet. He is taking 20 Backhurst knights with him. He does not know whether it will be goblins or wolves, and in any case those are small monsters. He reflects that this looks more like overkill than anything else. With that many people, finding his brother is going to be extremely easy, because every one of his brothers is incompetent. There's an enormous opportunity sitting right in front of them and nobody wants to take it. Put a slave collar on his brother, run him like a puppet, and everything the family owns falls under his hand. He orders them forward, loudly, and the knights agree just as loudly. Meanwhile, the MC wakes up and says out loud that it is morning, which means May has arrived. He opens the system window and asks loudly what is in the gacha. He goes outside and says he has 10,000 points. That is 22 spins, and spinning 11 at once means a rainbow skill. He presses the button, takes the skills and says, surprised, that he got a silver skill, demon evolution technique, and a rainbow skill. Summoner. The window says demon evolution technique promotes the evolution of his demons. Summoner summons his demons to a location of his choosing. The protagonist reads that and asks whether both skills are obviously useless if he cannot control demons in the first place. Although panicking is premature, he simply needs to learn how to control them. He presses the button again and says the May gacha has officially begun. He spins once more and receives demon manual, summoning, and using demons. The MC says delighted that he now has the entire set. It appears demon use is the one that actually lets him control them. Incidentally, he learns something at the academy about how a person gets demons to join him. Later, Cross meets a goblin, starts punching it, and reflects that the only way to make a demon join you is to attack it slowly and lovingly without killing it. After which you tell it how badly you want it to join you. What kind of loving attack is this supposed to be? It is so slow and painful. Then he remembers Albert hitting him, panics badly, and puts a heavy punch into the goblin. To nobody's surprise, it flies several meters backward. He starts getting nervous about that and wonders whether he has actually killed it. Then he notices hearts floating above the goblin's head and asks what those are, because he has never seen anything like it in his life. Not that it matters much, because he needs to hurry. He uses demon taming. The monster stops being aggressive toward him and stands up, and the system reports that the goblin female has become his follower. He is glad it worked, and says he genuinely thought he had killed her. Incidentally, is she a woman? The goblin raises a hand and makes a strange noise, and he sits down and says he is very tired. He holds out a hand to her and says the first thing they do is shake on it. Naturally, she swats the hand away. He tells her that when somebody offers a hand, this is what she does with it. And just like that, she keeps hitting the hand. He says loudly that he explained it. Like this? Not hitting. The goblin jumps, waving both arms, and he asks loudly whether she seriously cannot retain this. Of course, he uses a praise, sees that she has 1 point of intelligence, and says she really is stupid. He works so hard to tame her, and then this, which frightens him badly because he remembers his brothers saying that useless people are not needed in this world. He should not forget that they can kill him at any moment. Thinking about all of that, he holds his hand out to the goblin again, and strokes her head instead, and says the two of them will learn. Right away, she makes a joyful noise, and he says she gave him the same answer. The protagonist decides, smiling, that she is not useless at all. He is going to make an excellent warrior out of her. He decides to test the summoning skill on her and teleports her a few meters away. The goblin starts looking around in total confusion, and he laughs and says her reaction is funny. At that speed, it works for surprise attacks. She runs back to him and starts making delighted noises. He asks what is wrong, and whether she liked that. Then he hears a sound and immediately starts looking around. She keeps making noise and he decides he imagined it and tells her he understands. Meanwhile, Albert kills a goblin with his sword, grinds his teeth in anger and demands to know what is wrong with these people. Why did they suffer that badly against goblins? He grabs one of the knights, calls the observation squad over, and says he was fairly certain he told them to keep that skill running permanently. The knight apologizes, extremely worried, and says the concentration of magical energy here makes detecting anything difficult, not only his brother but demons as well. On top of which, using it without cause wastes energy. He starts hitting him, calls him a useless freak, and says he does not want to hear excuses. He keeps taking his anger out on that knight, thinking about how unpleasantly all of this has turned out. The knights fought worse than usual. He calms down and asks how many are seriously injured. Sadly, another knight says only 6, although everybody took wounds in that fight, so they will have to head back. Albert does not listen and says they are in a hurry, so anybody who cannot move gets left behind. If those men are still alive when he comes back, they take them too. To nobody's surprise, the knights agree, looking thoroughly confused. And he, displeased, wonders how he is supposed to return home after this, because they just lost to goblins. If he does not bring his brother back, his own position is in danger. Several indignant knights come to him and say loudly that they no longer want to follow him. He has to release them. He turns around sharply and puts his sword through one knight's head in a single blow. The others are frightened by that, and he asks in a genuinely frightening tone who exactly they think their leader is. Disobey, and the same thing happens to them. Understood? They are very frightened by that. And then one of them calls out and says they have found something that looks like human footprints. He comes over with that knight and notices the tracks are fairly fresh. The knight asks whether those are his brothers. He says he does not know what his brother's tracks look like, and they are about the right size. Fine. They go this way. Meanwhile, the MC and the goblin are standing in front of a female wolf who is wagging her tail at them, and he says that means she wants to join as well. He opens the characteristics window and asks out loud and surprised whether she genuinely has 20 points of intelligence. She is quite smart. The goblin points at herself and makes a lot of noise, and he asks whether she wants him to look at her window too. He agrees to look and finds a line saying the demon can be given a name. He reads it and says that now the three of them are on the same team. Not having names is going to be inconvenient. Fine. He gives her one. A system window with a keyboard opens in front of him, and he says that from now on this goblin's name is Goblia. Immediately after which her body changes, which surprises him enormously, and he asks whether she just evolved. He wonders whether that is the effect of the demon evolution technique he picked up. Did the stats window go up as well? The wolf barks, and he says that is right. She needs a name too. He pictures how she might evolve and decides that does not appear to work. He writes down the name Rufna, and magical energy wraps around her, and she grows taller. Within seconds, he lifts her up with a joyful expression and says how cool she is. Then he calls both of them by name and says that from this day forward, the three of them live in this world together. They are his irreplaceable companions. He hugs them and says that now it is genuinely nice to meet them. Fine. It is already dark, so they head home. Except his monsters sense something, turn sharply, and stare in one direction with wary faces. They are growling angrily at somebody, and Cross asks worried what just happened to them. Is there something out there? Still, he sees a silhouette in the forest, is shocked by it, and understands because that barely audible sound earlier was a human scream. That is where the scream came from. This is his father's second son. Albert. He says his name with an enormous grin and says he has finally found him. Now our boy remembers an earlier day when he and his brothers beat him and killed his dog, and the man said loudly that he is simply an insolent owner of some animals, so he had better go and get rid of that corpse. He walked over, took a fistful of his hair, pulled his head up and told him he clearly has no idea where his place is. Murderers do not get to have things. That is the rule. He is the only person he has ever forgiven, and every remaining day of his life happens underneath that boot. At the present time, our boy looks at his brother's grin and asks himself why the second son of the Backers family is standing down here. That face becomes friendlier, and he says his name and tells him he has been looking for him for so long. He genuinely thought he had died. This day appears to be the happiest of his life. Our boy stands rooted in place and asks why he came. Albert is surprised by that and asks whether he is not happy to see his brother. He ought to be happy, because he came here to take him home. He apologizes for driving him out. It was only a joke. He says indignant that this is very funny, given he nearly died of jokes like that. He asks, smiling enormously, whether he is not still alive. So what exactly is the problem? He should not be such a cynic. He looks at him slyly and thinks about what a surprise this is, because he understands how he feels. Right now, he is clearly not angry. He is frightened. He and his brothers put fear and despair into that boy from birth and made absolutely certain he would never be able to resist them. Rare skill or not, it does not matter. Obey him and everything is fine. He turns to the knights and says angrily that if even one of them is afraid of this demon, he kills them. They agree. Then he goes to his brother and asks whether he has animals again. Rufna starts barking at him and he asks why he needs them, since he is going to die again shortly. The MC says, frightened, that he did not kill him. He starts to say something, and Albert cuts him off and says that he is exactly the one who killed him, because that dog died from being too weak. He is irresponsible, so taking care of demons is beyond him. He tells him to follow, and our boy says loudly that he is not going home. He is surprised and turns around, and he says, hesitating, that he has decided he lives here, and he would like this man to leave. Cross keeps a confident appearance up, and is instantly terrified when the man raises his voice and says he clearly still does not understand. What is he even saying? He should be considerably more respectful. Idiot. That frightens him badly. He drops to his knees and asks loudly what he is even doing out here. This demon has already gotten on his nerves, so he orders it to be silent. Otherwise, he silences it himself with his sword. He asks forgiveness in a genuinely frightened voice, and Albert, grinning enormously, decides the trauma switch has been thrown, which is his secret. That brain is under so much strain that it can no longer think coherently. Rufna barks furiously at the knights trying to approach him, and they find it terrifying. Although not approaching means the master kills them immediately. The demons are about to attack, and then Cross asks them loudly to stop. They turn around and he says very frightened that if they do not listen to his brother beats him. Albert starts laughing loudly at that and says he put it exactly right and all he ever had to do was obey. He comes closer and says loudly that this is because he is incompetent and unworthy of being alive. Disobey one more time, and the beating happens again. He decides, grinning, that this is excellent because the boy has closed up completely and becomes simply perfect. He did not even need the slave collar, because from the very beginning that boy has been wearing a collar nobody can remove. He orders him taken away, and the knights put shackles on him and start leading him off. Goblia goes toward him and makes a sound, and a knight steps in and tells her she cannot come that close to him. He hits her hard with his fist and shoves her aside. Meanwhile, she looks at them with visible displeasure, and then sees something that surprises her, because the protagonist is looking at them with tears in his eyes, silently asking to be forgiven. He told her the two of them were friends now. He said he would make a great warrior out of her. He is so sorry for being this useless. What the knights do not know is that a goblin with 1 point of intelligence has just understood something none of them have, because she runs up to him and makes a loud noise several times. She runs around him still making noise, and he asks, confused, what she is doing. Immediately after which she runs off and jumps into the bushes. He is shocked by that, and the knights remark on how easily she let go. Their friendship ended remarkably fast. He wonders whether these are his last memories of his friends, whether he ever sees them again, whether he ever obtains new rare skills, whether this is genuinely his destiny. Rufna walks up to him and bites his cloak to stop him. He asks her, worried, to stop, and says that behaving like this gets her beaten too. Better for her to run away from here and go somewhere else. He wants to say something more. Albert gets angry about it and says loudly that this is unbearable. He says his name in a serious tone and tells him he has to kill this dog. Do that, and he will accept that the boy is not incompetent. He had better hurry, or the man kills her for him, and he stays exactly as useless as he was. He keeps crying, thinking that he cannot kill her. Except not doing it means another beating. The knights hear loud noises and decide those are goblins. He knocks the MC to the ground with a blow, calls him a useless freak, and asks whether he is the one who called them here. He drives them off immediately. He lies on the ground thinking that he knew he would get hit regardless. Wait. He cannot hear that voice anymore, and his mind feels clear. He also feels Rufna's warmth beside him, and he can hear Goblia's voice distinctly. Incidentally, he has heard that particular tone from her before. That is right, she was carried away by something at the time. She moved a certain way, and she has good reactions and good speed. Luckily, he gets an idea, sits up and says her name out loud. His thoughts start straightening out and he activates summoning. She appears directly in front of Albert, who is extremely surprised by that. In the end, she reacts to the situation instantly, and with a furious expression, drives a fist into his head. He flies into the nearest tree and thoroughly confused wonders what just happened. Some monster simply appeared out of nowhere. She runs to Cross with a joyful expression, and he says her name out loud. He asks, delighted, whether she planned that from the very beginning. He pats her head and says how clever she is. Albert demands to know loudly where he thinks he is going. He faces him. He fights. He is not worthy of being a member of that family. He is nobody. Our boy turns the shackles into a sword and says that, exactly as the man put it, he never was his brother and never will be. He points the sword at him, says his name out loud, and tells him he is only his enemy. He grabs the blade of his own sword with a furious expression and says loudly that he can try. He jumps back, and Albert says that this time he finally stamps the consequences of disobedience into his mind. He calls the knights loudly and orders that monster killed immediately. Why is nobody moving? They remain knights. Correct? They follow his orders, even orders that require killing somebody. They gather their resolve, run forward, and shout. Of course, Goblia and Rufna beat every one of them without difficulty. He is shocked by that, and the protagonist asks whether he genuinely thought an attack on them would rattle him. His subordinates were alarmed simply by the sound of their voices. Also, that scream from earlier was presumably a demon attack. They exceed those men in raw strength. Albert becomes furious, insults him loudly, and tells him not to get overconfident. He creates 2 fireballs, laughs, and says he is finished, because his fire magic skill has reached level 5, which is the best in this world, and simply cannot lose. He throws the fireballs, and our boy uses earth magic, and puts a wall up in front of himself. He is shocked by that and wonders how many skills this man has. He needs to calm down, because no quantity of skills defeats his fire magic. He says loudly that it is only a wall of earth and continuous strikes break it easily. The problem is he attacks it with magic a great many times, exhausts himself, and asks why it will not break. Is his earth magic above level 5? The MC says no, and tells him it is level 3. He is startled by that and asks confused how that is even possible. Is this another advantage of the divine skill gacha? Our boy asks whether he just called it a divine skill. Perhaps that is the real reason he came for it. He starts getting nervous and says the gacha skill was granted to him by God in order to save the upper world, because demons have been appearing up there frequently lately. They say it is an omen of what is coming. He kneels down and asks loudly for him to come home with him, so the 2 of them can save the upper world. He is deeply unhappy about all of this and thinks that bowing to a useless creature like this is the single most humiliating thing he has ever done. He simply has to be patient, since all that remains is waiting for the right moment to get the slave collar onto him. Cross walks over, calls him brother, and tells him to look at him. What Albert does not know is that the frightened boy stopped being frightened several minutes ago. So he raises his head with a surprised expression, and at that exact moment the sword goes into his shoulder. He screams in pain, and our boy says entirely serious that he is only down here because they drove him out. What happens to this man is of no interest to him. He keeps screaming in pain and understands that his brother genuinely wants to kill him. He asks what that look is supposed to mean. Does he genuinely think anybody believes a word out of him after this? He says loudly and in a worried voice that their father is very sorry about all of it and that he will hand him the duchy. Every scrap of power and property the family holds goes into his hands. Naturally, he puts the sword into his leg and says he does not need it. Albert screams in pain, and our boy looks at that suffering and asks himself what he is doing, because a damaged leg means the man never gets home. No, better to simply kill him here. Goblia takes hold of the hem of his clothing and makes a sound. He comes back to himself, uses water magic on the man, and heals the wounds he just put into him. He turns around, says his name, and tells him he lost. He goes back to the upper world and reports it. He does not interfere with him again, because next time there is no sparing him. He starts walking away, thinking that killing would make him no different from the man on the ground. He is not a member of the Backhurst family anymore. What our boy does not know is that his brother has one more thing in his pocket. He walks over to his summoned monsters and says, smiling, that it is time the 3 of them left. Albert grins like a lunatic and thinks about what an idiot the boy is. He takes the collar out of his pocket and reflects that he genuinely believes he won this. Except there is one more card in his hand. He turned his back on him. He becomes his slave and regrets it for the rest of his life. And just like that, he starts walking toward him. And at that exact moment, several goblins jump him from behind. The protagonist turns around at the noise, and the man is shouting loudly that they should let go of him. Let them stop. Why are they undressing him? Do they think they get away with this? What are those stones for? Sadly, the goblins tie his hands and break his legs with large rocks. He screams in pain, and our boy walks away thinking about something he learned at the academy. Because goblins in mating season will attack a member of another race of the opposite gender. Perhaps they attack him too. One of the goblins turns to them and gives a thumbs up, and Goblia answers with a smile. Within seconds, the goblins pick Albert up in their arms and carry him off at speed, after which he sits down on a stump and says he genuinely does not know whether that counts as a good ending or a bad one. His friends bring him fruit, and he thanks them and asks whether they picked all of this for him. He starts eating, looks up, and asks whether gacha is genuinely a divine skill, because he considers it a hellish skill, and he could not begin to imagine it saving the upper world. He wonders what happens up there if he is not present when it matters, because if demons attack them, Ellis is unlikely to manage anything. He feels sorry for Minyu, since she has to deal with that woman alone. His friends notice he has gone somewhere in his head and start making noise, and he asks their forgiveness. He says they should not be frightened, because he is not going anywhere. He is sorry they had to sit through that. He says Goblia's name and remarks that the goblin appeared to give her some sort of signal back there. She becomes embarrassed and turns away, and he says this day has been so long. Now they go home. They are delighted about that and start walking, and then hear an extremely loud noise. He looks off to one side, slightly wary, and asks whether that is a monster. This is not good, because he wants to get home as fast as possible. He genuinely does not want to end up in trouble. He should look into it with a skill. Of course, he uses the all-seeing technique and finds a bull standing in front of a person. Our boy is surprised by that, and registers a genuinely strange feeling about it. What Cross does not know is who is standing on the other side of that noise. Meanwhile, the girl hits the monster with her sword, does very little damage, and drops the blade. The bull produces an enormous roar. She is badly frightened, and then she hears a loud sound. She opens her eyes and sees the MC, who has blocked the monster's attack with his sword. He turns to her and says he is going to help her. Does she understand him? She agrees, confused, and he calls to his friends and asks them to help. They beat the bull together, and the girl says she is grateful they helped her. He says it is fine and there is no need for thanks. She appears to be dizzy. Is everything all right? She tries to say something and cannot, and starts breathing heavily. He looks at her and notices she has gone completely pale, so she needs to wait a moment. He uses appraisal, sees she is poisoned with a deadly poison, and says worried that she should hold on because he is making medicine right now. He makes it, hands it over, and tells her to drink, because it helps. Luckily, she drinks it, feels better, and says it is delicious, and the unpleasant feeling has gone. The MC calls that excellent news, and then wonders whether she is human. Because when he used that skill, he felt neither human energy nor demonic energy off her. He asks, slightly confused, whether she is not human. She takes off her hood and asks whether she looks human. In the end, she is the Goblin Queen. Now, sometimes creatures of a non-human race are born with mutations that hand them special abilities, and those individuals are called kings and queens, and their purpose is continuing and protecting the race. He learned that at the academy. And this non-human girl, she says worried that there is something she needs to ask of him. Would he help her save the village she comes from? He asks what she means. She says there is a village at the foot of this mountain where she lives, and today it was attacked out of nowhere by poisonous creatures. They got rid of them, and a great many villagers were poisoned regardless. She bows and says loudly that every one of them dies if help does not arrive in time. She asks him to save them. She is extremely nervous waiting for an answer, and Cross says moving through a forest in darkness, this heavy is too dangerous. He uses light magic which startles her, and asks how many villagers are poisoned. She looks at him and says about 10. He thinks it over and says they will need to buy antidote ingredients on the way. She asks whether that means he is helping them. He says he sees no reason to refuse, and he saves them whatever it costs. She is genuinely moved by that, and he calls his friends over and asks whether they mind walking a little further. Right away they make agreeing noises, and she says loudly that she is deeply grateful and will never forget their kindness. He says it is not a great deal, although it appears he will have to ask for something in return. She listens and asks whether he needs land and labor. He says he would like to build a new base in their village. Also that somebody keeps it clean while he is away. What does she think? She says, with a delighted expression, that they can provide all of that for him. She is certain everybody in the village will be glad to have him. He says in that case they should get moving. She asks confused whether he could tell her his name. He is surprised, having only now remembered that he never introduced himself, after which he gives his name and the names of his friends and asks for hers. She says delighted that her name is Livia. She is not very strong, and she would be happy to work with him. Meanwhile, in the upper world, in the bathhouse, Minyu asks whether she heard that Albert Bockhurst went down to the lower world the other day. Ellis does not know who that is, so she is told it is her ex-fiancé's brother. Did she genuinely not know that? She says she is not interested in anybody except her fiancé, and in any case the word ex is unnecessary here. Minyu says the Mycelian family was also planning to send troops down, and since the number of demons has risen dramatically, protecting the upper world became the priority, which is why the two of them are here. Ellis says she wants this over as soon as possible. Why is this place shared? So that boy, has anybody brought him back yet? She says no, and that they appear to have lost sight of him, although they are already on his trail. She asks whether the report she just received concerns the Backhurst family somehow. She reflects delighted that what she is receiving means he is still alive. Ellis turns and asks why she is this tense. They can take their time, because the chosen ones out of the Rayfield army will certainly bring him back. Does she agree? Minyu climbs out of the bath and asks why she should care. He is not coming back regardless of what any of them do. The only thing worrying her is that life in the lower world is extremely uncomfortable. Ellis looks at her and asks whether she is planning to swap places with him, although things down there are not that simple. She agrees with that and says doing it might mean never coming back. Meanwhile, Livia counts out 10 poisonous bee needles and 5 poisonous snake fangs. That should be enough. She bows and says she is grateful to them for helping her gather materials, although she dumped every part of this on them and everybody else. The protagonist says that since she only just recovered from being ill, she should stop worrying. It appears Goblia and Rufna wanted the fight. The three of them travel together, and he reflects that he never had an experience this painful in the upper world, and now it is behind him. The gacha skill really is good. Changing that means continuing to enslave monsters. It is often difficult for him because certain skills simply cannot be used alone. Later they reach the village and the villagers notice her. They call out to her, loudly, and say they are extremely glad she is safe. She disappeared so suddenly. Does she understand how worried every one of them was? Livia apologizes and asks whether she did not leave them a note. The goblins say loudly that they were so worried about this. What exactly was she thinking going out there alone while poisoned? She points off to one side with a joyful expression and says they can lecture her later. Moreover, this man cured her of the poisoning. One of the goblins asks loudly who this savior is, who performed the miracle. They see the MC and ask loudly whether that is a human and what a human is doing here. She says loudly that they should calm down, because this is not simply a man, this is a savior. The goblins say her name and point out that humans are the ones who banished them to the lower world. She says the past cannot be changed, and that right now the priority is saving the lives of the villagers. They listen to her, and take him to a small building where the goblins hit by the poison are lying. She says Gobzo's name and tells him everything will be fine, and he has to drink this. He drinks the antidote, sits up and says he feels better. His wife is delighted and hugs him, and the other goblins say it genuinely is a miracle. They apologize for the disrespect. He is the true savior of their village. He cured every one of them. Livia calls to them and says that once the treatment is finished, they move on. Gobzo should rest a while. The goblins turn to her and ask loudly whether it was her, right? Does she always do this? This time was far too selfish. She apologizes for it. Later they come to her house and she says a guest space exists as well so he can put himself in there. What she would actually like is to hold a proper welcome dinner for them, although she has to answer for leaving the village first. Cross says he is grateful she lent him a bed. He is impressed not only by the outside but by the interior. Although the bed is simply fallen leaves, he notices everybody is already asleep and says he had better lie down too, because that was nothing except fighting from morning to night. He needs a break. He creates a glass cup and an energy potion. He starts drinking it and reflects that skills do not activate if he takes his time over their names. Even looking back on it now, at the same time, he cannot afford to sit around thinking about creating items. He tries to put the fire out with magic and says nothing changed. He lies down on the bed and says it is time to sleep. He starts drifting off, turning over what happened, and recognizing that there are still a great many terms whose meanings he does not know. The next day, the protagonist creates a house, which astonishes the goblins who say a thing like that can be built in an instant. Its structure and complexity match the leader's own house, exactly. He turns to them and says that, incidentally, he was thinking of rebuilding the houses damaged during the attack. Is it acceptable if their houses come out like this? They are delighted, and he asks whether they know when those creatures might attack again. She walks over to him and says he is genuinely amazing. He turns to her and says it is only his skill. He notices the knife in her hand and asks whether she is cooking. To nobody's surprise, she agrees happily and says she decided to lend him a hand. He walks on and says that is a baby crab, which is especially good made into sashimi, and the remains make a wonderful soup. Still, she looks at him, puzzled, and asks what that is. The other goblins do not understand either, and he explains that cooking meat this way develops the flavor, and salt should also go in. She says she did not even know anything like this existed. Then she tries what he cooked, is surprised, and says it is very tasty. The taste is excellent. Our boy is honestly glad to hear it, and she says he knows a great many things, and on top of that he knows how to use this iron bowl. Nobody in the village even knew about it. His attention goes to the goblins, who are shouting that he needs to regulate the water temperature. He should be quiet, because concentrating in noise like this is difficult. The MC looks at them and asks whether that goblin can use magic. Livia agrees and says they can use certain other magic skills as well, although he is the only one who can use water magic. He says, smiling, that in that case a bath would take some load off their mage. She asks, slightly surprised, what that is. He uses blacksmithing and creates a bath, and she says surprised. So that is what it is. Although how is a person supposed to use it? He looks at all of them, confused, and wonders what exactly is wrong with this village. When night falls, he comes to Goblia and Rufna, who are standing beside the house, and asks whether the two of them genuinely live in a kennel like that. They make contented noises, and he says that in the end they really are monsters. He wonders whether they will settle down in a place this quiet. He lies down on his bed with a delighted expression and says he has not slept on a bed this soft in a very long time. It is like floating in the air. Although if Livia lets him rebuild her house, he would like a more comfortable bed than this. He wonders whether sashimi and soup are genuinely unusual things for them. Obviously, he does not want to think about them with prejudice, and it is simply strange. Cross hears a knock at the door, and she calls to him and asks whether he is asleep. He recognizes the voice and says he is still awake. Meanwhile, hearing that, she comes straight in, and he is extremely surprised when he sees her, because she is deeply embarrassed about the translucent clothing she is wearing, and he asks whether something happened. She kneels in front of him and says that the village head owes him thanks for every single thing he has done here. Thanks to him, the standard of living here has risen significantly. He says, confused, that the two of them still have their whole lives ahead of them. She stands up and says she is the leader, and protecting this village is her responsibility. Still, this cannot go on any longer, or she becomes the reason all of them die. He says, confused, that she should not be this pessimistic. She climbs onto his bed and says she has one request. He becomes extremely embarrassed and starts to say something, and she says his name and asks whether he could marry her. He is thoroughly thrown by that, and wonders what he was thinking, asking himself why she was dressed like that. Because sharing a bed with a man at night is apparently nothing special here. Nobody teaches this in noble houses, and she wants to do things like that. She becomes very nervous and says that in that case they should formalize the agreement. Then she falls onto the bed out of sheer embarrassment. He gets worried about that and asks loudly whether she is all right. He is not forcing her into anything. She does not have to do anything at all. If she has problems, she can tell him about them. So he listens and asks whether they have an alliance with the werewolves. She says the alliance is a name and nothing else. What those people want is the goblins under their control. Besides which, it appears a crisis is starting for them because of the monster outbreak, which leaves them needing children out of goblins, since goblins breed with other races. If it keeps going like this, the werewolves take them over shortly, and if that happens, he understands everything and works out the actual reason for this wedding. He gets out of the bed, asks her forgiveness, and says he does not care for arranged marriages and that sort of thing. There is not going to be a wedding. Naturally, she is upset about that. And then he puts his jacket over her and says that even so, he is not about to look away, while she and every goblin in that village sit in a position this bad. So he helps them. She is delighted, hugs him and thanks him. He asks confused whether she could simply get dressed. She says embarrassed that she is sorry he had to see her in an outfit like that. She genuinely never wears things like this, and he should not think badly of her. The protagonist says she can rest easy because the thought never crossed his mind. Right away, she changes her clothes, and he reflects that although the outfit was extremely radical, it reminds him about clothing generally. So he says her name and asks whether she has any interest in clothes. She says thoughtfully that now she thinks about it, she does not have much, because in the past there were craftsmen who did this, and now they are gone, so there is nobody left to sew anything. After which interest in it began disappearing across the whole village. She becomes embarrassed and says she meant that her own clothes were inherited from her ancestors, so she has absolutely no objection to wearing them. He reflects that they appear not to understand this at all, despite being perfectly capable with weapons and farming tools. In the end, hers was the only house that was properly equipped. They have no continuity of technology. Up in the upper world, there are a great many technologies beyond weapon handling that a person can learn, and down here it appears technology has died. He does not know the reason for their degradation. If it continues, the clan and the village die out. He uses the tailoring technology skill, creates clothes, and asks how she feels about trying them on. She puts them on and says they are very cute. The MC says he is glad she likes them. She asks whether she could keep them. He agrees, and Livia, delighted, says she is grateful to him. She keeps these clothes for the rest of her life. Sometime later, they arrive at another village and come to the main building. The werewolf king Orpheus comes to them, says her name, and says he is glad she came. She calls him sir and says the two of them have not seen each other in a long time. He sits down opposite her and says they should get back to the subject, because her coming here means she has agreed to the alliance after all. She says calmly that she refuses to discuss it. He, displeased, says it appears he did not hear her properly. He asks again to be certain. She came here because she agreed to an alliance. Correct. She refuses again and says that, exactly as she stated, she will not discuss it. At which point his subordinates come into the hall, and he says there is nothing he can do. He says loudly that they take up weapons because they are going to the goblin village. And then Cross stands up and says loudly that they should wait a moment. He looks at him and asks who this one is supposed to be. He introduces himself and says that although he is a human, he is indebted to the goblin village for reasons of his own. The appearance of a human down here surprises them, and he says they are not here to fight anybody. What they want is an alliance on equal terms. Orpheus says he should not joke with him, because proud werewolves are no match for a handful of goblins. His subordinates back him up and start toward them, and Livia gets nervous and says his name. He looks at Goblia and Rufna and gets a suspicion. He asks who gave those monsters magical names. That catches his attention, and she says delighted that obviously it was him. Because unlike other people, he has a great many abilities, and handing out names is roughly the same effort to him as eating breakfast. Our boy is genuinely surprised by that, asks them to wait, and asks what a magical name actually is. She turns to him, surprised, and asks whether he genuinely handed 1 to 2 creatures without knowing. Now a magical name is a particular kind of name, handed to particular creatures, under conditions that have to be met. Whoever carries one is said to come away with their abilities enhanced across the board. He says he understands everything. Does she have a magical name as well? She says it is a name, or rather a nickname. Orpheus calls the man over and says he will treat him as the goblin's representative. Therefore, he challenges him to a duel. If he wins, the goblins follow them, and only werewolves ever hand them magical names. She calls out loudly to the master and says this is a one-sided arrangement. The protagonist cuts across her and says it is fine. What happens if he wins? They go outside, and Orpheus picks up his greatsword and says he can do whatever he likes. Talking ends here. The werewolf king and the goblin representative declare a duel between them. He closes his eyes to concentrate, and Livia says she is asking his forgiveness, because in the end every part of the blame landed on him. He says calmly that she does not need to worry about it. Her name became a bargaining chip, and it is good that it did not turn into a war. He does not want to be a fool. He hates being exploited one-sidedly. She takes his hand and wishes him luck. What the werewolves do not know is who taught this human to hold a sword. Orpheus announces the start, then immediately runs at him fast and puts a heavy blow in with his sword. And just like that, he starts avoiding every attack. The werewolves ask loudly why he keeps dodging everything their king throws, because there is nothing else he can do about it. The king says displeased that if the plan is wearing him out, it is useless. Apparently, he underestimated the physical strength of wolves. The MC looks at him calmly and reflects that it has been a long time since he fought with swords. His body remembers what he was taught at the aristocratic school. You cannot rush too much. You need to be calmer. You need to take control of the situation back. He waits for the right moment, uses a martial art, and punches the hand holding the sword. He feels intense pain from that blow, and our boy strikes and knocks the weapon out of his hands. Then he strikes again and stops the blade in front of his head. In the end, the startled spectators say they have a winner. It cannot be. Their king lost. Orpheus asks to be killed and says he is now too ashamed to live. The MC puts his sword away and asks whether somebody here honestly wants to kill him. Did he not say that winning means he does whatever he wants? Because the entire point is that he wants him alive. He lives and he makes an alliance with the goblins, on equal terms obviously. His shame is not in staying alive. His shame is in wanting to abandon his own people and die first. The villagers, with tears in their eyes, say loudly that every word of that is true. Nobody else in the world counts as the rightful heir of their people. And if their Lord King walked away from them, what exactly would be left? He is moved by that, hits one of them and says they should not show him their weakness. Then he kneels, starts to say his name, changes his mind, and calls him his boss. Cross is thrown by that, and he says that if this man wants to use him for anything, he would like to be his sword. He asks him, confused, to wait, and gets ignored because the king turns to his people and announces that from today this man is their boss. He says he should be allowed to speak. He is not going to be their leader. Livia calls over to him and says delighted that she was impressed by what he said earlier. She pledges her allegiance to him too. Our boy wonders why every part of this is happening this fast. To nobody's surprise, everybody starts calling him chief, their leader. Still, he goes red and says all of them are so simple. He says he is not going to be their boss. Although if werewolves and goblins sign an alliance on those terms, it would be justified, in which case he has to be their boss. He remembers something, calls Orpheus over, and says she is not marrying him. He says calmly that obviously not, since the two of them had an agreement. He is slightly thrown when he registers what those words mean and asks what he is talking about. He was never going to start a family. She is startled by what she is hearing and asks whether that was not exactly what he proposed to her when he spoke about an alliance. He says strong warriors were all he ever wanted, and word about how hard a goblin queen fights reached him a long time ago. She becomes deeply embarrassed and says loudly that she made an enormous mistake turning herself into a tragic heroine. The protagonist says that in the end, all of it worked out fairly well. As for strong warriors, is that because of the demons growing stronger down here? He says no, and that for certain purposes, one warrior is not enough. He closes a hand into a fist, remembering it, and our boy asks whether he could tell him more about that purpose. Orpheus says what he is about to talk about is the monstrous thing that happened in their village. The story of one fighting werewolf who was blinded by his own sins. Sometime later, the goblins in their homes wonder whether those two are all right, because they cannot possibly fail. Within seconds, a goblin runs in and says loudly that they are in danger. A horde of werewolves is heading toward their village. What does this mean? Nobody is about to tell them the two of them were killed. What the goblins do not know is what happened in that hall an hour ago, because the werewolves stop in front of them, bow, and apologize loudly for any inconvenience. Because earlier, back in the werewolf village, he explained that their home used to be further north. His father was king then, and a successor had to be chosen. Except the old king died, or was killed before the name Veld could be declared as heir. His father wrote his own name on a tablet, naming him the heir instead. When his brother found out, he flew into a rage and killed the man on the spot. Then he pinned their father's death on him. An execution was very nearly carried out. Livia, sympathetic, says that is terrible. The werewolf says their boss is a man of principle, and treated them, who are nobodies, well. Orpheus says he was on the edge of execution when the men from his father's group saved him, which is how he managed to escape. He should have told him about this first, because detaining him could have put all of them in danger. The MC puts a hand on his shoulder and says they have formed an alliance, so there is no need to worry about it. He says he appreciates that. He says they should get on with this and think about how to arrange their lives. First, there is the question of segregation which came up before. Currently in the goblin village, he explains what happened and apologizes for the werewolf tribe deciding to move here this abruptly. Orpheus says that to make up for the trouble he has caused them, he asks that he and his people be given work. One of the goblins says that if the lady and he do not mind, everything is fine. Of course they are delighted by that, and he says he is going to go and explore the western part. The goblin asks whether the master intends to put his skills into another house. He says no, and that the werewolves will cut down the trees and build the houses themselves. He points off to one side and says there is somebody here with construction skills. The werewolf girl says she is pleased to meet them. She can only draw blueprints, and she is nowhere near the master's level, and she will still help build. He says that from now on he wants her and her team handling the construction work in this village. They could also contribute other skills, like cooking, farming, and clothes making, and help develop the place. The goblins look confused and say nobody here has ever thought of that before, which is pretty cool. They come over and loudly offer to help with it, and he says the first job is chopping wood, after which the werewolves and the goblins start felling trees and building houses. That night, once the building is done, they say it is time to celebrate the friendship between goblins and werewolves. They start drinking and eating together, and Livia calls out to Cross. He turns to her and says they are just in time. He gets the villagers' attention by saying he would like everybody to look over here for a moment, because two magical names are being handed out tonight, one to the Goblin Queen and one to the Werewolf King. A few hours earlier, she and Orpheus came to him and asked whether they could have a moment. He turned around and asked what the matter was. They told him something urgent needed asking. They know this is somewhat too much, and could he please give them magical names? He asked, entirely calm, when they would like to start, assuming he has no objection to make. They were surprised by that and asked, confused, whether he is absolutely certain, because they heard it is quite a complicated ritual. He said no and that he simply names them. Are they certain they want to keep their magical names exactly as they are now? Both of them agreed, and he said thoughtfully that tonight they hold a ceremony in front of everybody. Currently, Orpheus comes up to him and kneels, and he says that from this moment he grants him Orpheus as his magical name. He enters the name into the system window and surprised says out loud that he feels a surge of strength moving through his body, after which Livia comes forward, and the protagonist says he grants her the name Livia as her magical name. Her body fills with energy, and she remembers Goblia saying her appearance changed after accepting hers. Perhaps she changes too. Sadly, she looks at herself, starts crying, and asks whether she has not changed at all. He says no, delighted, and tells her that her status went up significantly. He turns to the villagers and says loudly that he apologizes for the wait because now he gives magical names to all of them. They are startled by that and ask loudly whether he is genuinely handing names to them as well. He agrees and says the village gets developed by all of them together, which means every villager's status has to be high too. So first they tell him their names. Everybody joyfully starts doing exactly that, and he tells them not to rush, because they need to form a line. Meanwhile, in the upper world, in the castle hall, Recifal tells them to lift their heads. What he wants is to go through where things stand, house by house. Bockhurst first. The head of the family says Albert has not been found yet, and they are doing everything they can in their situation. The king says loudly that this is not what he asked about. Has his fifth son not returned yet? A new search party goes down there immediately. He says worried that there are so many demons in that territory that handling all of them is impossible. The head of the Rayfield clan calls to the king and says that if they want the fifth Backhurst son brought home for certain, they send Ellis. The head of the Mycelian clan disagrees and says he believes Menu is the better choice for searching the lower world, because she can operate independently with no escort. The king says neither option is good. They point out loudly that even at this moment she is protecting the royal city with her skills from the underground temple. Nobody can be certain stronger demons will not attack them later. Fine. Then, she is enough to protect the upper world, so they send Ellis. Not true. The upper world needs her skills. So Minyu goes down to search. No, nothing can be allowed to happen. Naturally, they keep arguing loudly, and she sighs and wonders when she sees him again. Meanwhile, in the lower world, Livia fights a monster, and the MC shouts at her to watch the enemy carefully. And just like that, her body goes flying after she swings that sword. She manages to kill the thing anyway, which delights her. And he reflects that every villager here now carries a magical name, and that hunting and weapon work are what he spends his days teaching them. He says he did not expect her swordsmanship to come this far. She says she is surprised by it herself, because those mountain monkeys have been tormenting goblin tribes for many years. She cannot believe a magical name made beating them this easy. Goblins come over, call to their mistress, and report a batch of mushrooms nobody recognizes. The lady looks like herself again. They say, since the day she met this man she laughs constantly, the way a little girl does. They ask him to keep being a source of support for her. He agrees, and she comes back and apologizes for making him wait. Incidentally, does he know how to cook monkey meat? He says no, and that flesh like that is not for him. Then he notices points hanging over the body of the monster she killed, and wonders whether they see points when they defeat something. He says the rest could still be nearby, so the hunting continues. Sometime later they come home at night, and Cross sees 15,000 points and says he has saved up 33 gacha spins. He reflects that he does not remember accumulating any of it, and that the number appeared during the day, when she killed a monster. He asks out loud whether the points from a creature he gave a magical name to come to him as well. Does it genuinely work like that? No. He should stay calm, because this really is the sort of level that gets adjusted downward later. Back then he only got one. He decides that until somebody fixes it, he pretends not to notice and tidies up quickly. Livia comes into his room and asks whether she could take a moment of his time. That frightens him, and he asks confused and loudly what the matter is. She asks whether he is busy with something. He says no, and that he is simply looking at the gacha screen. There is a gacha screen right here. Does she not see it? Sadly, she looks where he is pointing and says she cannot see anything at all. If it does not inconvenience him, could she watch it beside him? He agrees and says he does not think she knows what to do with it. However, she walks over, their shoulders touch, and she says that simply being near him makes her feel like she is starting to understand. She notices the system window and says, surprised, that she can see it now too. Perhaps because she touched it. He says he understands, and in that case he can show her what gacha is. After which the two of them sit on the bed together, and he asks what that is. She apologizes and says she wanted him to show her what gacha is. He agrees and wonders whether this is some sort of custom. After what happened last night, asking too many questions is probably unwise. He presses the button and says in that case they do the first 11 spins. Within seconds 11 skill balls appear in front of them, and she asks surprised whether that is the skill gacha. It is so sparkling and beautiful, and those rainbow-colored balls look like precious stones. He tells her loudly to catch one. She puts out a hand and then says surprised that the balls have started glowing. He explains that every ball in there carries a rarity. Rainbow at the top, then gold, then silver, then bronze. Whatever comes out of a rainbow one is the best on offer. She reads an inscription and asks whether that is a summoner. He says it is a skill that instantly summons contracted demons. The rainbow orb has brought an upgraded skill every month. He has already pulled 3 different summoning skills in May. She asks whether he could spin those 3 again. He says no, and that pulling the same skill makes the bonus additional, so the effect stacks, although he would need a maximum of 4 rainbow orbs. She asks whether she could look at the other skills. He agrees, and says they should unlock all of them at once. They activate it, and Livia says there are so many skills. The protagonist says bronze holds ability-enhancing skills, silver holds technology, and gold holds magic. Apart from the rainbow ones, there appears to be no level cap, so the more he collects, the better everything gets. They unlock more, and she asks whether any of these are new. He agrees and says he leveled up a great many useful skills, so the results are good. She starts getting nervous and asks whether the results could be worse because she is here. He says no, and that this is usually how it goes. Besides which, he was down here entirely alone. Working the gacha out with her has been a great deal of fun. She blushes slightly and says, smiling, that in that case she is glad as well. In the end, she falls asleep and he remembers what the goblins told him about how she has been since he arrived. He puts her to bed, covers her with a blanket, and says that perhaps she played enough gacha and got tired, so she should rest. Meanwhile, other werewolves attack demons, and one of them asks them to wait because they came here to form an alliance. Correct. Veld says loudly that nobody compares him to that imposter wolf. Perhaps he was offering an alliance, and his one condition is that they become his slaves. They can choose being his slaves or dying on the spot. Orpheus presumably named the thing they are looking at, a poiken snake, and a fairly large one. The protagonist reflects that in order to prepare for a war against the wolves in the north, they decided to farm gacha points in the northern region. He asks Orpheus, out loud, whether they have reached northern wolf territory yet. He says no and not to worry about it. Then the protagonist asks whether there are villages nearby that do not belong to werewolves. Perhaps an alliance is possible there. Orpheus says thoughtfully villages and that he needs to think about it. After a moment he says he thinks there is a slime tribe. What none of them knows is that the answer to Orpheus's question is about to be attacked in front of them. Because an enormous snake appears out of nowhere and goes for a slime, Orpheus attacks it without hesitating and runs it through, and Livia does not stand aside either, putting her blade through the snake's neck. The enemy starts writhing in its death throes and finally comes down onto the ground. It is finished. Livia asks the slime girl sympathetically whether she is alright. The slime girl answers, confused, that she is, and thank you. The MC asks, surprised, whether she is a slime. She agreed. And who are they? The protagonist says he is a human, and he is solving problems in the goblin village nearby. Livia gives her name and adds that she is one of the goblin queens. And there he is. With those words she points at Orpheus. The slime girl shouts in fear, asking whether that is a werewolf, and whether these are those werewolves. She starts backing away from all of them at speed, screaming that he wants to kill them. Orpheus asks her to stop. A while later, sitting on a log, the slime girl explains that the wolf tribe which offered them an alliance was working against them from the very beginning. A great many of her people died, their villages were burned to the ground, and now they are hiding. Orpheus says guiltily that all of this is his fault. If only he had the power. The protagonist tells the girl to do them a favor, because what he wants is an alliance with them. To nobody's surprise, the slime girl stares at him in astonishment. Then, having thought about it, she says fine, and she will escort them to her village. They do not seem like the worst people, so, although whether they leave that village alive or not depends entirely on their leader, Orpheus turns to the MC and asking forgiveness, says the slimes hating him is his own fault. He argues back that it is not his fault, and that thinking about the future matters considerably more than dwelling on a past he cannot change. He asks the slime girl whether the village is in one of these caves. She says no because the village sits straight ahead of them. What this cave holds is puddles, and it opens onto several different exits, which makes it a good hiding place, in case somebody is following them. The protagonist reflects that he will have to work hard to catch them off guard. Sometime later, the slime girl points ahead and tells them the village is right there, which turns out to be a large swamp. In front of them lies a decent-sized stretch of water with dense vegetation wrapped all the way around it. Slimes are looking down at them from the trees. The protagonist hears the worried voices. What is going on? These people? Demons. Subhuman goblins. Although that is a werewolf, that is definitely a werewolf. Get them out of here. They need to kill them. They cannot let those things know they are here. Every slime present joins in, chanting one word. Kill. Right away, Sufi comes out to her allies and tells the slimes to calm down. Looking at the MC, she asks who he is and says, so they are clear, that they are not welcome here. A while later, once everybody has been heard, Sufi says that regarding the saving of their people, she personally thanks them. Then she turns to the protagonist and says that a man exiled from the upper world who wants to unite subhumans and demons must want something. The protagonist says an alliance. As long as the wolves of the north are a threat to them, he thinks joining forces makes sense. Right? He knows they are worried about having werewolves in their camp. Except Orpheus would never harm a squad of civilians, and he is confident the two of them can help. Sufi says she knows why they hate werewolves, and besides that, they hate humans. He asks, surprised what? She asks whether they are not from the upper world. Have they ever heard of Aquafield? The MC says yes, he has heard a great deal about it because it is nearby. The waterways running through that country are stable all year round, which makes it a major logistics hub. She says that at first glance it is a beautiful and idealistic place, except that utopia was built by using them, the slimes, as slaves. On stormy days, every slime worked together to control the flooding of those waterways, and some of them were forced into genuinely terrible acts. They lived like mindless slaves, and at the same time became steadily more self-aware. Naturally, they decided to escape. He wonders how they got out. The protagonist suggests their country had some kind of transitional magic circle, She says not quite, because hiding from the overseers meant nobody had the faintest idea where there was to go. So she ran along the river and went straight over a large waterfall. The next thing she remembers is being washed up on the shore below. Wiping away tears from those bitter memories, the girl continues and asks whether it is not ironic. She thought she could forget everything in a place with no people in it, and her body took the form of a subhuman instead. She has told them everything she should not have. Now, do they understand why they hate humans? The protagonist says she can hate him as much as she likes. Except when the wolves of the north invade, those wolves treat them exactly as badly as before, or considerably worse. Sufi argues that he is wrong because they have already been deceived once, and if they try, they do not lose. Those wolves have low magic resistance and can only use physical attacks, which counts as an advantage of sorts. The MC reflects that if they were being more serious, their enemies would not seem so strong. She will not say it out loud, and he can tell that is what she is thinking. Out loud, he clarifies whether that means they do not want an alliance. Of course, she says correct, and that she has no intention of forming one. She does not want to make her own problems worse by getting involved. They solve their own problem with those wolves, so nobody gets in anybody's way. The protagonist works out that this makes them neutral. Out loud, he says fine. He understands. He puts out a hand and tells her his name. She offers her hand in return and tells him hers. What Sufi does not know is how soon she needs him. Sometime later, he returns to his village and draws a type of structure. Bree, with several villagers gathered behind her, asks, surprised, whether that is a wall. The protagonist says he would like something sturdy, preferably stone, and he does not have the skills for that. Pointing at the drawing, he adds that he needs something with sharp ends, like this. She says understood. He continues, saying a tower high enough to see a long way from would be good. Still, Bree says she will try, so war is about to break out. The MC notes that nothing is certain yet, and they still need to be prepared, so everybody gets to work. Also, whoever has high agility takes turns watching over the slime village, because that settlement stands to be attacked far sooner than this one does. A promise not to interfere was made. He is aware of it, and he wants no further casualties regardless. The villagers agree to that. He says they also need new weapons forged, so goblins skilled at forging start immediately. Looking around at everybody, he calls on the village to get to work. Luckily, they agree unanimously. The protagonist says he is going to go and help with the fortifications. Orpheus calls out to him and says he needs him for training. A while later, Livia watches that training in astonishment, because the werewolf is having genuine trouble beating the protagonist. He asks him to fight again. The MC replies that rushing means he never learns anything. After a short break, they continue. The boy lowers his head and says he was given a magical name, and he felt his status climb significantly. Except he will never forget the way his brother looked at him after killing their father. He should not become that, and he cannot beat him. The protagonist looks at both of his allies and asks whether either of them has ever trained in any kind of fencing. Orpheus says no, although he learned to use a sword for self-defense. Livia says she does not have whatever he is calling fencing either. Then the protagonist asks Orpheus whether he noticed anything during their duels. The werewolf remarks thoughtfully that he thought there was a certain agility to it, and he was not sure. The MC says yes, that is fencing, because what he does is run practical skills and magical ones together. Fire magic, for instance, goes into healing his own body and putting speed behind his attacks. The werewolf shouts in surprise, because apparently that is possible. The protagonist continues, saying the water sword predicts an opponent's movements, like flowing water, and finishes them with a single blow. Livia remarks, astonished, that reading an opponent's movements in advance is simply amazing. He says that normally all 4 attributes require swordsmanship training, and they are short on time, so he suggests focusing on the styles they are already good at. The protagonist asks Orpheus whether he is ready. The werewolf answers shyly that he is not sure he can do it, because magic has always been a struggle, which is why strength alone has carried every fight he has ever had. Living up to what his brother expects of him may be beyond him. Except stopping his brother's rampage is still what he wants, along with vengeance for his father and for his friends. There is nothing wrong with wanting that. Let him teach him swordsmanship. The MC tells him not to worry, because he becomes the greatest of all werewolves. Meanwhile, Leon remembers how at the Backhurst estate in the upper realm, Baig shouted in horror, because his son was kidnapped by goblins out of the lower realm. The man reported that yes, going by the one knight who got out, Albert was stripped bare and had his feet crushed under rocks, after which they hauled him off into the deep forest. The father shouted his son's name in bitterness, at which point Leon, the 4th son of House Backhurst, shouted at his father to calm down and let him come to his senses. Then he walked abruptly out of the study, went down the corridor, and addressed the absent Albert, because there was a secret plan apparently, and he can look now at exactly where that ended. Between him and Cross, the two of them have made this house a disgrace. He was told the man went down there with nothing except his own knights. It must have looked genuinely amusing. A collection of amateurs from the lower ranks galloping around with weapons at the ready. He turns to his maid, Marnus, and asks whether he is not right about that. The girl says he is right. Leon slaps her cheek and asks, irritated, how much longer she intends to stay in human form. Naturally, Marnus apologizes and takes her true shape. He continues angrily because she is a fox, and he asked her not to wear a human form when the two of them are alone. To nobody's surprise, the girl apologizes again. He says fine, and asks whether the stones are ready. The maid hands him the case and says yes, she has them. They temporarily strengthen the magic inside his body, very powerful magical stones. He takes one out and examines it. The maid adds that the stones also neutralize harmful elements out of the lower realms. She is confident they live up to his expectations. Leon asks how much she remembers about Cross. The girl clarifies whether he means his brother, and says that with all due respect, she knows nothing further. He reflects that even a fox, with all that magical knowledge, could not resist a slave collar, because that brother is the one she used to serve, and he was afraid she might attempt something strange. Now he thinks those fears were unfounded. He says out loud that he goes tomorrow and brings the protagonist home. She makes sure everything is ready. Marnus assures him of it. Watching him go, the girl adds that when he returns, she hopes he becomes the head of this house. He answers rudely, telling her to shut her mouth, because he does not need her anymore. The maid retreats out of his sight, begging his forgiveness. Left alone, he grins maliciously and remarks on becoming the head. That is simply a result. What he is waiting for is the protagonist, because the humiliation he suffered back then gets repaid 1,000 times over. Now, sometime earlier, a crowd in an arena was discussing a mock battle master Leon of House Backhurst had arranged against the protagonist. Because if Leon is the strongest man the knighthood has, whoever beats him is stronger than that. And just like that, the duel moderator announced the start. And when it ended, every person in that arena was confused and shocked. Leon lost. Was he unwell? No, he is simply not that good. Although they had better be quiet, or he hears them. A while later, the MC dusts off his hands and says fine, that is enough for today. Orpheus says he is sweating more than usual today. The protagonist noticed, and he was not the only one, because his fire sword style is becoming more and more precise. Correct. The werewolf says no, not yet, because the catastrophic energy his brother releases devours the smallest gap in one movement. The protagonist says it is a little late to be asking, and what exactly is his brother's goal? Conquering this entire region. Orpheus says, perhaps countering the subhumans in the north, because the further north you go, the stronger the demons and the subhumans get. Although the way Veld operates is terrifying, he forces people to follow him through the threat of violence or through fear. Some werewolves have betrayed him, yes, and he is certain most of them are simply afraid of his brother and follow because there is no choice. The MC says he sees it, and that he would help them if he could. The werewolf looks at him in surprise and wonders what just happened. Orpheus says he did not think he was that compassionate. The protagonist laughs quietly and asks, really? The man pauses, thinking about something of his own, and then says that in his youth his brother was kind and strong. That surprises the protagonist, who asks whether it is true. Orpheus says yes, he was a good brother. He does not know exactly when Veld went insane. Perhaps all of it happened too quickly and too many times. The protagonist notes that perhaps if they worked out the reason, this entire fight could be stopped. The werewolf adds that perhaps they could start a new life. The MC, puzzled, asks what he just said. Orpheus says nothing, and he should forget about it. Right now, they need to gather strength for what is coming. The protagonist starts to say something, and at that exact moment, Goblia jumps onto his neck, starts pulling his hair, and mutters something indignant in her own language. Rufna starts jumping around directly in front of him as well. The protagonist is indignant and asks her to stop pulling his hair because it hurts. Orpheus, watching this scene, suggests that perhaps they want him to play with them. He asks, surprised, really? The girl starts irritably muttering in her own language again. The MC admits it is true, because he has been training so much lately that he has not paid them the slightest attention. He asks his familiars to forgive him and promises to put it right. Luckily, they accept the promise happily. The werewolf smiles and says in that case he is off, and the MC puts Goblia down and says fine. Orpheus leaves, and the protagonist watches him go, thinking that he does not know whether he and his brother get a second chance or whether any of this gets fixed. He would definitely prefer it if that were possible, although if nobody can talk sense into Orpheus's brother, he will have to stop him. A while later, he has a dream, in which he stands in the dean's office, asking why, out of everybody, he is the only one who failed his knighthood exam. The dean answered that word, reached him about bribes paid to other students to make them fail. The protagonist was indignant at that. What is he even talking about? He did nothing wrong. The principal said he regretted it, and there would be punishment accordingly. He tried to say something else in his own defense, and every word of it was useless. Then a powerful blow from his brother landed on his face and put him on the floor. The other brothers started kicking him, shouting that he is a disgrace to their house. Is this how he repays them for everything? The protagonist said he had not done anything, at which point he saw Leon grinning maliciously, watching all of it, and joining in on the beating, which made it entirely clear that this was his doing. And now, after the conversation with Orpheus, he is left turning over whether brothers can start again. He does not think it is possible. Brothers hate one another and beat everything out of one another. That is simply how the world runs. Right away, somebody starts saying his name. He opens his eyes and finds a worried Livia trying to wake him. She asks whether he is all right, because he looks genuinely terrible. Sitting up in bed, he says everything is fine and he simply had a strange dream. The girl says she understands. The protagonist holds his head and reflects, unhappily, that he can still see them. He needs time to recover. Livia says sheepishly that incidentally, something has happened. Once he learns what, he dresses quickly and runs outside. One of the werewolves is leading a comrade, holding him up, and that comrade is badly beaten. Somebody shouts for potions. The villagers are asking each other what that was. The man, seeing the protagonist, says that 3 of the northern fighting wolves were inside their village earlier. Those 3 messed up, and now they have been found. The MC listens to that in surprise. The werewolves start complaining that there is no forgiveness for idiots like those. Although how did they manage to come back alive? The werewolf grins and says it is entirely thanks to their daily training. The protagonist thanks them for the report, and takes Orpheus aside for a moment. A while later, having heard him out, the werewolf shouts in surprise, asking whether they missed on purpose. He says they were letting themselves be followed in order to locate that base. With those words, he activates his sense skill, and 3 silhouettes appear in the space in front of them. Orpheus shouts that there they are, and those 3 wolves are definitely the ones. He suggests they go and intercept them. The MC agrees. They go after the enemy, who are moving fast. In the end, the wolves stop, and the ground in front of them starts cracking. They shout in confusion. What is going on? The ground just rose. Orpheus, standing behind them, says it has been a while since he saw the 3 of them. He apologizes to them, and they cannot be allowed to leave. One of the wolves shouts, asking whether that is not the younger brother of their king, and how a man like that ended up leading losers like these. Orpheus barely holds himself back at an insult like that. The protagonist, standing beside him, says he is the head of the organization Orpheus currently works for. So if they have something to say, they say it to him. The wolves laugh cheekily and shout that a loser has been turned into a pet dog. The protagonist is enraged by that. Orpheus turns to him and to Livia and says the 3 of them are giving off a terrible aura, exactly like his brothers. He has a very bad feeling about this, and they should be vigilant. The MC assures him he stays on his guard. The wolves say mockingly that there is no need to run from an idiot like him. They cut his head off right here and bring it to the king personally. Then one of them suggests the others simply use the thing. The wolf agrees with his comrade, produces a small crystal, and says he agrees completely. Orpheus shouts in surprise because this cannot be. Is that a magic stone? What the 3 of them do not know is that Orpheus has seen one of those before. The wolf swallows it, laughing, and shouts that now he becomes the most powerful werewolf, exactly like the king. A transformation starts happening inside him, and during it he lets out a terrifying scream. The protagonist and Livia watch in confusion. The girl shouts, asking what is going on. The wolves, their aura entirely changed, stare at them ominously. The protagonist shouts the same question. The wolf that swallowed the stone charges them, and the others come with him. The MC shouts that they are closing. Within seconds, the allies engage. Livia strikes the enemy who swallowed the stone and is startled to see the wound heal instantly. She shouts to the protagonist that the magic stone has strengthened them enormously. He, parrying a wolf's blow, says he understands, although they must not fall into the enemy's rhythm. She remembers her usual training. The girl shouts that she understands him. Her opponent stands up on his hind legs and roars with a terrifying voice. She closes her eyes, activates her water blade, and attacks the enemy in the stomach. The blow lands, and goes straight through the wolf, and he is finished. Livia shouts at both of them to put their blades through the magic stone sitting inside those bodies, because destroying it sends them out of control. The protagonist says fine, and that they do the same. Orpheus shouts yes. Sometime later, the wolves are finished. The MC looks at the fallen bodies and says they managed to destroy them, except if those 3 fail to return, the base notices something is wrong, and somebody may come to investigate this area shortly. Still, Orpheus is deep in thought. He asks whether he is all right. The werewolf says yes, and that those men know no mercy. In fact, a stranger once approached him about a deal involving a magic stone. He did not recognize the man, who called himself a vampire. The allies listen to that with surprise. Then Livia notes, surprised, that vampires and foxes both possess magic. They can also craft various magical tools. Orpheus says, irritated, that his father was a man of chivalry who hated magical tools, which is why they rejected it. He had no idea the man was selling magic stones to his brother behind his back. Although those creatures are no longer human, they are demons. Letting the younger generation wear something like that is madness. Sometime later, the allies return to the village. Gathering the villagers, the protagonist says that they killed the northerners in the area, except the enemy may widen the search, so everybody stays on guard and keeps training. The villagers and warriors agree with him. He reflects that it is good they kept quiet about the magic stone for now, because frightening them would backfire. Although at their current strength, the worst that happens is being wiped off the face of the earth. If that is the situation, something has to be done. He tells Orpheus he is going to the slime village. The werewolf, surprised, asks whether this is still about the alliance. He says that is one thing. Before that though, they share the information about the magic stone, because Sufi said they are weak against wolves. And obviously magic stones and magical tools are a threat to slimes. Orpheus says he is right. They tell them in advance, perhaps they change their minds. Could he come with him? The protagonist says no, because he actually has a meeting scheduled today, at which point Rufna barks loudly. He continues saying he has been so busy lately with training and everything else that Goblia has been sulking at him. Today, the 3 of them were finally going to go and explore the forest, after a very long gap. The werewolf points out that this is what he mentioned beforehand. The MC tells Rufna that this is not exactly what they planned, and they are leaving now. Where is Goblia? Sadly, the familiar barks ambiguously. He asks whether she is still in a bad mood. They are running out of time, so he has no choice but to use his summoning skill. Rufna shakes her head side to side and barks again. The protagonist asks, puzzled, whether that means no need. She barks twice. He remarks that they follow the scent and find her. The familiar barks in agreement. Orpheus reflects, surprised, that the protagonist understands her. The MC says what worries him is how the northern battle wolves have been moving. He tells Goblia to report to him the moment she detects any danger. The werewolf says fine. He goes with him. The protagonist says he will hand him potions in case. Then he turns to Rufna and asks her to take him to Goblia. The familiar barks in agreement. What our boy does not know is that his brother came down here this morning and is already standing in that forest. Meanwhile, Goblia is sitting beside the flowers, imagining her marriage to the protagonist, in tears about it. And then Leon grabs her by the hair from behind and asks angrily whether that is the goblin woman who beat Albert. A while later, the MC looks at an embarrassed Rufna and notes, surprised that the scent has disappeared. The familiar barks in agreement. He asks whether that means no smell. The wolf confirms it. The protagonist thinks, confused, that this is strange, because Rufna's sense of smell should be extremely well developed. And besides, she is named after a demon, so how does that nose fail? The familiar makes a guilty noise. The protagonist hurries to reassure her. No, it is fine. It simply happens that her nose is not working today. They go to the place where they last smelled her. Of course, the wolf agrees with him. Meanwhile, Leon, still holding Goblia by the hair, remarks with irritation that it is surprising nobody has shown up yet. He glances at the smoking vessels the mages beside him are carrying and goes on, because their entire territory is already blocked, thanks to smoke drawn from the conduits of the lower realm. He tightens his grip on her hair, shows her a photograph, and asks angrily whether she would like to avoid having her skull crushed, and whether she recognizes any of the circled faces. Apparently, a goblin can carry a considerable amount of status. Could she at minimum say whether anybody in there is known to her? The protagonist's face is one of the circled ones. Obviously, she recognizes him. And instead of answering, Goblia tries to pull his hand off her head. He shouts with irritation, asking what she thinks she is doing. He squeezes her head harder, hard enough that her scalp splits and blood comes out of the wounds. Leon says it is useless, because she cannot harm so much as a hair on him now. So she answers immediately, unless she wants to lose her head. The familiar cannot bear the pain and collapses into the flowers. Leon swears and looks at her with irritation. The knight asks his master, worried, whether he is all right. The boy says yes, and that she could not have done anything to him regardless. That is exactly why demons like them are so weak. At which moment Goblia quickly drinks a potion. The knights shout in bewilderment, asking where she was hiding that. The familiar twists her face in fury and charges her attacker with a menacing cry. He seems rooted where he stands, staring at her without understanding, and one of the knights stops her. She runs straight into his fist and goes down again. The knight declares that nobody is touching their lord. The fourth son of House Backhurst remarks dismissively that a goblin with a potion is quite a sight. Then he turns to the knights and tells them to ask her where his idiot brother is. The warriors say that they, the Knights of Torture, who made every being in the upper realm obedient and submissive, will find out where he might be. Goblia, bleeding, opens her eyes wide in fear with tears coming out of them. Meanwhile, the protagonist walks through the forest shouting her name and asking where she is. Looking at Rufna, who has stopped, he wonders what the hell is going on, because it is not only his familiar's sense of smell. He cannot believe that detection and summoning have both stopped working. The search failed, the same way it worked against the wolves they beat this morning. The situation keeps changing, except he should have been more vigilant. What is he supposed to do? In despair, he buries his face in the warm fur of his familiar. A while later, he thanks Rufna, saying that thanks to her he has calmed down, because moments exactly like this are when staying calm matters. She barks in answer. He goes on and sees a light in her eyes. Then he shouts in surprise, asking what that light coming off her is. Meanwhile, Goblia lies unconscious on the ground, the flowers around her spattered with her own blood. Leon shouts angrily at the knights, asking what idiots they are standing around here. The warriors answer sheepishly that he should forgive them, and she was more stubborn than they expected. He says angrily that they go and look for the protagonist while he waits here. Naturally, the knights agree readily. What Leon does not know is that a goblin who heals off the ground she is lying on does not stay down, because he feels something hit him in the back. He turns around, surprised, and finds Goblia has thrown an empty vial at him, is glaring at him furiously, and is getting back onto her feet. He does not lose his composure and attacks her with magic, opening serious wounds. And just like that, the goblin falls again, and the boy shouts with irritation. Enough, her and the knights he brought down here. That fox, his family, and the protagonist. Every one of them. Why can none of them do what he wants? Make them stop irritating him. The next time anybody deceives him, or fails to live up to his expectations, he kills that fox and every one of their families. The knights start apologizing in guilty voices. Then they look at Goblia and shout in amazement, because that wound was fatal. She is a goblin with incredible healing abilities. Leon screams angrily that they are fools, and it is simply a skill. He wonders whether she is drawing a great deal of life force out of the environment. Could she genuinely be an herbalist? No, that cannot be, because a demon is supposed to carry skills nothing human or subhuman ever gets, which would make what she is holding an utterly rare ability. The mages shout that it is impossible. How did she break through that smoke and use a skill at all? Then one of them is cut to pieces in an instant. The same thing arrives for the other mages. In the end, only one is left unharmed, watching in complete shock, because suddenly everybody can see Rufna standing in front of them, The knights shielding Leon shout in surprise, asking about the wolf and how she killed every mage, and how a demon got through that smoke. The son of House Backhurst notes confused that the wolf cannot be what he thinks it is. Then a bright light appears, and Goblia starts transforming in midair. The knights shout in fear, asking what that sudden glow was. They have no idea that the protagonist activated the demon evolution technique, which is changing how she looks, because the thing standing there has stopped being a little girl, and is now a beautiful young woman. One of the knights laughs and says he does not understand what just happened obviously, and he was only thinking about how he had not tormented her enough yet. Goblia leaps at him without a word, and takes his head off with a kick. His upper limb goes flying, blood comes out of the body. His comrade shouts, confused, asking how this could have happened, since the man had only just gotten married. He looks at Goblia and screams furiously, asking how she could do that to him, and that she cannot hurt him anymore. The girl puts a hand into his chest and straight through it. Within seconds the knight collapses, bleeding heavily. Leon, in total shock, notes that she let the blow penetrate and ruined his armor. What the knights do not know is who has been walking toward this clearing for the last 10 minutes, because the protagonist says the girl's name. Seeing him, she rushes over joyfully, hugs him tightly, and laughs with happiness. He says, smiling, that it is good she is all right. He reflects that the plants around them are medicinal herbs, good that he can appreciate it. So the magical smoke is what took Rufna's sense of smell. He got through that smoke thanks to the wolf's unique olfactory skill, which she received through evolution, and the reason his summoning and detection failed is his brother's doing. Leon says maliciously that the two of them have not seen each other in a long time. His appearance does not bode well. The protagonist says his name and asks whether he came to bring him back, like Albert did. His brother asks, angrily, Albert? Yes. He believes their father said the man was in league with the goblins. The MC notes that if he knows that much, then he knows he is not going back. He was thinking of letting him go home safe and sound, although there is something he wants to tell him. They tormented Goblia horribly, so he should not assume he returns to the upper world unharmed. Leon laughs maliciously and throws back the flaps of his jacket, revealing the magic stone set into his body. Of course, the MC stares at it, surprised. His brother shouts that this is what he calls brotherly spirit, because doing anything at all for those idiots upstairs is the last thing on his mind. What he came down here for is killing his own brother. The protagonist notes that he knew it was a magic stone, and that this is the man who sabotaged his skills. He asks, perplexed, where he got hold of one, because he thought they were difficult to find in the upper world. Leon says his old servant, Marnus, created it for him. The MC, surprised, thinks about the subhuman fox. He assumes she kept her true nature secret from everybody except him. His brother asks mockingly what happened to him. Was he genuinely shocked to hear their own maid was taken away from him? The protagonist decides now is not the moment to sort out anything involving the maid. The magic stone is assimilating into that flesh, and Leon still has his ego intact. He is not going to lose his mind the way those wolves did this morning. Is he? He will have to see what he can find out. The MC wonders whether it is true that foxes can build magical artifacts, because he has heard magic stones carry terrible side effects. Leon shouts, asking whether he is genuinely still upset that his maid was taken from him, because he is the only man in the upper world incompetent enough to trust subhumans. They handed her to sinners and slaves first, and then got rid of her. The protagonist wonders whether he had to resort to trickery. Leon lurches toward him, and adds that swallowing something she left behind was unpleasant for him, and all of it thanks to him. He lands a powerful blow, pushes Cross away, and shouts at him to look at this, because all that speed and all that power exists for one purpose: revenge on him. The humiliation he suffered in the upper world is going to look like nothing next to this. Leon starts throwing a heavy series of blows, and then the MC activates a boost, pushes off the ground, puts a heavy kick in and jumps him. Still, the man takes the first blow and blocks the next one, grinning maliciously. The protagonist tells his brother, entirely serious, that he does not know what magic stones actually are, because skills are power handed down to them by an almighty god, and a demon stone is nothing more than a miracle built by humans and subhumans. Leon laughs maliciously and shouts that he starts lecturing the moment he realizes he cannot win, so let him prove his divine power. The protagonist says that since he insists, he will show him. In an instant, he puts an incredibly powerful blow into his brother's face, then a whole series behind it. Having put his opponent down, the protagonist notes that he used a skill which raises physical stats, which is the most common skill in his entire tree. Leon jumps back to his feet, grins and shouts at him to try something stronger, because nothing about that skill touches him. So this is what the power of God looks like. His turn now. He uses Wind Cutter, and puts a magical attack onto him instantly. The MC answers with Slant Attack, and manages to wound him regardless. Afterward, he asks whether he remembers the last time he challenged him to a duel. So this is about revenge for that day. Leon shouts with incredible fury, asking whether he genuinely has not forgotten, and whether he must be joking. Does he honestly think all of this humiliation is tied to one single day? He was always this way, always looking down from above. Everything that man has was stolen off him. He never forgives him. He executes him right here and now. The man creates a powerful magic ball and releases a wave of wind called a tornado. The MC is surprised because he did not think Leon could produce wind magic that strong. Exactly as he thought. The magic stone's effect is terrifying. Although with that increased mass and rotation speed, its thrust is low, which makes dodging easier for him. Then the corpse of an armored knight appears behind him and grabs him, so dodging becomes impossible. He wonders, surprised, what is going on? Leon laughs like a madman and shouts at the knight to keep up the good work. at which point Goblia arrives and tears the knight's heart out, with Rufna behind her, repelling the magical attack. The MC thanks them happily and shouts that they did a great job. He wonders whether the knights are carrying magic stones as well, because only once the entrails were destroyed did the knight who attacked him stop moving. So as long as the heart is intact, the magic stone can drive him. Leon, realizing his plan has failed, lowers his head in anger. The protagonist asks whether he understands now what he was talking about. The headless corpse helped him, and the stone he swallowed is a dangerous thing. His brother grabs his own chest. The protagonist continues, telling him to go back to the upper world while he still has some sense left. He cannot help him. She can. Leon screams hysterically at him to shut his mouth. Then he shows him the stones in his hand. The MC thinks confused that he has even more of them. His brother shouts that he cannot lose any more, and with those words he swallows one. The protagonist shouts, anxious, at him to spit it out. Sadly, it is already too late. Leon spreads both arms wide and produces a genuinely demonic laugh. The protagonist registers confused, how ominous and frightening this feels. His brother still cannot stop laughing. Then his expression starts changing and he shouts maliciously that he can feel magical power boiling inside him. And then blood comes out of his eyes, his ears, his mouth, and his nose, and he falls backward with both arms out. The blood keeps coming. The MC is worried, because his body cannot withstand the magic stone anymore. He mutters out loud that at this speed the man spirals out of control, and they need to stop his heart quickly. Looking sadly at his familiars, he remarks that hate can drive a person into a state like this. He activates his water sword style, lifts his weapon and says goodbye to his brother. When the sword touches Leon's chest, a glow erupts at the point of contact and the protagonist takes a tremendous blow. To nobody's surprise, his weapon flies out of his hands, and he goes down onto the ground. His familiars look at him in horror, because an entity named Leon, holding his soul and carrying elements taken from a great many different monsters, comes out of Leon's body. Goblia and Rufna scream at the enemy's aura. The protagonist, blood coming out of his mouth, realizes he cannot hear anything, and that if this entity attacks him now, using his skills is not an option. At which moment Leon remembers his mother holding him by the shoulders, telling him that before long he will have a little brother or a little sister, and that he is going to be a good friend to whoever it turns out to be. Little Leon laughed at that and told his mother that he loves her, and now he screams silently, asking where she is. Then he screams the MC's name, asking where his little brother is. The protagonist is already lying in a cave where his familiars dragged him. A trail of blood leads back to the entrance. Rufna licks her master's face gently. Goblia looks in terror at the half of his body torn away along with his left arm, and bursts into tears. Then she puts her hands on his face and tries to heal him, chanting a spell in her own language over and over. The protagonist loses consciousness. The wolf looks at him in fear. Goblia bursts into tears, realizing every part of her effort was useless, at which point a system window opens in the air with a message about loading an emergency program. The familiars stare at it, confused. The message says a serious error has occurred in the physical body of a demonic technique skill user, and emergency maintenance begins in 5 seconds. A system voice repeats it, appearing in the air alongside the text. As the countdown starts, the voice announces that what follows moves a large quantity of life energy into the user. So the recommendation is running it only where enough life energy exists to draw on. On 3 and on 2, the system announces that the accuracy of this maintenance depends on the level of the demonic mastery skill. On 1, it says that for detailed information, please check the log screen once maintenance is complete. Emergency maintenance begins. A powerful fireball appears in the air, blinding the familiars and hitting them with its energy. Both of them scream in surprise and fear. The system reports a second transfusion of blood and the damaged area being rebuilt. The two of them watch in amazement as their master's body is put back together. Finally, the system issues an alert. Emergency maintenance is complete. Thank you for using this. Meanwhile, Goblia keeps shouting something in her own language. Then light magic forms in the air, and the MC opens his eyes. Looking at his familiars, he notes, smiling, that they saved him, and thanks them enormously. His allies, not believing their own eyes, stare at him in surprise, and then rush to him joyfully. He hugs both of them tightly and holds them close, expressing endless gratitude. Then he examines his own body and says, amazed that this is incredible because there are no traces at all. He cannot even tell that anybody attacked him. Incidentally, what happened to his brother because it seemed he was about to finish him. The familiars start telling him what happened in their own languages. The MC listens and says yes, he was clearly under the influence, because the magic stone blocks probing techniques. Then the aura around him changes, and a gravestone appears in the air. He thinks confused, what the hell, and then a picture arrives. Leon with a bouquet of flowers in his hands, turning toward his mother and saying that it is him. He put the flowers on his mother's grave and continued, because the moment the protagonist disappeared, his brother started attacking him, and the moment the protagonist was born, she died. Their family was under an influence. The brothers cannot get along, because as long as the MC lives, misfortune follows them. Let her watch over them from heaven. He will avenge the humiliation caused to her and settle the score for her death. The protagonist thinks, amazed, that these are Leon's memories transmitted directly into his brain by the magic stone's flare, because the demon stone blocked his abilities, and it did not block Leon. Memories of his other side flood into his head. No question about it. He says out loud, sadly, that being alive was already a crime. He has heard all of it before. He is tired of hearing it. Goblia calls out to him anxiously. The protagonist turns to his familiars and says, please forgive him, and they have to stay with his brother a little longer, because the three of them stop him. His allies answer eagerly. Meanwhile, Leon approaches the cave. Following the bloody footprints, the monster slams the cave entrance with everything it has, crushing the stones underneath the impact. His brother screams, asking where he is. The protagonist answers that he is right here. The entity's vision blurs. It screams the question again. Rufna appears in front of him. Leon roars the question a third time. With those words, he reaches for the wolf and shouts the protagonist's name again, at which point the familiar activates its magical howl. Right away, a frantic vibration fills the air, the aura shifts, and the enemy pulls back in surprise. The MC shouts for Goblia to attack now. The girl rushes forward eagerly and closes on Leon from behind. The protagonist stands in front of his brother, thinking about how Rufna's unique skill temporarily binds its target in a golden bridle. He shouts out loud to his brother that it is over. And with those words, he and Goblia strike him directly on the spot where the magic stones are sitting inside him. The items fall out of his body, blood comes out of the wound, and Leon goes down. His body starts simply dissolving into the air in front of the protagonist and his familiars. The MC works out that the reaction to an enormous flow of magical power is astralizing the body. Even his skills cannot stop it now. He says his brother's name out loud, and says he already severed every tie he had with the world above. What happens to this man now is of no concern to him. He simply feels sorry for his mother. He regrets it. Then the spirit of a woman appears in the air and flies toward Leon with both arms out. He whispers for his dear mother. The protagonist wonders, surprised, whether she came for him. Leon, whose body has been reduced to a pair of shoulders and a head, grins and says finally, because he met her before anybody else did. From this moment, the two of them are together forever, and just like that, his body vanishes into the air. The MC stands there thinking for a while, and finally tells his familiars they can go. Sometime later in the overworld, a general cleaning is underway at the Backhurst estate. The head maid tells Marnus to deal with that window. The girl obediently answers that she will. She picks up a bucket of water and wonders whether Leon has come home yet. While cleaning that window, she overhears two maids talking about how terrible all of it is, and how the man is losing his children one at a time. Naturally, Marnus becomes wary, and at that exact moment the collar falls off her neck. The girl picks it up slowly and stares at it sadly. The head maid asks whether something is wrong. She says no, it is fine, and she has some fireproof rubbish here she wants to go and throw away. The woman says fine, and to go and handle it. Marnus goes outside and finds somewhere safe. She looks at the collar and reflects that Leon died down there, exactly as planned. With those thoughts, she throws the collar away and says, delighted, that now the protagonist should wait for her, because she is coming to him. Meanwhile, the protagonist is enjoying the beauty of the forest, comfortably settled among the flowers. His familiars are jumping happily around him. Sometime later, the allies return to the village. Orpheus, perplexed, asks what he means. The gacha is what he meant, because the trip to the slime village happened. Correct. The protagonist says no, and that he is still in the process. He looks at Livia, who is peering sheepishly around the corner of a building, and asks what happened. The girl says guiltily that it is terrible because she wanted to be useful to him. He looks at Orpheus, surprised, and asks whether he did not tell her. The werewolf says he did, and apparently she wanted him to tell her personally. He tells the girl sheepishly to forgive him, because he was in a hurry. She puts both hands on her hips and shouts, indignant, that she does not know anything. Of course, the MC stares at her in surprise. Right away, Livia deflates and asks, anxious, what is wrong? The protagonist laughs and says he has never once seen her angry before. That is something new. To nobody's surprise, the girl goes red to the roots of her hair and protests sheepishly that he cannot flatter her like that. He says, surprised that he was not flattering anybody. The girl declares categorically that she's not listening to him. How did this happen? Does he not think Goblia has changed? The protagonist says exactly, and that all of it comes from evolution. She says, surprised, what? And then congratulates him on that. Still, what kind of outfit is that? The MC says, perplexed, that he made the outfit with a tailoring technique. He tried to model it on something out of a book he read in the night school library, and he thinks he did a fairly good job. Livia admits sheepishly that yes, it is very cute, meaning she is not exactly outraged. She means, has the girl not matured somewhat? Incidentally, perhaps she should have been made a little taller. No, that is not it. That is not what she meant. Goblia is jumping around near him while this is happening. He looks at her, puts a hand on her head, and says jumping does not make anybody taller. Livia, looking at that curvaceous figure, shouts, indignant, that he is an idiot, and runs off. The protagonist says her name in bewilderment, and the girl has already fled past the edge of the village. Sadly, he says, confused, that she left. Orpheus asks where that leaves them. Does he want to fool around with no Livia in it? The protagonist says no, he will wait because she was probably joking. The werewolf says, hopefully, exactly. A while later, the werewolf asks why he has not told him what happened in the slime village. He says he sees. Once he has finished the story, Orpheus asks, surprised, vampires with wolves. The MC says yes, because Sufi was told about the 3 wolves who turned up that morning, every one of them carrying a magic stone. He did not tell them, and Orpheus, who was there with him, is the brother of the werewolf King Veld. A vampire offered him one of those items in the past, and he refused. Except then his brother made a deal with that vampire, because vampires can build magical tools and magical stones as well. Solving this problem later while relying purely on their own strength would be extremely difficult. Sufi replied that she understands what he is talking about, except that would put them on the same footing as the werewolves. And doing that means never being able to face their own dead comrades. In the end, she cannot form an alliance with them. He stood up and said calmly that he understands she is worried about her people. Although here, if she needs anything, all of it gets handled together. Currently, he says they did not form an alliance, although they felt the threat and it was worth doing. Orpheus says he is sorry. Cross asks what he is apologizing for. He says that before, the inhabitants of this forest treated people arriving from the upper world with nothing more than a little caution. Besides which, there were almost no conflicts between creatures. They, the werewolves, broke the local order. He notices the man is nervous, stands up, and says he is taking far too much onto himself. He will be the link between them. All the man needs to think about is stopping his brother's outbursts. He says his name, and he says he is thinking about every part of what surrounds him. He knew it. He is the one who deserves to be king of the werewolves. He notices Livia coming toward them and says they were just waiting for her. She asks loudly and thoroughly displeased why he did not come after her. Several werewolves sitting behind the house overhear that conversation and say the master used to be different. He knew they would not be able to beat his brother. He has made up his mind, and if they go back to that village now, he is certain those people kill them. Although it is still considerably better than sitting here, he does not want to see the master in this state anymore. Meanwhile, in the upper world at the Rayfield house, in the bathhouse, a maid calls to Lady Ellis, apologizes and says the head of the house is calling for her. She gets out of the bath and says she understands. The servants help her dress, after which she comes to her father's study and announces that it is her. She goes in, and he says he hears she dealt with the demons successfully. She says she is being pushed at from every direction and working extremely hard on every problem this country has. He says 2 pieces of news are waiting for her. The Backhurst family first, because Leon went down to the netherworld and has still not come back. Guides went looking and turned up the body of his companion and nothing whatsoever of him. She makes an effort to remember him and decides he is the same person who lost that fight. She told him beforehand to work more cunningly than that, and she is the one who gave him the order in the first place. It was a masterpiece, sending every scrap of hatred toward him. Her father says one more thing, because there are rumors of unrest inside the Mycelian family. Also that Minyu might be part of a search party. She is startled by that, and he says the king has changed his attitude and now prioritizes defense against demon attacks, which makes it important to build at least some semblance of a relationship, although he does not think they sent her without thinking about it. They want to guarantee success by sending the girl who is friends with him. She says that in that case she goes there immediately. He forbids it, and she says loudly that if something happens to them, their position, he tells her to think this situation through properly. No rumor gets in the way of their service to this country. Ellis reflects that she does not like this girl approaching him without her there. She also remembers what Minyu told her about knowing nothing at all about the main character, and starts thinking about it. She calls to her father and says perhaps she is not thinking about his return. He asks her to explain that, and she says she is not attached to her aristocratic position. If he says he intends to stay down there, then most likely she stays with him. He asks how she can possibly say that. She says it is because the girl already told her so. He says that in that case it is perhaps worth preventing her from being sent down at all. She wants to say something, and her father says entirely serious that she should stop. He tells her he is not allowing her to go down there. The conversation is over, and she can go back to her room. Ellis returns, throws a pillow at the wall in anger, and says loudly that her father is an idiot. Still, she starts crying and says she wants to see him. Meanwhile, in the lower world, Sufi stands in the forest, looks at her own hand and says that people are all liars. A slime comes to her, calls out and says an army of battle wolves is already on the way. She says calmly that she knew they would come. Meanwhile, in his own village, the MC says that this is correct, and the first thing they do is take the slime village. They are setting out. He calls Livia over and asks her to take care of this village's defense, in case. She says she is asking to be taken along because she wants to be useful to the master. He walks over, puts a hand on her shoulder and says she has to understand, because with her here, he can use his power without worrying. She is the only one who can do that. She blushes, looks at him with admiration, then turns around sharply and reflects on waiting for her master to come back from a battlefield, which is so feminine. She turns to him and says she understands everything. She wishes him luck in the war. He turns to the villagers and says they are ready to leave. What our boy does not know is what has already started moving toward the swamp. He feels a pain in his shoulder and wonders what just happened. A goblin comes over and asks the master whether something is wrong. He says no and starts to say something else. And a werewolf runs up to them, calls to them loudly, and says they have a problem. He brings Orpheus a note, which he reads, and says worried that 3 of his men have deserted. Meanwhile, in the werewolf village in the north, the 3 deserters kneel, and Veld says so now they want to join his clan. One of them agrees and his comrades say loudly that their boss would never permit anything like this. They need to stop pretending to be idiots. He says Kiba's name with a serious expression and tells him to raise his head. He does, and Veld says that recently one of their people went to that village and did not come back. Does he know anything about that? He remembers Cross saying earlier that the northerners who arrived were dealt with. He says it appears their new human leader did it. The werewolves are outraged and ask loudly whether he said human leader. This idiot should not be fooling them. He says smirking that he has heard rumors about a very powerful person appearing in the lower world, although he never once thought his brother would be standing beside him. When a noble werewolf bows in front of a mortal, it is hardly surprising his own people got tired of him. Fine. They accept the three of them into their home, although nobody gets let in without proof. It would be fair for them to show sincerity. Correct. What the three of them do not know is what proof of sincerity costs in this clan, because they bring him a dagger, which he throws onto the floor beside them, and says they will see what these three are willing to do for a place in the clan. He looks at his comrades, gathers his resolve, puts the blade against his little finger, and says this was something he prepared himself for before he ever walked in here. A little later he goes into his office, and his comrades ask whether he is absolutely certain, because something here is wrong. Correct. Veld asks what he is talking about. He asks whether they are up to something, because nobody simply walks up and joins. He asks calmly, so what? Does he think his gang is not worthy of being joined? Perhaps he does not care for their rules either. Obviously they can put him in his place quickly. The other clan members smirk and say that is true, and if it comes to it, they can give him preventative treatment in a prison cell. He becomes worried about that and decides he should change the subject. He calls to the boss and asks whether he is taking the sword with him this time. The others call him an idiot, and he says it would be excellent for dealing with slimes. Veld walks over and throws him into the nearest wall with one powerful punch, breaking the wall. Then he breathes out and says that finally there is peace and quiet. His comrades decide, worried that the man is an idiot, because talking about that sword is forbidden. That sword is the one thing the Lord, though he is permanently hunting for power. They call to the boss and say it is time for them to leave. He remembers that and says they can start swallowing magic stones. Within seconds they do it, and he looks up and remarks on how beautiful the moon is tonight. He says, smiling widely, that they are moving out to begin their raid. Meanwhile, Orpheus walks through the forest with a group of goblins and werewolves, and says they are nearly at the slime village, so they should prepare. The werewolves agree and say that is their boss. Kiba and the others pulled back, and he was still determined. The protagonist looks at him and notices that worried, thoughtful expression, because he remembers losing a wooden sword duel to Veld as a child, and their father announcing loudly that it was over. A victory by an enormous margin. Sometime later he called to his father and asked who these people are. He said, smiling widely, that they are Kai, Kiba and Ro, left to right, and now he trains them. One of them came over and said, it is nice to meet him. He pushed the hand away and said, serious, that he should not get carried away. Does he not know who he is? After which Kiba beat him in a duel with wooden swords and said he knows exactly who he is, the weakest of all of them. His father said his name and told him he has until the next full moon. He handles the three of them. Orpheus was startled by that and asked loudly whether it is going to be 3 against 1. He said that failing means being disowned. Then they need to keep an eye on him. They said the boss can leave it to them. They have to go because there's not much time. What will they do? He became furious about that, grabbed him by the collar and said loudly that he should not take on too much. He beats all 3 of them to death, after which he started spending a great deal of time with those 3, practicing swordsmanship. Sometime later on the full moon, he managed to beat all 3 of them at once. Luckily, he was surprised himself by how well it went, and Kiba called him master, smiling and said he is getting stronger. He said confident that this is indeed the case. Currently, the 3 of them are locked in a cage, and Ro asks him, worried, to hold on because he is working on a potion. It appears that finger is not growing back anytime soon. If they try to get inside, they get discovered immediately. He closes a hand into a fist and says they will have to act with the forces they have and they have to try. For Orpheus, laying his own life down is something he is ready for, even if the bill comes as a finger or 2. Determined smiles arrive on their faces and he says that even so, everything is going according to plan so far. The first thing they have to do is get into the dungeon. Also, most of the men are free today, so security is light. Although the actual reason they came here is the sword their friend was supposed to be holding. Time to get to work. Naturally, Kai says it is time to use his lockpicking skills, because with that sword he is certainly reborn and the 3 of them atone for their master's guilt. Meanwhile, Veld has already reached the slime village, and he says, smirking, that he never told anybody the date of his visit, and the entire clan turned out to greet him. She could not resist getting a look at her new master. Sufi says no and that werewolves are the most fickle creatures alive on the night of a full moon, so they knew he would attack today. She looks at his men and works out that something is wrong with them, because this is clearly not the effect of a full moon. It appears the magic stone is real. She says they turn around and go back, because nobody here becomes their slave. He says with a cruel grin that this is clear and there is nothing he can do, in which case he exterminates every last one of them. She transforms entirely serious and says this village is going to be free. She waves a hand and a great many slimes start crawling through the trees. The werewolves look at that and ask what the matter is. Did they leave and abandon their chief? They have to watch her because there is a swamp directly behind her. If she gets into trouble, she runs into that swamp, and they cannot allow it. One of them charges her and immediately punches her in the stomach, and she does not so much as move. And just like that, his hand starts melting. He screams in pain and asks loudly whether that is genuinely acid. It cannot be. Is she made entirely of acid? Where exactly did they go wrong? At that exact moment, slimes start dropping out of the trees onto the werewolves. They scream in pain and ask what they are doing. They should stop panicking because they have magic stones. Sufi creates a blade out of slime, attacks several opponents with it, and destroys the magic stones inside their bodies. She looks at the rest of them entirely entirely serious, and they start getting nervous, saying they cannot believe she beat those men that easily. She reflects that only together can they manage this, and the victory belongs to them. She waves a hand and tells her brothers they are digesting every one of these werewolves. In the end, they cannot beat slimes, and they say loudly that they cannot believe everything here is acid. What are they going to do? Veld, entirely serious, works out that they knew about the magic stone, which can only mean one thing. He did not know whether they were acid slimes, because slimes like that should only exist where strong acid is constantly erupting. If so, then most likely it is a skill. Although why do this many slimes carry the same skill? He looks at Sufi and notices slime coming out from under her feet. She says serious, that they no longer have a chance, and they should retreat while they still can. And to her surprise, he waves a hand with an enormous grin, and puts a magical wave into her. That blow cuts the tree standing behind her, and the slimes are extremely surprised by it. He says she used her skills to purify the acid, pumping water out of the swamp. Then she ran that acid through a tube from her feet up to the slimes in the trees. Did she seriously think that would fool him? So all he ever had to do was break the chain. She is quite smart for a slime, and it does not help her. Is that everything she has, or is there a backup plan? A slime with a knife jumps in behind him, calls him a murderer and tells him to prepare to die. Sufi sees it and shouts at him to wait. Veld sees it too, and runs him through immediately with his sword, which sets her crying and screaming. Sadly, he kills the man and asks arrogantly whether he thinks he remembers everybody he has killed. This is starting to irritate him, and that is right. He does not need to play with them any longer. It is time for them to die. He orders his subjects loudly to kill all of them, and the werewolves go after them immediately. She drops to her knees in despair, asks him to stop it, and says loudly that she will do whatever he tells her to, as long as he does not kill them. And he says loudly that it is too late. This is her own fault, and now she watches her friends die because of stupid pride. He orders all of them killed again, and she closes her eyes, so she does not have to see it. Right away, the werewolves look back because somebody is approaching from behind, which is our boy, who takes down several werewolves nearby with extremely fast strikes. He gets the attention of the leaders of both villages and says that having the full moon on your side is very much in the spirit of werewolves, although is leaning on a magic stone, not somewhat against the rules. She starts to say something with tears in her eyes, and Veld calls him a freak and asks where he came from. The protagonist points at himself, entirely serious, and says he is her friend. Now he remembers being a child and calling to Orpheus and asking how his scars were doing after a fight. He said, delighted that everything is fine and he is confident about his recovery, although he already knew that this one is the strongest. Veld said that incidentally he heard Kiba and the others have a coach. He said loudly that this is not so and he is not a coach. Father would not want boys their age trained, so it is not like that. He is giving them friendly help, whereas this one is an entirely different matter. He thinks he is capable of replacing their father. He said he does not know about that. Perhaps he is better suited to it than him. He said loudly in surprise that everybody in the village says this one is the strongest, and he will certainly become the next chief. What is the point of jokes like that? He thought about it, became more serious, and asked what strength actually is. Orpheus did not understand it, and he said he can ignore that. He simply needs to keep training them. He said loudly that he already told him he is not a trainer and they are simply friends. At the moment, he asks entirely serious whether this is some kind of joke. Cross, equally serious, says he is not joking, and he came here to help her because they are friends. A goblin comes over and tells the master that they are ready as well, at his command, whenever he wishes. He orders them forward, and at that exact moment Veld runs Sufi through with his sword and says loudly that he had better not move. She feels severe pain and he says, smirking, that they leave here immediately, or his friend's core gets cut in half. The slimes are extremely worried about their master, and he says this is exactly what everybody here has been talking about. He senses this would be a good opponent, and if he keeps interfering, he ends up like the rest of them. Our boy does not listen, uses enhanced agility, takes hold of her carefully, and carries her away from him. He turns around with a shocked expression, and the protagonist shouts that their troops should slow them down. The goblins protect the slime tribe first. He asks wary what he just did. He says, calmly, that he simply used his skills. Incidentally, he did not swallow a magic stone the way they did. He looks at Sufi and asks what she says about that. She asks whether he could put her down. Of course, he apologizes, puts her down, and asks whether she is all right. Where did the blade land? She looks away with a sad expression and says everything is fine, and she is in his debt again. He asks why she did not simply let them handle it for now. She thinks about it and says she already gave in to his attack once, and as chief she could not interfere any further. Then she starts crying again, and says she is asking for help for their village. The goblins in his squad start giving first aid to the wounded, and werewolves from the two different villages start fighting each other. The werewolves get nervous about that and ask how any of this turned out this way. Veld grinds his teeth, calls to the man and says he has to come out and duel him. If he wins, he takes this village and his villages. If Veld wins, he does whatever he likes with them. Is that not a worthy condition? The MC says calmly that obviously he does not mind, and he is not the one he should be fighting. He is surprised by that, and Orpheus walks up behind him. He asks, smirking, whether that is his younger brother, the one too weak to fight fairly. He turns to him and says, this is a fine moment to put an end to a life this shameful, and he should be thankful for the mercy he is being shown. He says his name entirely serious and says he is the one living in shame. He cannot allow somebody to go on living who brings still more shame onto their clan. He laughs at him and says he never stops talking about the clan, and that even if he loses this duel, the conditions do not change. Is the man absolutely certain about that? He agrees, confident, and says he does not mind. Sufi is startled by that and says, loudly, that she thought he would be the one fighting. He turns to her and says he never once said it would be him. She says loudly and displeased that the future of her tribe is at stake here. If this werewolf loses, every one of them is finished. The MC asks her to calm down and says everything will be fine, honestly. Everybody stops fighting, lights fires, and crowds around the two duelists. What Orpheus does not know is that his brother is carrying more than a stone. The moment the start is announced, he charges, thinking that a half-serious attack will not hurt this man, particularly with the magic stones involved. He dashes in holding his sword out in front of him and uses the fire sword style. Veld is surprised by that attack and registers how fast it is. He manages to avoid the blow and says, smirking, that as he sees it, the boy has learned how to fight. It appears this is going to be a little fun. He turns to him and says, loudly, that he taught him, and today he is here to defeat him. They keep fighting, and Veld says loudly that it pains him watching the boy try to present himself as more skilled than he is. He starts landing a great many heavy blows, and with his subjects cheering behind him, he asks them to be silent. Orpheus says loudly that he will not let him mock his father and cross any longer. He swears on his own name that this reign ends. He strikes back, knocks the sword out of his hands, and pushes him away. To nobody's surprise, the spectators are startled by that, and he says it is all over. Veld laughs and says he understands everything. He should let him tell him something. He gives him his name, and while he is confused by it, puts an extremely fast, extremely hard blow into his head. He is genuinely shocked by that and realizes he cannot see the man's movements at all. Meanwhile, back in the village, a goblin calls to Livia, who is sitting at the entrance, and says she should rest a while and let them handle things. She says she is grateful for the concern and they are fine. She says embarrassed that the master is fighting right now, and she wants to be close to him, at least in her head. She remembers the two of them leaving, folds her hands in front of her in prayer, and wishes both of them a safe journey. Meanwhile, Orpheus takes an extremely heavy punch to the stomach and is coughing blood. Luckily, he recovers fast and strikes with the sword, and Veld stops it with one hand and breaks the blade. He is shocked by that, and the man puts a fist into his head. He goes down onto the ground, looks up at him, and says this is an unusual enhancement, and not only because of a magic stone. He says loudly and grinning enormously that he is right because he also has a magical name. He is startled by that information, and the protagonist wonders whether this man genuinely carries a magical name as well. He lifts his head with an enormous grin and says it feels so good, like being born again. He felt exactly the same when that man handed him a name, correct? Now, with the magic stone and the name and his own talent, he will see how long the boy lasts. He attacks a few more times, and Orpheus goes down onto the ground, thinking that the same thing is happening as back then, because he remembers the past, and their duel and spectators asking in confusion what happened to him. Nobody had ever seen him like that. It was as though he had become somebody else. He went down onto the ground and asked his brother, frightened, to stop, except Veld did not listen, and started laughing loudly with a mad expression, and said that this is what power is. Their father ran over fast and put an extremely heavy punch into his head. He was thrown into the stone, and the man said, entirely serious, that he received this power from outside himself. Correct? Because there is no other way to explain it. And if he will not listen to the voice of reason, he gets punished accordingly. Orpheus reflects that his brother was sent to the island that day, and everything he had went with him. When the sentence ended, he regretted what he had done, and swore to work hard and make his family better. Currently, he asks, loudly and unhappily, why he did that. Why did he choose this wrong path? Veld laughs and asks what he is talking about. He shows him their friend's severed finger, and says he is asking that question after being betrayed by his own people. He looks worried and starts to ask something, and Veld says that in the end, that bond was nothing more than a sham. His well-deserved end has finally arrived, and he even brought them new slaves. He swings his sword and declares loudly that he kills him, and that this entire territory belongs to him. Everybody is worried about that. What Veld does not know is what 3 deserters spent last night stealing out of his own dungeon. Because at the last possible moment, Kiba runs up and asks him loudly to wait. Everybody turns to him and says his name, and the werewolf declares loudly that this sword belongs to the boss. Orpheus says his name, and asks worried where Ro and Kai are. He says they are bait to confuse the pursuers. He grinds his teeth, lifts the sword, and says loudly that only the master chosen as leader can draw this blade. He throws it to him and says loudly that for their leader, or rather for their entire tribe, he has to take it. He catches the sword in one hand, and at that moment a cloud of smoke appears in front of him. The spirit of his father stands there, says his name, and says that if he is seeing this ghost now, it means he is dead. Everybody listens, because werewolves used to keep order in this forest through physical strength, except they became cruel, and other races began to fear them. Before his father's time that was good, and now enemies out of the upper world are becoming a threat to the lower one. The old werewolf habits have to go, and other races have to be stood beside. He is what holds their race up, and he leads this forest with kindness and with courage. If Veld is present, then these words are for him. Unworthy power deceives the soul. True strength is born out of understanding each other and out of a shared road. From this point forward, they work together to protect their people and their lands. He hopes he will hear him, and that, like in the old days, the two of them fight side by side. Within seconds, the sword falls to the ground. The werewolves are moved by what they heard, and Orpheus reflects that he is grateful to his father and hoped for exactly the same thing. Veld stands off to one side and says, smirking, that nothing can be done. He hoped the man had become normal, Then he immediately says loudly and furiously that this is absolute nonsense, because he thought that was a sword with enormous power in it, and he could not have imagined it was a collection of moralizing from old men. He throws the sword away and says loudly and thoroughly displeased that he cannot stand this. Then he runs Kiba through, and Kiba calls out to the master and says he definitely wins. Orpheus starts crying at what just happened, and the MC turns to the goblin and shouts at him to bring the potion quickly. Still, he goes down onto the ground and keeps crying. Sufi starts crying too, looking desperate and says it is all over. He says displeased that he does not forgive him. Veld stands nearby and says displeased that the man deceived him and therefore deserved to die. He will never forgive himself for having so much as a moment of doubt about it. Orpheus stands up, and Veld watches that, and his attention goes to a system window, which says he is ready for evolution. Does he want to begin? He says his name loudly and asks whether he can kill him now. His brother was terrible, and now is a special case, and it is time for him to decide. He asks again, will he be able to kill him? He agrees loudly and without hesitating, because that man killed his father and took his friend's life. He does not give up anymore, and he kills him right here. He says loudly and smiling that these are the words he has been waiting for. He uses demon evolution art, and at that same moment strong energy wraps around his body. His body changes, and he says entirely serious that he can try attacking now. Veld looks at him, smirking, and asks whether he is finished. He runs at him fast, puts his sword into him, and says he does not know what that man did to him, and he is wasting his time. When the dust clears, he sees that the arm has changed under the effect of a berserk skill, and his own sword has cracked. He is surprised by that and wonders what kind of hair this is supposed to be. He says loudly that he is wasting his time, and he is finished. He starts attacking again and says loudly that this is body hair and nothing more, and he smashes him to pieces. Orpheus counters that fist with his arm and stops the sword strike dead. He pulls his own fist back and says loudly that this is the wrath of him, and of his father, and of the werewolf clan. He hits Veld extremely fast with that hand, and wounds him badly, and the man says loudly that it is impossible. And just like that, he goes down and his magic stone breaks. He is breathing heavily from exhaustion, and his brother laughs and says that all of it is true. Every one of them talks about cooperation and coexistence. Now their clan is finished. Cross asks whether he is the one who gave him the demon name. Correct. Because he manipulated him. Carry a demon name, and resisting the overlord stops being possible for the rest of your life. So even a war against the werewolves ends with that man holding the lower world and taking every part of it. He did not want the inhabitants of the lower world uniting, so he handed him a demon name and made him kill his father. Veld starts crying and says that. So this is how it is, and the man was playing him this entire time. The main loser here is himself. Naturally, Orpheus walks over and hugs him. He is surprised by that, closes his eyes and says he has to stop, because he killed his father and killed his friend. He should not make the werewolf king look bad. He does not let go, and says he hated him, and that is true, and he was still his dear brother. He remembers their childhood, his hands start trembling, and he says he is asking him to kill this man, whose name is he cannot finish, because severe pain arrives and Orpheus notices and calls out loudly for his brother. Veld says his name before he dies, and he starts crying and holds him and says the word brother loudly. In the end they bury him, and the protagonist says perhaps there was a curse on him, preventing him from saying the master's name. Orpheus says his father spoke about a veiled curse on the day his brother went to prison, and that repaying it would take years. After his duties were served, his brother appeared to be back to normal, and the curse was eating him further the entire time. He says whoever handed him that demon name is a genuinely vile person. The purpose is still unknown, and sooner or later that person stands in their way. He agrees with it, and wonders whether he is feeling depressed. He starts walking away and says next time they go to the tomb of Kiba and the others. Then he is extremely surprised, because his friends come over to him and call to him with joyful expressions. One of them, delighted, calls him master, and says he did it, and he is their werewolf king. To nobody's surprise, Orpheus punches him in the face. He goes down onto the ground and says loudly and unhappily that this hurts after all. He is angry and says loudly that if he can be hit, then he is not a ghost. So how is he still alive? The MC says a potion got into him fast enough to save him. A scouting team went out after those three early on to watch them. He remembers what happened earlier and asks what that letter was. Then, Kiba says calmly that he simply wrote down where they were going. He starts to ask something, confused, and Kiba asks what he is talking about. Did he genuinely think they were against him, purely because nobody communicated? He hits him again, and he asks displeased why he was hit again. He says the weak Orpheus no longer exists, because he lets nobody die, and he does not let anybody down again. So they stay quiet and obey him, the true king of the werewolves. His friends agree with happy faces, and Cross says with a small smile that it appears they are doing fine. Sufi comes over and asks whether there's room for a question. What exactly was his plan if that duel had gone badly? He turns to her and says obviously he would have joined in, because when everybody's lives are at stake he does not care about any rules. She deactivates her transformation, kneels in front of him, and says that from now on, she and the slime tribe serve him. He asks whether his answer was genuinely that appealing. He thought they hated humans to begin with. She says that even if they were left alone, a more vicious enemy invades them shortly, and his fighting skill and his leadership are both trustworthy. Although that is not the only reason, because she genuinely liked the taste of his sweat. He is thrown by that, and she says that first when she shook his hand and then when he carried her, her instincts started craving his fluids. She leans toward him and says she hopes he treats her to something else. Sadly, he pushes her away, refusing, and she says that in that case she simply takes a mouthful right now. Meanwhile, in the overworld, the maid knocks on the door, wishes Mistress Ellis a good morning, and asks whether she is asleep. She has been shut in all day, which is unhealthy, so she should go out for fresh air. What the maid does not know is that the room on the other side of that door is empty. She opens it, apologizes, and is extremely surprised by what she sees in that room. She calls loudly for the master, who asks entirely calm why she is making this much noise during a meal. She tells him what has happened, and he is extremely surprised by it. Meanwhile, she is riding a horse alongside several knights, asking her father's forgiveness and saying she is a bad daughter who has abandoned her duties. Except she could not wait any longer, because they are going to the underworld. A little later, Lord Mycelian comes to him and asks when he intends to stop all of this. Lord Rayfield turns to him and says he thinks quickly. He laughs and says he cannot believe what the man has done, because he disobeyed a royal order and sent his daughter to search the lower world. So who deals with the demons in the upper world now? He says this was not part of his plans, and he assures him of it. He laughs and says obviously, and that he believes it. He reflects, entirely calm, that the old Ellis would simply have brought him home. What Minhu has planned is unknown, and he is confident his daughter follows her example. The position of House Rayfield is under threat, so he buys time until he finds his daughter. He calls to him and says that if his daughter comes back with a member of the Backhurst family, every laurel goes to him. They do not approve of searching down there, and this girl's selfishness is their fault. He reflects that every tunnel between the two worlds comes out somewhere different, so searching is hard and none of it matters once the boy is home. He says they cover every cost until Ellis returns, although in exchange he wants all of it kept secret. Lord Mycelian laughs and says so be it, and he accepts the offer. She heard that. They have agreed. Minhu calmly agrees with her father, thinking that she never expected to be gotten ahead of. She underestimated her, and gave away far too many hints, although she will not be thrown off her goal. Meanwhile, back below, Livia sat at the village entrance until morning, and somebody calls to her loudly, and tells her the master has returned. She runs straight to the protagonist and says joyfully, "Welcome back. Did they do a good job? She waited for him here all day." Then she is shocked to see Sufi clinging to him, and asks loudly what this is. He turns to her and says he is grateful she stayed here. She starts crying and says loudly that he is such a playboy, exactly as expected of him. He asks confused whether he should take that as a compliment. She looks at them from the side, introduces herself with a happy smile and says it is nice to meet her, because she is the one who knows what his sweat tastes like. Livia is thrown by that and asks loudly what that is supposed to mean. He says displeased that he agrees, and it does sound simply disgusting. She says exchanging bodily fluids is a very common form of communication between slimes. Livia decides, thoroughly displeased, that she cannot allow those two to strengthen their relationship. She needs to make the first move. So she walks up to him, licks his face, and says loudly that she wants that too. He turns to her with a confused expression. She drops to the ground, and he says her name loudly. A little later, he brings her home and asks whether she has calmed down. She agrees and apologizes for not having greeted him properly. He says he did not know Sufi would do something like that. She says displeased that even so he was already exchanging fluids with her. He denies it, confused and loudly, and says it was entirely one-sided, because she simply grabbed his arm. She did it in a way that left him no options. It was a horror he would prefer not to remember. She asks, embarrassed, whether that means he has not kissed her yet. He confirms it, and she turns to him, embarrassed, and asks whether he wants to kiss her. He starts getting nervous, turns to her, takes her by the shoulders, and they are interrupted by somebody calling to him and saying the luggage has been delivered. He thanks them, starts leaving, and says he will be back shortly. Still, she feels sad about that, and then he leans toward her and kisses her. After which he leaves, she becomes deeply embarrassed, and he says he is going to clear a plot of land for a settlement. Except she notices something strange happening with the MC, and calls out to him worried. He turns to her and asks entirely calm whether something is wrong. It is stopped. She says no, confused, and wonders what it was, and whether she imagined it. Later, slimes come to him and ask whether they can genuinely live here. He agrees, reflecting that they have created conditions similar to the village those people came from. Liquids are what they understand, which makes them useful for potion work and a great deal besides. Werewolves who joined the village recently come over and ask what they should be doing. He asks them to follow him, reflecting that after the death of their leader, some of the werewolves had to be sheltered, because loyalty to the previous leader was never universal. Some of them were invited in as guests instead, so that relations with the residents could grow over time. He brings the werewolves to his home and says that as long as nobody here causes problems for anybody else, everything is fine. Before anything else, could they describe what happened when a magic stone went into them? One of them says that the moment it went into his mouth he started blacking out, and gradually his consciousness cleared, and now he feels fine, although some of them lost their minds, and he is certain that thing is why. Cross asks whether they have a magic stone with them. Right away they agree, hand it over, and he uses appraisal and works out that this stone can be appraised, so it was created by a vampire. The werewolf says his name and says he used to handle the deals, and remembers that the next one is scheduled for the night of the full moon. He looks away thoughtful and says it is time to meet the creator of that stone. What Vania does not know is who is currently running that village. She comes up to it, stands in front of the entrance, and says it has been a while since she was here. It is somehow quiet. Not frightening though. She has been lying around a while, so it is time to stretch her legs. Time to show off her skills. A while later, the protagonist tells her this village belongs to them now. She is the head of the vampire tribe. Correct. He would like to talk to her about that vile magic stone they are producing. Vania drops to her knees in front of him and says she is terribly sorry she caused them trouble. She is so sorry. Privately, she is lamenting all of it, because it would never have occurred to her that anybody could defeat her. And now there is this business about stones. He clearly hates the magic stone they built. Worst case, this man kills her right here. And every part of it comes from her deals with the wolves. The protagonist asks, incidentally, what her name is. Of course, the girl tells him. He continues saying, there is one thing he needs from her. Does any cure exist for what that stone does to a person? Vania answers, confused that there is not. She warned him in advance about the side effects of absorbing one. One of the villagers tells him, lives hang on this. Please, he has to do something. The MC goes deep into thought. Vania notes that he appears to be lost in it. If she plays this correctly, her clan prospers. The protagonist says there is something he wants her to look at. He holds a magic crystal up and asks for her opinion on it. Vania screams hysterically, asking what kind of demonic stone that is. He says it is a magic stone made by a fox. He knew her in the past. The other day somebody came down here, swallowed a pile of these, and lost his mind. Orpheus asks, surprised, when that happened. Livia says confused that she has never heard about it. The protagonist says they have no time to discuss it. Because if the magic stone and the body become one thing, a person keeps standing even without a head. Vania asks what happened to the ones who swallowed them. He says he defeated them, since there was no other option. The head of the vampires thinks amazed that nobody would have guessed that stone's power could be overcome at all. Small wonder she lost to him. She believed he could do it. The girl turns to him and says she has a favor to ask. She needs him to save her people who have been captured by ogres. He asks surprised ogres. She says a tribe of ogres living in a valley further north has been attacking and enslaving other tribes one after another. Livia says surprised that she has heard rumors about them. They are quite dangerous, on account of their size, their strength, and their power. Vania notes that besides vampires, their lair holds golems and dryads captive. With their help, she managed to escape. Today, she was going to help them escape as well. If he helps them, he can use her magical tools however he sees fit. Please let him help her people. The MC thinks bewildered, wolves, orcs, vampires. What the hell is going on here? Could all of it be connected to the man mentioned earlier? Livia asks whether he is going to leave everything as it is. The protagonist says no. He turns to Vania and asks for the hostages, how many there are, and how that settlement is laid out inside. Everything she knows about the ogre tribe. The girl, tears in her eyes, asks whether they are genuinely going to help them. He says that letting this go unpunished means the enemy keeps expanding its territory, and eventually they invade this village. Unable to hold the intensity of it in, Vania bursts into tears and shouts an enormous thank you. Because if she could not save them, he certainly can. The protagonist says they need to prepare properly. First of all, they study the ogre tribe, and also strengthen their skills with gacha. Then he goes quiet and appears lost in thought. Does he seem to have forgotten something? Then his face hardens and he shouts, exactly. Everybody needs to hold hands, because they are improving their abilities right now. He almost forgot about it. May's gacha season closes shortly. A while later, going through his stats, the MC notes that he has been busy with werewolves and slimes lately, and there are 22 episodes left in a row. He has rainbow skills that have not been developed yet, so this is his only chance. Vania asks, surprised, what on earth is happening here? The protagonist clicks something on the system screen and says he is spinning gacha. She asks, surprised, what that is? Livia says it is an extremely rare skill their master possesses, and with it they gain limitless power. Vania, seeing a chest in the air with magic balls carrying skill names flying out of it, shouts in confusion asking what those are. The protagonist looks at the names and says copper is the same as always. Then there is architecture, which means they can build better houses now. There is only one gold skill. Water magic is very versatile, so he is honestly happy about it. And now rainbow skills. Manipulating the magic balls, he thinks, please, let it be a monster guide. Luckily, his wish is destined to come true, which delights him openly. It worked, he shouts, joyfully. Yes, because he now has access to level 5 rainbow skills. Vania, surprised, clarifies whether he genuinely just acquired that skill. The MC says he thinks it is more accurate to say it is a skill he already had. He simply enhanced it. The head vampire notes, surprised that this is hard to believe. Because he can not only obtain several extremely rare skills, he can strengthen them as well. He shouts that something else is coming shortly. After waiting for the timer to reset, the protagonist speaks and the date changes. And this is the beginning of a new gacha. Information about available assassin and transformation skills opens in the system window, along with a new event. Assassin. Live in the darkness, be a shadow. That is the motto printed on this one. Sometime later, the allies have picked up experience fighting monsters. After the battle, the protagonist shouts that this is excellent, because he has finally accumulated 66 spins. Naturally, his comrades celebrate. Vania asks, surprised, assassin gacha. He says a rainbow skill is what he is after. 3 abilities sit in there. Assassin, transformation, and finding vulnerabilities. Only one of those means nothing to him, and that is assassin. Livia asks, perplexed, what he ultimately wants. perhaps spin the gacha 11 times. The protagonist says that frankly, he genuinely wanted to do it today, and it is late so he is holding off. Besides which, this is a new location, so there are certain to be monsters he has never seen. He needs to accumulate a great many experience points and spin immediately. Vania shouts that beating monsters gets him plenty of points. He says he has a proposition. She asks what that is. Does he want magical tools? Let her handle that. He looks at her and asks whether she could accept a demon name from him. The girl shouts confused, what? Why make an offer like that out of nowhere? Why would he do such a thing? The MC starts to explain and she cuts him off and tells him to be quiet because doing something like that at her age is so embarrassing. It is like becoming an adult. He wonders, puzzled, what she is talking about. Sufi remarks that receiving a demon name appears to be roughly equivalent to growing up in their culture. For a child, that is an enormous reason for joy. The protagonist asks, surprised whether she is genuinely a child. Livia asks him, excitedly, whether he felt she had matured when she received her demon name. He laughs and says there is no need to worry because he never treated her that way. She says sheepishly, right, and that the two of them simply did something. A memory of the kiss goes through her head. Vania wonders why the two of them have suddenly gone red. Sufi sounds genuinely innocent. Vania asks what gacha has to do with demon names in the first place. When she learns the answer, the girl shouts, surprised, asking whether points earned by demon name holders can also be spent on gacha, and what kind of shenanigans that is. Orpheus says he is fine with it. Livia remarks that helping him would be an enormous honor. The protagonist says Vania's name and tells her he only found out about it recently himself. She is indignant because he is going to turn her into a slave. She is certain of it. He argues that no, this is an equal contract, because skills are a factor in whether saving people like her succeeds. It also improves her status. It is synergy for both parties. To nobody's surprise, the girl is horrified. Such mature words. She is so frightened, although she will become an adult and use a demonic name. While later, the protagonist says 30,000 points. He has never seen numbers like this. Orpheus asks whether he is genuinely about to do 66 spins in a row. Livia says taking a short break would be better. The MC sighs and says no chance. He is doing it, because the experience points every one of them earned cannot be wasted. He activates the gacha and shouts, 66 spins in a row. Across the first 11 he gains a great many new skills. On the 22nd his stats rise. On the 33rd, new abilities open to him. And on the 44th, looking at the status screen, he sways and sits down on the ground. And just like that, he looks like an old man. Livia says his name in alarm. Orpheus notices he is overtired himself. The protagonist, holding his own head, says he is fine. He simply never had to spin this many at once. He is a little dizzy. A while later he looks at his allies and thanks all of them, because he did not think they could gather this many points for spins. Now they definitely level up. Orpheus grins, winks at him, and says obviously, Livia looks happy at that. On the 55th spin he gains several new skills. Barely upright, he breathes out and says for the last time. After spinning 66 times, he sees entirely different first-level skills and is surprised to notice that it worked. The MC celebrates, because the 66th succeeded. They did it. His friends celebrate alongside him. Sometime later, the protagonist Livia and Orpheus arrive at the ogre lair. The werewolf declares that this is it, the ogre village. They look down at the floors descending below them. Orpheus asks what they are going to do. Do they simply jump? The protagonist says that sounds good, obviously, and there are a great many hostages down there, so making a scene is unwise. A different approach is needed. The allies descend quietly and move carefully forward down a long corridor. Right away, voices arrive. The MC puts Assassin and the Art of Silent Step onto himself and onto both of his friends, and the three of them move closer. Two ogre guards are chatting. They wonder whether Ruga has started the feast already and why they are the ones on guard. The protagonist reflects that his silver skill, the Art of Silent Step, muffles both footsteps and the rustle of clothing. And that assassin, the rainbow one, sharpens how well he blocks sight and disappears into whatever is around him. Within seconds, the ogres, without time to understand what happened, before they are destroyed. The allies move on toward the dungeon holding the hostages. Katrina, sitting by a wall, hears somebody saying her name. She looks up, sees Vania standing in a small window frame, and asks, surprised, where she came from. The girl jumps down and apologizes for the wait. She is here to get her out, obviously. Katrina asks, perplexed, why she would take a risk like that. Then she adds sadly that they cannot run because of the collars around their necks, which hold them in place by force. The protagonist appears and asks them to wait a minute. He activates the Master Key art and uses it to unfasten the collar around the girl's neck. Luckily, she notes, surprised, that it worked. The protagonist says some of his skills unlock not only door locks but magical ones as well. Katrina turns to Vania, puts her palms against hers, and says she is glad to see her again. The girl says she missed her enormously as well. The MC says he does not want to interrupt them and they need to get out of here quickly. Vania shouts exactly, and tells Katrina they need her help. The girl covers her face sheepishly in front of the protagonist. He is surprised by that. Then the girl says it is nice to meet him, and she should have introduced herself sooner. He says perplexed, yes, obviously, and privately notes how fickle this girl is. Katrina says she is the leader of the Dryad tribe. Every one of her kind is in this prison, and other species are locked up somewhere nearby. The protagonist says fine, and they need to free them quickly. Could he in case give Katrina a demonic name? Vania shouts that it is a good idea, and asks the girl whether she is happy. Katrina covers her face with both hands, embarrassed. Vania notes that she knew she would react exactly like that. The MC says that once every collar is off, they get escorted to the exit. Vania adds that she will inform the vampires about what is happening. Then she turns to Katrina again and asks whether she will help them get the golems out. Sadly, the girl's eyes fill with tears. Vania asks, anxious, what happened? She says Gorga was badly hurt, and he has been crying all day. When the allies reach the golem's cage, he is kneeling, with his hands covered in blood, crying bitterly. Those cries shake the air. Vania calls his name anxiously. The protagonist asks what happened to him. Katrina says sadly that yesterday somebody possessed his body and he killed the people he loved. His allies are dumbfounded. Gorga turns to his dead comrade, lying under a sheet, and looks at him in silence. The protagonist speaks to the golem, gives his name as Cross, and says he is here to help all of them. The golem answers in a dull voice that it is meaningless. His friends are dead. Vania is indignant and says he should not talk like that. The MC says it is fine because the golem did nothing wrong. He was being manipulated. Correct. His friends died because of the ogre clan. Gorga screams in fury. No, he killed his friend. It is his fault. All of it is because of him. He should have died, not them. The protagonist wonders surprised how he ended up here. Katrina explains that Gorgon golems are a very rare race, long-lived and extremely resilient. She does not think he has ever lost anybody close to him before. Time is what he needs to take this in and make peace with it. The protagonist says nothing. She says his name confused. He says looking at the golem that he sympathizes. He reflects that for them, a short-lived species, losses do not land as hard. The MC holds out a hand to the golem and calls it by the demonic name Gorga, after which he removes the collar from its neck. The golem screams angrily. It does not need this. The protagonist answers calmly, because nobody handed him that power so he could take revenge on ogres. He holds it so the memory and the will of his family and his friends keep going. In the end, the golem looks at him in surprise. The protagonist continues. This is the only way he atones for his guilt. Gorga lifts his dead comrade onto his back without a word, and the prisoners walk out of that dungeon. Vania tells the MC it is good that he talked him out of it. Looking at him, she shudders, because his appearance is simply terrifying. She decides he is furious. He grinds his teeth and asks her to bring every prisoner out, because he is going to exterminate these ogres personally. Meanwhile, the captive elven girls are serving the ogres, carrying platters of food to them. Separately, on a pedestal, sits a leader named Ruga. His assistant shouts menacingly at one of them, saying she is dragging herself along like a turtle, and telling her to bring the drinks faster. The girl shudders in fear and begs forgiveness. He shouts that she is a useless slave. He kicks her, and asks whether she cannot even bring him soup anymore. The captive begs his forgiveness in tears, saying she has not eaten in a long time and is getting weaker. He roars, asking whether she is complaining about her life. Well, in that case, he simply has to help her out of her misery. With those words, he jumps up, swings his enormous sword, and says it is time for her to rest. What the ogres do not know is that somebody has already walked into that hall, because every lamp and every flame goes out and the room falls into darkness. The ogre shouts in confusion, "What is happening?" The fire has gone out. Somebody light it quickly. He is sober with anger. When the room lights up again, he looks at his fallen kin and shouts in bewilderment, "What is happening?" His head feels like it is split in half, and he goes over backward. The remaining ogres scream in confusion, "What is going on?" Seeing the protagonist and his allies, they ask, bewildered, who they are. The protagonist looks at the ogre leader, gives his name and says he came to free the prisoners and finish them off. The ogres stare at him in confusion. Ruga simply laughs in answer. His minions start shouting. 4 of them turned up, a human, a wolf, and 2 goblins. Is he laughing at them? The leader tells his kin that they may look weak at first glance, and they got in here somehow. They say his name in surprise. Ruga continues, saying they have presumably already let the slaves out of their cages. Some of them go and find those slaves and bring them back. The ogres agree to that order readily. The leader grins and says few have ever dared challenge him. He is honestly curious. He barks at his minions to get on with it. Of course, the ogres charge the allies. One of them shouts that they came here for nothing, and it is time they got what they deserve. He draws his weapon, and Goblia somersaults through the air and kicks him into a permanent knockout. The monster puts its head through a wall. The second ogre shouts in bewilderment. Ruga says he warned them. The ogre says this goblin appears to hold power beyond her demonic name. Time to change the tactics and the strategy. They team up and concentrate their attack on one of them. They take the wolf out, since he is the strongest and the fastest of the 3. Orpheus activates his berserk skill and tears those opponents in half instantly. The other ogres shout in confusion, "What is going on?" At this rate, the 3 of them kill everybody here. Ruga considers it curious, because they are considerably stronger than ordinary demons, do skills that rare genuinely exist, or perhaps they have powerful support. It appears to be far too much work. Taking up his weapon, he declares that nothing can be done. He leaps forward and tries to attack Orpheus. The werewolf and the protagonist both avoid it, and the leader's blow lands on empty air and crumbles the floor at the point of contact. Still, the allies take fighting stances and prepare. Ruga laughs quietly and remarks that they are quite capable. In that case, he confronts their leader personally. Meanwhile, the girls are leading prisoners out of their cages. Katrina says they need to evacuate calmly, Vania adds that the exit is near. Then the ogre's shouts arrive. There they are, get over here. Vania looks around anxiously and sees the enemy running at them. The ogres shout that prisoners are not supposed to go home on time and that they work overtime until they die. Katrina and Vania prepare to fight. At that moment, Ruga, standing opposite the protagonist, laughs quietly and says there is evidently a skill involved in turning demi-humans and monsters into his allies. Except however many weaklings he gathers, none of them are a match for ogres. At which point a loud noise starts coming out of the dungeon. The leader notes what a racket they are making. He looks at the protagonist and shouts that their village is like a labyrinth, and they navigate it easily and find the escapees quickly. All of this happened because these people were sticking their noses where they did not belong. They should never have done it. The MC silently puts a fist into his face with everything he has, flipping the leader over in midair and sending him a considerable distance. Then the protagonist starts walking toward him. One of the ogres calls out his leader's name, Anxious. Ruga grins and says he understands. He handles this alone, so the rest of them go and get the slaves. The ogres shout proudly exactly as he says. Now that is their leader. Now that is what a cold-blooded leader looks like. What his minions do not know is what that single punch actually did. Because the moment they are gone, Ruga winces in terrible pain, grabs the place he was struck, and wonders what kind of strength that was. He even saw it coming. How does anybody hold that much speed and that much strength? Although he needs to calm down and assess the situation, he says out loud, attacking suddenly, and that is not bad. Although he is not surprised the man struck first. His aura must have driven him out of his mind. The protagonist kicks him into the air, shouting angrily at him to shut his mouth, because he suppresses other people's thinking with a loud voice and with violence, forcing them to obey through brute force. Catching up with him, the protagonist puts a fist into his chin and adds that tyrants like that are what he hates most in this world. With a third blow he throws him upward, adding that this is the one man he definitely does not forgive. He makes him suffer for a very long time for every occasion on which he disturbed the peace. Ruga lands head first on the concrete floor, perplexed. What is going on? Is that a skill or a magical artifact? No, that is not it. A way to stop this man has to be found, and found fast. Then the returning ogres call out his name in alarm. The leader notes, confused, that if they are back, then all is well. Getting to his feet, he holds in a howl of pain and smirks at the MC. Because his narrow-mindedness means every slave has been killed. He should monitor the main forces and the overall situation more carefully. What kind of loser can only do one thing at a time? His minions answer him in bewilderment, because the problem is that the slaves are gone, and their comrades have been destroyed. Ruga shouts in bewilderment. What? Their kin were routed completely. The protagonist says the explosion that went off earlier was his trap magic skill triggering. Naturally, the leader glares at him. The protagonist continues saying he has already infiltrated this place 3 separate times before today, planning meticulously where the trap magic went and where the escape routes ran. Ruga clarifies, irritated, 3 times. This is clearly a lie. The MC says in that case he shows him proof. He activates his vanishing skill and disappears from sight. The leader looks around in confusion and shouts angrily, asking where he is and telling him to show himself. Did he realize the bluff had failed and run away? Exactly as he thought. Nobody defeats him, the elite of the underworld. Then a powerful blow lands on his chest and another on his face. The ogre thinks, bewildered. What? Both impact sites burn mercilessly. The MC's voice says he simply concealed his presence with assassin and muffled his footsteps with silent movement, and that this attack was his strike, enhanced by martial arts and by strength enhancement. Incidentally, opening those prison cells and slave collars was easy with lockpick. He puts a fist into his opponent's face again and reappears exactly where he originally stood. Ruga thinks, confused, that this is impossible. How many skills does this man have? The protagonist, reading that thought, says exactly. Because he has a skill that lets him acquire skills infinitely. Gacha. The leader's mind reels. Infinite skills? Gacha. What is this? He decides it is incredible, and defeating an opponent like that is impossible. And just like that, he runs away screaming that there is no chance. His minions stare at their fleeing leader in panic, saying his name in surprise. Ruga, running, grins in bewilderment and wonders how any of it came to this. Where did he go wrong? Because out of every ogre alive, he was the weakest. Then a man out of the upper world crossed his path, and everything about his life turned over. Those teachings changed him. The magical items he received and the reputation that followed transformed his body and his way of living. And before he understood what was happening, he had risen to ogre chieftain. Yes, he did nothing wrong. He simply needs to remember those teachings and start over. Start the whole thing again. What Ruga does not know is that the prisoners he was so casual about are standing directly ahead of him, because something takes hold of his leg and pulls him backward. He looks around and wonders, surprised, where those vines came from. In the end, he finds himself at the bottom of a pit with his own captives standing around the edges. Vania shouts mockingly that he even fell for Katrina's wood magic. It appears he has been fairly badly roughed up. Ogre chieftain or not, he is now doomed. He can prepare for death, at which point Gorga pulls the girl aside with one hand and looks down at Ruga grimly. Vania says the golem's name in surprise. The ogre chieftain stares at him and asks who this is. Gorga closes a fist and starts walking toward him. Ruga starts talking fast, saying, So that is what this is about. He meant that, obviously he understands, because a request for disclosure is a natural right, and he will explain everything right now. They should simply listen carefully. He stands up, as though there were a camera in front of him, and says, "Hello everybody, welcome to the Ruga channel. Today's episode asks one question. Does an organization need sacrifices in order to grow? Frankly, sacrifices are unavoidable in any organization. History has already proven it. The death of comrades is certainly sad, except that is precisely what spreads a feeling of tension through the entire organization. In fact, rising anywhere in the lower world requires pain of exactly that kind. As he sees it, the deceased performed his role in full. Difficult as it is, he certainly would not want them to stop. Therefore, he proposes starting over, so that the lessons paid for with a life are not wasted. In short, their future is bright. They move on to the next level, and if they enjoyed the story, they should give it a like." The golem tenses its entire enormous body, and in a rage produces a terrifying roar, activating everything it has. Ruga goes pale with fear and produces a nervous laugh. Gorga speaks ominously and says he killed Stone. That is a fact, and his comrade's innocent life was not spent on this man's ambitions. With those words, the golem uses Flaming Palm and takes the ogre leader's head off in one blow. To nobody's surprise, the enemy drops onto the floor without it. Gorga walks to his comrade lying under the sheet, kneels in front of him, and says he is very sorry. His allies look at him with compassion. Katrina uses her magic, shifts through space, flies up to the golem, and says she knows how he feels. She shows him the sapling in her hands and adds that with her skill she has created a sapling of the world tree. The soul of the dead can be moved into that sapling and revived, although when the rebirth happens is unknown, and memories from the past life do not survive. At which point Vania shouts, surprised, that the sapling is withering. Katrina shouts that Stone's soul is beginning to fade. There is no time to think, and whether to accept this or not is entirely his decision. Gorga looks at her in surprise, and then says it is all right. His answer was obvious. She moves his comrade's soul into the sapling and plants it in the ground. Sometime later, once everybody has reached safety, the protagonist addresses all of them and declares that Vania, Gorga, Katrina, and the other demihumans out of their tribes are becoming members of their village. At that moment, somebody is approaching them rapidly. The protagonist declares that dryads, skilled with wood, handle construction and repairs in the village. Golems produce weapon materials by processing ores and casting. Vampires obviously are responsible for producing magic stones and magical tools. He proposes that all of them work together to develop this village and build the safest place in the underworld. The allies accept the proposal and support the decision. A while later, he sighs and says that finally he too gets some peace. He can start collecting titles. And then Ellis appears in front of him and says, confused, "So this is where he is. This is where he ran off to." The MC, entirely lost, thinks, what? Why is she here? Fine. He needs to calm down, because this is the underworld, and all of that is over. Grabbing his own chest, he notes that if she is here, then like his brothers, she has decided to take him. Or she is here for personal revenge. Right away, she rushes toward him. He tenses and settles on personal revenge. And the girl presses herself against his chest and says she missed him so much. The protagonist feels like he is about to lose his mind from astonishment. Pulling away from her, he asks, bewildered, what this is supposed to mean. Ellis, confused, answers exactly what she said. After he disappeared, she finally understood her own feelings. She was a nightmare to him this whole time. Correct. Which is why she wanted to see him again, to apologize. She bows to him and apologizes. Confused, the protagonist activates evaluation and looks at her stats, which is how he learns she is protected by the intercession of the Holy Virgin's providence, and becomes convinced she is genuine. Except even if that is true, she is presumably playing a good game in order to bring him back. He says out loud that so this is why she is here, and that none of it matters, because he is not changing his mind. The girl says she sees, then is he genuinely planning to settle in the underworld? He says that is it. So no amount of persuading gets her anywhere. Ellis, to his enormous surprise, smiles and asks whether, if that is the case, she could live here with him. The MC is dumbfounded by that question. He wonders whether, even if her goal is bringing him back, the people above can genuinely afford to waste time on things like this. No, he cannot hand her an advantage. She is on his territory now. Of course, he says he does not mind. Although she needs to understand that there is no special relationship between the two of them. If she harms the locals, he throws her out without a second thought. They are not engaged anymore, so the decision is hers. At which point Livia, who has quietly come up to them, shouts in surprise, engaged. She turns to him and asks who this girl is. The two of them exchange distinctly unfriendly looks. The protagonist thinks, tense, that he had completely forgotten about Livia. Although this is a good chance to assess Ellis's real intentions. She asks Livia who she is. The girl, looking at her with hostility, says she is the protagonist's beloved. He stares at her in surprise, not having expected an answer like that. Livia reflects that obviously she lied about it, and she is not letting anybody take him away from her again. Ellis gasps at that statement, and then says, smiling, really, and that she would like to get along with her. Sadly, Livia looks at her, confused. The girl turns sharply and tells her ex-fiancé that she is ready to go and see how he lives here. Livia asks him whether that is the bride they were talking about earlier. She is not what she pictured. The MC grimaces, goes red, and produces a series of inarticulate noises. Livia says his name anxiously and asks what is wrong with him. He does not understand at all. What exactly is wrong with Ellis? Sometime later, up in the upper world, the king says the number of monsters appearing around Rakan climbs daily, which threatens to become a problem for far more than one country. The entire upper world is exposed. Incidentally, what happened to Ellis? Everybody keeps telling him about it, and he finds it hard to believe. His assistant asks permission to answer. He says she is constantly using her skill in the basement of the Rayfield house. Therefore, they decided that leaving her post is dangerous. The king asks whether this is true. Lord Mycelian, standing next to Minu, asks permission to speak for Ellis. After all, every one of them is here thanks to her. Correct. His Majesty agrees that this is true. He asks what business has gathered them here. The king says, oh right, in light of what is happening, they have opened the door to the Forbidden Library. The assistant thinks, bewildered, a Forbidden Library. Sometime later, all four arrive at the location. Minyu wonders, surprised, whether that small gatehouse is a library. The king says this room is rarely opened in order to protect what it holds. When need arises, the passage opens for the royal family and for nobody else. He puts a hand on the door, a magic circle forms immediately, and the door opens. Within seconds they go inside. His Highness says every confidential record from the founding of the kingdom was gathered in here. Minyu shouts in admiration that it is unbelievable, because this space has no end to it. His Highness shouts that there it is. He points at a book and says, these records show that similar events have happened before. Because a group who called themselves the Heroes of Darkness turned up out of nothing, they tore a spatial rift open exactly as is happening now, and put the whole kingdom into crisis. Their leader, Raveheart, held dark magic that could cut dimensional rifts open. Minyu asks how anybody defeated them back then. The king laughs quietly and says the rifts closed on their own one day. According to this record, the Heroes of Darkness disappeared and left nothing behind. The assistant says that is strange. Although if the situation is repeating, then there must be a way to deal with those rifts. Minyu notices something, bends down, picks a hair up off the floor, and wonders, amazed, whether Ellis has been in here. Meanwhile, in the netherworld, she looks at the house in surprise and shouts, asking whether she can genuinely live here. The protagonist says that with the village's population growing, a great many new houses have been built, so she can use one however she likes. He turns and says Sufi's name. The slime queen materializes in the air immediately and asks whether he called. The protagonist asks her to keep an eye on Ellis, because it is time for him to go back and help the workers expand the village, and she has neither work nor plans. The girl is indignant about how rude that is. Fine, and he had better remember to pay her back later. Hugging him, she continues, smiling, and says that if he wants, she does not mind being paid up front. He flinches in surprise and protests that there is nothing wrong with that. Ellis, watching them, laughs and remarks on how popular he is in this netherworld. Both the MC and Sufi look at her with irritation. A while later, Bree, standing with the workers, says the carpenters are assembled. He says good work. The girl asks what they are building this time. Wood specialists, stone specialists, and magic specialists all standing together. What sort of job needs that? The protagonist says a bathhouse. A while later, Vania, basking on the warm floor of that bathhouse, says blissfully that this is definitely paradise. Now she thinks about it, they built enormous baths using golem ore, dryad cypress, and vampire magical tools. Exactly as she thought, the MC's abilities are simply astounding. Katrina washes Goblia's hair. Livia asks Ellis whether the crisis upstairs was held off by that intercession of hers, the providence of the Holy Maiden. The girl says yes, that is right. The goddess's grace holds powerful healing, and it also neutralizes any magical effect and any anomaly. For example, seals that no ordinary skill can touch come off under it. Broadly speaking, the grace of that goddess covers an enormous range. Livia thinks, surprised, that she genuinely does have a very rare skill, and that she behaves so naturally that believing she is lying is difficult. Ellis continues, saying that incidentally, before coming down here, she used that skill to get into the sealed archive of secret books, which apparently holds important information about the crisis brewing in the upper world. Livia remarks that this means she came here to pass that information to the protagonist. The girl leaving says not quite, because she came all this way purely to meet him. There was no other reason. She reflects that, although now she thinks about it, it does appear so. Indeed, why did she bother looking into that archive at all? At which moment Goblia grabs her from behind, which frightens her badly. Ellis is indignant and tells her to keep her hands off. Sometime later in the bath, the protagonist rubs his shoulder. Orpheus notices and asks whether he pulled something. The MC says no, that is nonsense. Incidentally, thanks to Gorga and the others, they now have luxurious hot springs. The golem says they are obliged to help him, because he took them into the village, and for him they do anything. The werewolf speaks up and asks whether sheltering his ex-fiancée was genuinely a good decision. The protagonist says it is too early to judge. Let her stay with them, because keeping an eye on her is easier that way. At which point Sufi's voice arrives. Could she tell him about her as well? The protagonist jumps in surprise and shouts at her to come out. No need. Everybody in here is naked. The girl answers that she is already right here. Luckily, or maybe not, her face appears in the water. He shouts in confusion. What? She laughs quietly and asks sarcastically whether he is happy or disappointed, because slime cannot hold its shape in hot water. He is indignant and considerably more interested in what she is doing in a men's bathhouse. And what about Ellis? Sufi says she showed her around the village and she is behaving normally. It turns out there are people besides him who carry no prejudice against non-humans. The protagonist is indignant because he asked her to keep an eye on her. She's indignant back because he cannot exactly lock the woman up. He answers with a sigh that Ellis was always the type who does not care how other people see her. Although it is far too early to consider her harmless, she keeps watching over her. Sufi says fine. Although she actually likes her, because there is some sort of crisis going on up there, and instead of saving the world she wants to live among them. She got tired of all of it, right? He reflects that he is prepared to believe that, and even so her attitude toward him and toward Livia is very strange. Although if she genuinely did run away, the upper world is finished. What he does not know is that a few days earlier in the upper world, in the Backhurst house, Igiriel slammed a fist onto the table and shouted furiously about that damn demon. Gel said his brother Albert died, and Leon too, and their father died of worry. Igiriel shouted, irritated that this cross keeps plaguing their family even after his exile. Gel asked what they do now, because an order has already come from the palace, appointing him interim head of the house. The elder brother answered angrily, telling him not to talk nonsense, because there is no country left, and that girl who dreamed of becoming the next duchess worked hard on their behalf. The money lasts a long time. All that remains is passing customs with his skill, silent step, and they are free. Gel shouted that his skill finally comes in useful. Igiriel shouted angrily that anybody who does not understand a reckless battle is a waste of time is an absolute idiot. Although in the end he is the one who wins, what neither of them knows is who has been standing behind that door the whole time, because Marnus apologized for the interruption and asked whether the wine they ordered should be brought now. He answered angrily, telling her to pour it already. Gel, confused, reprimanded him because that was their father's collectible wine. Igiriel laughed and said pettiness exactly like that is why the man died without ever getting to try it. Besides which, he would be glad if somebody drank this wine on his behalf. Still Marnus, listening to every word of that, poured wine into their glasses with a grin. Gel agreed. Yes, absolutely right. The older one raised a toast, since the thing being drunk to was the victory ahead of them. He was drinking with him today as well. A while later, a man receiving guests shouts joyfully, "Welcome, dear guests." He is Marnus's friend, and the owner of this estate. He hopes their journey was safe. One of the maids says, well, how should she put this? Marnus ordered them to leave the country immediately, and they went through a secret portal behind the estate. And just like that, they ended up here. This is a map of the area. The man apologizes laughing for all of the confusion. The fact is that House Bockhurst falls shortly, and this fox, meaning Marnus, saw fit to get them out beforehand. Although they have nothing to worry about, because once everything settles he brings them back. For now they rest here safely. One of the maids says, bewildered, that she does not understand any of it. Naturally, the second girl remarks that if Marnus is taking care of them, then it must be necessary. The man laughs again, and says that this is exactly what people mean when they talk about being smitten with a fox, although they need not worry since their safety is his priority. Because a fox turning up has counted as a good omen for as far back as anybody has recorded. What neither of those brothers knew is what was already in the glass. Meanwhile, Marnus looks at the two Backhursts she has just poisoned. Some time later, the king is informed that House Backhurst has been destroyed. In the end, he shouts in surprise. Could that genuinely be true? The assistant says the current head, Baig, has been dead for several days. The eldest and third sons were poisoned, and the killer has not been found. His Highness shouts in confusion. What madness is this? Because no kingdom record anywhere shows one of the three houses being wiped out. Striking his knee with a fist, he adds that no, there is still hope. Because the protagonist is still alive, and he gets returned to this kingdom immediately. His assistant assures him there is no need to worry. Arrangements have already been made with the Duke, and his daughter Ellis is being sent to the underworld. Minyu continues the defense. She has sufficient forces to compensate for Ellis's absence. Lord Mycelian whispers in his ear from behind, saying that incidentally he needs to clarify. The rewards and the funding are still in effect. Correct. He says of course, and there's no need to worry about that. Although the situation is becoming more serious by the day. He gathers the remaining Backhurst soldiers and reorganizes the forces of the upper world. The Duke says he understands. The king announces that the audience is over, and everybody is dismissed. Once they leave the throne room, the aide asks whether he is keeping an eye on Minyu. Mycelian says she appears to be behaving exactly as always, so why would he? The aide says he thinks she should also be watched for a spark, because those are the eyes of somebody holding something back. The Duke says, well, perhaps she is a little sensitive, and since she is carrying out this country's mission, she will have to hold on. Actually, if Minyu is now the only person defending this kingdom, then that is his own daughter's fault. The aide says he will not argue, except if his daughter steps back from the front lines, the upper world falls. She is the kingdom's last shield now, so he had better guide her, so she does not turn out as foolish as certain other people. Mycelian laughs quietly and says he will do his best. Meanwhile, Minyu in the Forbidden Library is going through books and thinking about how boring it is. Time runs faster in this place. She was left here to recover before the next battle, because in here she becomes more and more like the protagonist, or rather like his older sister. Leave and she gets thrown straight back onto the battlefield. Even if the king, thinking only about his own skin, praises her, even if her father who did not come to her mother at the last moment, acknowledges her, what difference does any of that make? What is she even here for? stepping out into the corridor. The girl jumps in surprise at the sight of the prince. She asks, confused, what he is doing here. Zeno says he wanted to be alone because the palace is noisy today and it appears that seat is already taken. Surprised, she clarifies, is he not Prince Zeno? He says that technically only members of the royal family are permitted in here. Minyu apologizes sheepishly and says she has permission from His Majesty. The prince laughs at her embarrassment and remarks that he must be joking. She is Minyu, correct, the daughter of the Duke of Mycelium, with the super rare skill Brave Strike. The girl grows even more embarrassed and says she is flattered that His Highness remembers somebody like her. Zeno remarks that they can skip the formalities. After all, he is simply the Phantom Prince Zeno. Minyu looks at him and thinks about how he is 7th in line to the throne, an heir and one who, because of poor health, almost never appears in public. They say he spends his days in his room studying forbidden techniques. The prince says there is something he has wanted to ask for a long time. A girl out of a common family who became the savior of a kingdom. What is she thinking now? She says that for a commoner like her, it is an unacceptable honor, except she has no special feelings with which to justify his expectations. The prince says he understands. She is not consumed by her position. Responsibilities were simply handed to her. Although perhaps, somewhere deep down she is wondering, what would have happened if she had run back when she was still simply Minyu? Correct. The girl looks at him confused. He laughs and says obviously he is joking, because her disappearing turns the whole upper world into rubble. She admits that he is right. Zeno adds that in that case she has to hold out until those two return. Minyu swears to fulfill her duty even at the cost of her own life. Right away Zeno waves goodbye and leaves. The girl wonders whether he knows Ellis has left the upper world. Meanwhile, Ellis is enjoying the taste of the food that was prepared. The girl remarks that she did not expect to eat dishes this exquisite in the lower world. The protagonist says her satisfied face is the best reward, and the men in the food department will be happy about it. Ellis continues, watching the villagers work, and says every one of them works so harmoniously, which is incredibly impressive. He says yes, and that it was difficult at first and the training has borne fruit. Although there are setbacks sometimes. Sometimes the crops dry out, sometimes they cook strange dishes. What Ellis does not know is that she has been watched since the moment she arrived. Because Sufi whispers a greeting to him, he tries not to let Ellis notice anybody else is present. The girl notices his words and asks whether his skills do not let him make their work easier. The protagonist says that is true, and the local demi-humans lived primitively for centuries, using only what people from the upper world left behind. If he keeps simplifying their lives and helping them while he is not around, they end up helpless. Obviously, he tries to help with complex processes, and he also wants them learning independence. Incidentally, she should tell him about her skill, Goddess's Grace, an extremely rare ability. Perhaps they could find a use for it. Of course, she answers happily. Her skill has 3 forms. The first form is Restoration, which fully regenerates lost tissue or lost structures. The second form is Analysis, which deciphers and removes any seal, any blocking device, and any influence. And the third form is Optimization, which reshapes whatever it is pointed at, a living body or a whole city. How long it takes and how much it costs scale with size and with precision, and those 3 are what she mostly works with. He thinks with admiration that this genuinely is some kind of divine skill. She continues saying the skill also has one weakness, because she can only activate one effect at a time. For example, healing while holding a barrier is impossible. The barrier has to come down first. The protagonist says, surprised that he sees, because his gacha also has a limitation, since it is useless without killing monsters. Apparently even rare skills come with weaknesses. Ellis laughs and remarks that the two of them have not simply talked like this in a very long time. He reflects that yes, and there is not so much as a trace left of the terror he used to feel around her. Out loud, he says, it appears the last time they talked like this was when she could not sleep after those horror stories. He wonders whether she has genuinely changed, or whether he simply wants to believe it himself. He continues, saying he told her nonsense all night in order to calm her down. The girl says yes, she remembers it, although that was a long time ago, so he should forget about it. He laughs and asks how anybody could do that, because he is back in the days when he could simply talk to her. Still, she looks at him in surprise, then answers sheepishly that she is glad of it. Well, she has to go and powder her nose, so she begs his forgiveness. With those words, Ellis gets off that bench at speed and goes. A short while later, she steps into the ladies' room, looks at her own reflection, and asks bewildered, what is happening to her? She should be happy. She is with him again, exactly as she dreamed. And for some reason, something is gnawing at her. If only somebody would explain it. Ellis asks the system for an answer to that question. What is this feeling? The system reports that the detected discomfort is caused by a change in the correspondence coefficient between emotions and goal. This is an expected phenomenon. Her current top priority is establishing a permanent connection with the subject. Reaching it depends on a personality structure that holds steady. Everything she currently thinks, does, and feels is optimal for the task. What she is calling discomfort is a synchronization error against an outdated upper world model, since flagged as ineffective and distant. How she reacts now grew naturally out of her own will. No anomaly exists, because building relationships through dialogue is what she has always reached for. Gentle conversation, trust exchanged, hours spent together. Those preferences are baseline characteristics of hers. All she does now is express them knowingly. which means the profile is running normally. If anything, the state she is in could not be more natural. She should continue with her plan, complete the dialogue and await the next event. Ellis considers that answer, and then catches herself, because it appears she got completely lost in her own thoughts. She needs to get back to the protagonist quickly. Within seconds she runs outside, says his name, and apologizes for the delay, and has to cut herself off mid-sentence, because the protagonist is down on his knees, writhing in pain, gripping his shoulder. She runs to him anxiously and asks, agitated, what is wrong? She begs him to endure it a little longer because she is here. Does his shoulder hurt? Let her examine him. Then something strange appears on that shoulder, like some kind of matrix. The system window flags something important. The recovered data has a fault in it, and a rollback has to happen. Now earlier, before entering the Netherworld, the knights declared loudly that they were going with their mistress. Ellis said they had to stay behind, because Netherworld mana could be a deadly poison to them. They wanted to object, and she said entirely calm that she would not neglect the help of people who trusted her and let her escape. She would certainly come back with him. After which she went into the Netherworld and said the mana had been neutralized, thanks to the properties of her rare skill. They must stay alert because nobody knows what happens next. She used Grace of the Goddess and said her body and her mind had been tuned for this place. What she asked for was the ability to remain beside Cross down here permanently. A window opened in front of her. Request accepted. Body and mind adjusted toward that end. Then she walked into the forest and told him to wait for her. Currently, Livia says how many delicious vegetables they have collected. The goblins laugh and ask how she is doing. They are grateful to the newly arrived beastmen because the quality of the harvest has improved. She reflects, smiling, that this is wonderful, and it appears Vania and the others are settling into the village. The goblin says that as for anything new, that same human girl was here recently. That catches her attention and she asks whether something happened that is bothering them. They say it is because she was asking about vegetable varieties and farming tools with genuine interest. In the end, she even volunteered to help with the harvest. Personally, she liked her. They expected something different going by the stories, so they are confused. Thanks to her, the vegetable harvest was finished in no time. After that, she walks through the forest, thinking that the lady is also actively talking to people in order to get used to this village. Perhaps she is overcomplicating all of it. Incidentally, she has noticed lately that the gentleman's shoulder has been hurting, so perhaps consulting the woman is worth doing. She hears a noise that catches her attention and goes to look. Walking further, she becomes deeply concerned at the sight of Ellis, who looks worried and is asking the protagonist to hold on. Sadly, she drops a basket of vegetables, runs to them, and asks worried, what happened? She looks worried and says she does not know either, because when she came back from the restroom he was crouched down, gripping his shoulder. Livia, worried, wonders whether something is wrong with that shoulder after all. A system window opens in front of him with an important notification regarding a malfunction in the restored area and a rollback. The emergency maintenance run the other day put the user's left shoulder back together, temporarily. Except the monitoring logs kept catching serious instability afterward, and the restored data going bad. Specifically, the magical resistance data is degrading, and the tissue around it is eroding both considerably faster than projected. Continuing to operate in the current state carries an extremely high risk of affecting the entire system and producing unexpected critical errors. Therefore, for safety and stability, the specified area is being rolled back to its state immediately after the damage. Warning: nothing about this is up to the skill owner. Ellis reads that and asks what condition immediately after the damage is supposed to mean. Does this go back to that fight with his brother he mentioned once? Except he never said he took an injury that's serious in that fight. The MC calls out to Livia loudly, and she answers just as loudly, saying she is here. He apologizes to her and says that no matter how many potions he used, the shoulder would not heal. He thought that was going to be the case. He did not want her worrying. To nobody's surprise, she starts crying, calls out to him loudly and asks what he is talking about. Ellis asks her not to worry and promises to save him, and the system announces that its optimization is complete. She says silently that Goddess's Grace should restore the shoulder to its condition before the damage. The system notifies her that only one effect of Goddess's Grace can be active at a time. She decides that is right, because she optimized herself, which means the optimization has to come off first. She writes in the system window that she wants to use Restore, which immediately stops the optimization effect running on her. And when the skill stops working on her, she sees a great many different memories out of the past and wonders what this is. Are these genuinely all her own memories connected to him? Livia, worried, calls to her and asks what is happening to the master. Ellis, displeased, turns to her and pushes her away with one hand. She asks, with a frightening look, whether she wants her to save him. Correct. She agrees, and there is one condition. Sometime later, Cross wakes up lying at home and notices that his shoulder is normal again. She comes into his room and asks how he is feeling. He turns to her and asks whether she genuinely healed his shoulder. Luckily, he gets out of bed abruptly, takes her hand, thanks her, and says loudly that he is enormously grateful to her. She says that now he thinks about it, he frightened that girl badly. He remembers Livia and says loudly that he is sorry for making her worry, and he is fine, Then he runs to her house and, looking exhausted, calls her name out loud. Sadly, she is not there, and Ellis comes to him, says his name and asks whether something is wrong. He walks over, takes her by the shoulders and asks loudly whether she knows where she went, because summoning her does not work, even with the summoner skill. Then he becomes worried, because there is an evil grin on that face. He starts getting very nervous, and she says that while he was sleeping so soundly, that person packed her things and left a long time ago. He says her name worried, and asks whether she has genuinely turned back into what she was. What did she do with Livia? She starts laughing loudly and says that, in exchange for saving him, she banished her from this place. And just like that, he starts crying, drops to his knees and screams in despair. Meanwhile, Livia walks into the forest, looks back toward the village with a sad expression, and says goodbye to the master, because before that the goblins came to her, started crying over the news and asked whether she is genuinely leaving. They will follow her. This simply cannot be happening. It turns out that girl deceived every one of them, although she helped them so diligently out in the fields. She says no, and that the mistress healed a grave wound of the master's. She believes that woman is the one worthy of standing beside him. They ask her not to say things like that, and one goblin comes over and asks her to take this, because here is a magical tool inherited from their ancestors, and it will certainly be useful to her on the road. The goblins say word has come down to them that her ancestors once carried out some important mission in those lands, long ago. Perhaps she is being led there by fate itself. In the end, she thanks them and leaves, and they tell her to take care of herself and say they do not consider this goodbye forever. Later, Ellis, holding a cup of tea, says that since coming down to the lower world, she could not have imagined living surrounded by furniture like the kind upstairs. She sits down on the main character, starts laughing loudly, and says this stool is quite comfortable though. She wonders why that is. He says Livia's name with tears in his eyes, and she asks loudly what a shame, whether the door is genuinely stuck. There is a strange noise coming out of that face decoration, so she will fix it immediately. She reflects, delighted and surprised that the goddess's blessing applied optimization subconsciously, and ultimately it let her enter this village without arousing suspicion. She says loudly that now nobody disturbs their privacy. Right away, Orpheus walks in and says they are disturbing. She turns at that voice and asks loudly who the hell they are. Who gave them the right to walk in without knocking? He says they simply came to report to the master about the monster hunt. Goblia comes over and starts stroking the MC's head, and he says they have had to go on long raids because monsters stopped appearing at the nearby points. There is a great deal to discuss, moving bases, dispersing them. Although first, Gacha time, he opens the system window while lying on the floor and opens 11 skills. Ellis sees that and asks whether this is Gacha, because this is the first time she has seen the skill working. Orpheus calls over to him and asks what the results were. Of course, he nods happily and she steps on him, laughs loudly, and asks whether that is genuinely all he can answer. She reflects, delighted, that this is how he loses interest in everything except her. Sometime later, when night has fallen, Livia lights a fire and notices the smoke going straight up, which means good weather again tomorrow. 10 days now since the village. What keeps her moving is the wisdom and the knowledge the Lord put into her. She remembers the time the two of them spent lying happily on the grass, looking at stars. In the present, she starts crying and says silently that she is asking the Lord's forgiveness, because even after making a deal to save him, her wish to be with him did not go anywhere. When morning comes, she decides she has to move forward, because stopping means thinking about him again and again. Then she hears a loud sound, starts looking around with a frightened expression, and registers something approaching. What is this powerful, ominous aura? She has never felt anything like it. What Livia does not know is that the thing walking toward her has been tracking one particular scent for days, because Marnus comes up, confuses her with Cross, hugs her, and says she has finally found him. To nobody's surprise, both of them are thoroughly confused by that and scream. She jumps away from her, lands on the ground and asks loudly who she is and why she smells this strongly of the master. Livia wonders whether that aura was coming off this person. She introduces herself and asks whether she knows the master. She stands up, dusts herself off, and says the two of them know each other, to put it mildly. She gives her name, says she is a yokai, and says that among her own people out in the far east, she goes by the Scarlet Flower of the Moonlit Night. Inside Rakan, she buried that identity and worked the Backhurst house as a maid, attached mostly to the master. She looks at her in surprise and works out that this is the person who created that powerful magic stone. Marnus, delighted, says that now the two of them have met, she has to lead her. She is thrown by that and asks what she is talking about. She asks what that is supposed to mean. To the master, she should know where he is. She says she cannot, because she no longer has the right to return to that village. She wants to know the reason, and asks whether it is because she was exiled. Livia starts crying at that, and Marnus starts walking away and says she can cry here as much as she likes. Although if those tears are running because she misses the master, is sitting in one spot forever genuinely an option? She leaves her there, guided by the protagonist's scent, and the girl stays standing exactly where she is. Meanwhile, in the village, Ellis puts a collar on him and says, delighted, that he should look at his own pathetic situation. It appears the sight of that unworthy state has thrown every villager present into total confusion. Orpheus says his name and says he has accumulated enough points. She says they can abandon these useless efforts, because no gacha brings him joy anymore. He says entirely serious that she should not underestimate him this badly. What Ellis does not know is what a man with this skill can do with a single spin, because he opens the gacha 11 times and announces joyfully and loudly that he succeeded. because in this gacha every rainbow skill went up to maximum level. She asks, entirely self-confident, what is so special about that? And to her surprise, he stands up and announces loudly that it has finally happened. He has taken his skills to their maximum level. She becomes worried and asks loudly what that means, so he was pretending to be broken in order to mock her. He calms down and says he was not pretending, and he genuinely was broken. He asks to be allowed to clarify something, because even on the edge of despair, gacha always turns it into hope. She is shocked by that and thinks about how careless it was. It turned out to be effective. She notices him getting dressed and taking his sword, calls out to him and asks whether he is leaving. He agrees and says, with a determined expression, that he is going to bring Livia back. Ellis stands in front of the entrance and declares, loudly and displeased, that it is useless, because finding her across a netherworld that size is impossible. He walks toward her and says he went on a great many hikes with her. He knows her behavior patterns and he is also the one who taught her survival skills. She draws a dagger, points it at him, and declares loudly and thoroughly displeased that he stops and obeys her order. And he draws his sword out of its sheath fast, puts the blade against her throat, and asks whether she remembers what he said earlier, that he strikes her without hesitating, although she healed his shoulder. So if she gets out of his way, he does nothing. He lowers the sword and says he is proposing that the two of them separate peacefully. She becomes extremely nervous, thinking that he is leaving for another woman. What is she supposed to do about that? The system notifies her that the personality she currently runs makes permanent coexistence with her master impossible. Optimization would push her innate softness and harmony to the front. Nothing new is being built here. This procedure only makes what she truly is shine brighter. She decides that it would not be her. She wants him choosing her as she is. Ellis keeps rejecting the system's options, after which a window opens saying they offer their deepest apologies, and the likelihood of a master existing who would accept her as she is extremely small. She screams in despair and runs at him to attack with the dagger, then stops, because his expression is completely calm. And then she stops directly in front of the MC, and puts that dagger into her own stomach, and he says her name in confusion. She loses consciousness and has a dream, in which she and her friends are having a picnic, and they say the wild strawberry pie is very delicious. She laughed joyfully and said her mother made it for her in secret. These cookies are delicious too. One of her friends asked whether it is alright that the two of them are here, besides which, they are commoners playing with her. She said the visitors to their house all called her an angel and a good girl, and hearing it has worn her out, and she does not like receiving that many gifts. Obviously, she does not show dissatisfaction like that in front of adults. Even looking the way she does, she is cunning. She thinks that is what it is called. She said Marie's name and Anna's and said that from now on the three of them are friends forever. Later, in her father's office, she asked whether he said a noble kindergarten. He agreed and said that starting tomorrow she attends that place. She said cheerfully that this is wonderful, because it means meeting even more friends. Although she promised to play with Anna and Marie tomorrow, he said she cannot play with those two, because from now on he forbids contact with commoners. From now on she behaves as befits somebody who stands above other people. Later she came to Cross's house. She said slightly sad that every child there did nothing except brag about house sizes and servant counts. Rabbits came up never, and wild strawberry pie was something not one of them had tasted. All of it was somehow very boring. He said that in that case, perhaps she had better not play with him either, because his older brothers always said he is worse than a commoner. She got upset about that, started crying, and asked why he would say a thing like that. He wanted to say she had done something bad. He started getting nervous about it and said he does not know. He apologized and said all of it is his fault, so she can do something bad to him. She picked up a knife and ran at him, and he was frightened and asked her to stop and said it is dangerous. She jumped him and put that knife into his stomach. She tried to smile with a sad expression and said it is only a toy. What does he think? Is she behaving badly? He started crying out of fear and asked forgiveness several times. Still, she calmed down slightly and warned him she was going home. Sometime later, Ellis came into her room and said she had never once seen him make a face like that. So this is what the games of aristocrats are. She picked up a few things and announced loudly that these aristocrats get used cleverly from here on, and the top of Raken's high society is where she reigns. Currently, Livia keeps walking through the forest and hears a loud noise behind her. She turns around and sees Marnus coming out of the bushes with a joyful expression saying they have met again. She agrees with that and asks how many times this has happened by now. She says it is the fourth. She says she was drawn by her master's scent. She asks, slightly worried, whether she genuinely suffers from topographical cretinism. She says, smiling, that it is one of her charming traits. She follows her and says the two of them should go home already, because leaving that Ellis alone is far too dangerous. She is presumably beating the master already. She says that is not true. The mistress is a wonderful person, and as people, she and the master suit each other perfectly. She is simply a humble goblin. She is slightly surprised by that, cannot believe it, and asks whether she genuinely considers herself a goblin. She tells her something and she is surprised by what she hears. Meanwhile, Ellis keeps dreaming, and in the dream she goes to her childhood friends, calls to them, and says she always wanted to apologize to them. They do not recognize her, run away from her, and ignore her when she asks them to wait. Later, her father says what a negligent daughter she is, because he forbade contact with commoners so many times. She wants to object, notices the protagonist, calls to him, asks him to wait and to look at her. He turns toward her, and where her face should be there is static, and he asks who she is. Immediately after which she wakes up in the room, sees the ceiling and asks where she is. He is sitting beside her and asks whether she is awake yet. She says his name, sits up, starts to ask something and feels severe pain. Luckily, he puts out a hand and says it is better if she does not move for now, because without the slime tribe's supreme potion, all of it could have ended badly. She says that at the moment she pointed that dagger at him, God's blessing offered to optimize it, and if she had genuinely done that, she could have subjugated him again, and perhaps the two of them would have gone back to their previous relationship. Except she could not, because as a child she had close friends, Anna and Marie, except family policy forbade her, from a certain point, from communicating with anybody outside the nobility. Since then, those ties have been practically severed. Time passed, and when dimensional rifts started appearing in the upper world, while she was saving people in various places, she had the chance to speak with commoners again. She remembers what happened when they came to her and said it really is her. So the saint everybody is talking about is her. She remembers them, correct. They were so lonely when the three of them suddenly stopped seeing each other. Currently, she says inner peace was the thing she did not have in that moment, because vivid childhood memories flooded in at the same instant as a subconscious fixation on where she now stood. She waved a hand, used the skill on them, and both of them, confused, greeted the lady saint. One apologized for having addressed her so familiarly. She said it was nothing at all. In the present, Ellis says she altered what those two remembered about themselves, which means she effectively killed the version of herself that lived in their hearts. Later, she regretted that action bitterly. She swore in her heart that she would never again let God's blessing optimize another person's mind. Except as a result, God's blessing stopped offering her options at all. Cornered, she decided the only way to hold him was through fear, and she made the worst choice available, at which point she finally understood her actual situation. She starts crying and says that he, however, was not frightened in the slightest, and showed a willingness to accept her. She also understood that inside him she is already dead. She does not haunt him anymore. The MC says her name, and she has understood everything, and calls him Sufi, and says that therefore she can stop wearing his shape. Within seconds, she drops the transformation, and asks at what moment she noticed. Ellis says she noticed the moment she woke up, because even without using a skill, she could feel that the atmosphere was not coming off him. He left, correct? She agrees and says he left once he was certain. The crisis was over. She smiles and says she is grateful to her, because if the real one were here, she could lose her composure all over again. Thanks to her, she was able to accept him and accept herself calmly, although in all likelihood her life would have ended before any of that sorting got finished. Sufi hugs her, calls her stupid, and says she was genuinely worried, because there are still a great many relatives up in the upper world whose lives she can save. She absolutely must not die in a place like this. Ellis calms down, a sincere smile arrives on her face, and she thanks her. She takes her hands and says that with this life she has been given back. She rises once more against the threat hanging over the upper world. She gets out of bed, takes the book, shows it to her, and says the report of truth sat sealed at the deepest point of the forbidden library, in a place closed even to the royal family. What is written in it is the bloody history of Rakand. Those dimensional rifts upstairs plainly begin down here. So the first thing they do is investigate the hero of darkness, Braveheart, whose hands are deep in that crisis, and the road of the ancient elven race has to be traced. Sufi listens to that looking thoroughly confused, and she says with a determined expression that they find out the cause immediately. Otherwise, the serious consequences reach not only the upper world but the lower one as well. Meanwhile, Livia asks, confused, whether she is an elf. She looks at her with a puzzled expression, and Marna says that is a completely natural reaction, given she has spent her entire life believing she was a goblin. She asks, confused, how she could live among goblins with nobody telling her anything. Even the master said she is a goblin. She asks whether those goblins had horns on their foreheads like hers. She is startled by that and says that indeed they presumably did not. Wait, now she thinks about it, they definitely did not have those. Did they? What Livia does not know is that she has been wearing a lie on her own forehead since childhood, because Marnus walks over, touches it, and says those are not horns at all. Most likely it is a magic item, a perception suppression stone. Because of its power, even the master perceived her as a goblin. She asks why she would have a thing like that, and how she knows it is a magic item. She says she should not be compared to a yokai out of the Far East. Besides which, powerful as that perception suppression is, her goblin friends presumably knew from the very beginning that she is an elf, and raised her as a goblin specifically so that nobody would ever guess what she actually is. Livia remembers something and says that a long time ago, the grandfather who looked after her told her about the country of the elves. That country was once beautiful and full of light, except an evil great king came down out of the heavens, and the country, swallowed by darkness, stood on the edge of destruction. Then a group of heroes of light appeared, defeated the great king, and peace came back. Then the hero and the elf princess lived happily to the end of their days. That was how it went, and if a country of elves is genuinely out there somewhere, she wants to stand in it and look. She says with a determined expression that she wants to find out who she is. Marnus asks her to wait and asks whether she knows where the elven country actually is. She does not really know, because she would die on the road without ever arriving. Meanwhile, she looks at her bag and asks what is glowing in there. She pulls out an elven proximity scanner and says that nothing at all was written on it the last time she checked. Apparently this wooden tablet is a magical item, and elves nearby set it off. So why is it glowing now? She asks whether it is because the two of them started talking about elves, or because she herself is beginning to realize she is one. Livia, confused, says she thinks she understands. She says that even so, the direction and the distance are still impossible to know. Nothing to be done. Since they are somewhere nearby, she will guide her. She is startled by that, addresses her politely, and Marnus takes out a scroll and says it is a rough map of this world an old friend gave her. With that, the two of them get almost all the way to the land of the elves. She reflects that even holding a map, this woman suffers from topographical cretinism. She thanks her for it, and Marnus points a finger at her and says loudly that she is asking for something in return. Because once they reach the land of the elves, she is taking her to the master this time, definitely. She ends this pointless journey in search of herself, and does it as fast as possible. And just like that, she turns, starts walking, and tells her to follow. She agrees, thinking that in the land of the elves, she perhaps finds out whether she is worthy of standing beside the master. Meanwhile, Cross and his friends beat a large monster. He breathes out with relief and says delighted that the three of them worked well as a team. Both of them are already glorious warriors. They make noises with happy faces, and he looks away and reflects that boss-class monsters do hand out a great many gacha points, and the chance of running into one is quite low. Except he no longer gets points off small monsters. He sees 2,300 points, and says the flow has stopped. Previously he spun the gacha every time a new one arrived, and now he has to be a little more careful. Right away, Rufna starts barking, and he turns around and asks what is going on. A notification about a new event opens in front of him, and he clicks the system window to find out more. A window opens with an announcement. Notice of a joint raid battle. What is planned is a raid. He reads that with a surprised expression, and the system announces that they thank him for his continued love of the gacha skill. Trouble. Something far too enormous is approaching. He has to join forces and defeat a raid boss shrouded in mystery. The protagonist, tense, decides this is bad because he left Orpheus and the others back in the village, which could interfere with the search for Livia. The system announces that the date and the time will be announced later. He prepares properly and joins the battle, because defeating that raid boss brilliantly earns him one spin of a limited black gacha. That catches his attention, and the system announces that he finds out what skill he receives after the spin. They hope for his continued use of the gacha skill. He reflects that the word limited fills him with nothing except anticipation, and there's a strange feeling of unease. Is that still because Livia's not around? He says that in any case, they move on now. Galblia keeps an eye out for fires or tracks. Rufna keeps following her scent. Meanwhile, in the upper world, the knights see Minyu and say she looks even braver in the new outfit, even after Lady Ellis went down to the lower world. This country stayed calm, thanks to her. Perhaps she can handle the crisis in the upper world alone. She reflects that they should not talk about it that lightly. Seriously, they should stop already. Because of that woman, she has to focus almost exclusively on guarding the upper world. Besides which, the moment she disappeared, the number and the ferocity of the monsters both climbed dramatically. And even so, the country and her father praise the woman for the brave act of going to bring him back. Why does she have to clean up the mess left behind by irresponsible people like that? It is obvious. All of it comes down to her not having been born the way they were. She knocks on a door, announces that it is her, and apologizes. She goes into the office, is surprised to find her father wearing a joyful expression, and asks why he is here. He says today is a special day for a filial daughter. What would she do if he were not here? She does not understand him and asks what he is even talking about. Naturally, he congratulates her and says she has received a marriage proposal. Minyu is shocked by that, asks him to wait, and asks why it is happening this suddenly. He says joyfully that he can finally behave like a father to her. She should be happy because this is the perfect match. She wonders whether now is genuinely the time for propriety with the fate of the country on the table, or whether he intends to chain her down so she cannot go to the underworld. Her father says he will leave the two young people alone. Her fiancé walks into the office, and she is ready to cry, because this means the road to the underworld is now closed for good. What Minyu does not know is who her father has been talking to, because Zeno comes over, lifts her head, and apologizes for frightening her. She looks at him, surprised, and says his name out loud. He says, smiling, that he hopes the two of them get along. Immediately after which they go to the church and sign the documents. The priest says that as of this moment, under the laws of this kingdom, and the ordinances laid down before God, the marriage of Prince Zeno and Minyu stands confirmed. The war shortens the ceremony. Does the prince take her as lawful wife and swear that her status and her honor will be protected? He agrees, and the priest says her name and asks whether she takes the prince as husband, and swears that his position becomes hers to follow. To nobody's surprise, she agrees as well, and with that, the ceremony ends. Afterward, they come out into the garden where she calls to His Highness and asks whether this is genuinely alright with him. She does not think marrying her brings the royal family any benefit at all. He asks, entirely calm, what she herself thinks about it. Does she not have somebody else in mind? She says she has no right to oppose her father's will, and she would like every doubt cleared up beforehand. He laughs quietly and says that is all she has in her head. Seen from outside, this is unmistakably a political match tying the royal family to House Mycelian, in which case the two of them are the perfect couple. She starts to say something about that, and he apologizes and says she is mistaken about one thing, because he is the one who proposed this marriage to the king. He holds out a hand and says there's a place he wants to show her, after which he leads her down to the basement and says this is the entrance to the underground temple where Ellis protected this country. Minyu calls to His Highness and asks how he knew she had left the country. Zeno starts down the stairs and says they will talk on the way. They descend and he asks what she knows about Braveheart. She says her knowledge stops at what the Forbidden Library's materials held. Apparently he once took Rakan to the edge of destruction and then disappeared without warning. And there is no doubt his gate magic is threatening this land a second time. He asks where exactly. Braveheart opens those dimensional rifts from. Neither his father nor the High Priest holds this particular piece of information. The elves are the ones who sealed him. As a rule, elves do not involve themselves in human affairs. Except order and law are what they guard, and a threat of dark magic on that scale was apparently not something they could ignore. She says none of that was in the documents. She starts to ask something, and he does not listen and says there is a hidden room in the depths of the Forbidden Library. That is where the report of the true investigation was held. He spent a long time working through it alone, tracing cause and effect from the past into the present, and it went missing not long ago. Manu asks whether Ellis took it. Zeno agrees, smiling, and says here they are. She sees a spacious room covered in a great many different inscriptions and is genuinely astonished by it. He says it is an artificial divine system. Because with this formula, a person can reproduce effects equal to skills. Of course she cannot believe it, and says loudly that skills are a gift out of divine sleep, a miracle of the gods, and that reproducing one artificially is impossible. He says that is also written in the report. Because during divine sleep, a magic formula gets imprinted into the brain, which is why simply thinking about it counts as a spell. In other words, reproduce that formula physically in the correct sequence and structure, and theoretically any skill becomes usable. It is amazing, is it not? One single night of sleep and miraculous power like that is imprinted into the brain of every person alive. Genuinely, God is great and just, although note, there is one ghostly prince who falls outside that. Minnie reflects that this is true, because His Highness is the one man carrying no seal of God. Prince Zeno never experienced a divine dream, and therefore was never given any skill at all. The tragedy arrived while His Highness already stood on unstable ground, a sickly seventh son with the throne infinitely far out of reach. The mental pain he must have endured is something she cannot begin to imagine. He turns to her, smiling, and says he is only joking. She should not make a face like that, because if the will to claw your way up out of the bottom exists, everything is solvable. The magical construct he built through tireless work is exactly what helped him with this formula. For that he would do anything at all, including things she is better off not knowing about. She looks at him silently, entirely serious, and he walks to the center of the hall and says that is enough empty talk, and they activate it quickly. He raises a hand, activates the inscriptions across the walls and the floor, and a barrier rises over the entire city. He says that now monsters cannot come near for some time. So, regarding the reason he proposed to her, she says she already understands everything. Entirely serious, she says the prince's patriotic aspirations have her answer, and she goes with His Highness on his expedition through the underworld, serving with all respect as his bodyguard for the whole road. He calls her his bride, smiling, and asks whether the two of them should set off on their so-called honeymoon. Meanwhile, Livia is asleep in a cave and dreaming about goblins calling to her a long time ago, and asking whether this is the thing called a book. Does she understand what is written in there? She agreed and said it is a story about a duckling among ducklings who was a different color, and who turned out in fact to be a swan. They called that strange, and wanted to hear it anyway. A goblin ran up saying his boomerang had lodged itself in the branches. She walked to the tree, worked it loose, and handed it back. They thanked her and said they wish they were as tall as she is. How does anybody say a thing like that to a girl? Although she is so slender, and genuinely beautiful. Afterward they gathered in the house of the village chief, who said the world of demi-humans is currently swallowed in chaos. Coping with it requires a flexible mind and extensive knowledge. Therefore he appoints Livia the new chief, the Goblin Queen. She unites the villagers and protects their village, after which monsters attacked, and the goblins said they managed to fight them off, and a great many of their relatives were struck by poison. They will go looking for an antidote themselves, and the lady should rest for now. She was suffering from the poison herself and reflected that this is impossible because there is nobody among them except her who can tell a medicinal herb from a poisonous one. She has to save the village, after which she went into the forest, where she met a horned bull, and when the MC saved her, she wondered whether this man is genuinely the savior. Sadly, she cries in her sleep remembering it, and Marnus wakes, notices, and calls her an amateur. The next morning, they start eating, and Livia says her food is very tasty after all. She says her work as a maid in a duke's house was not for nothing. If this keeps up, the two of them reach the country of the elves within a few days. The moment they arrive, she goes to the master immediately. She asks with a pitiful expression how that is possible. She takes pity and says she thought as much, and she herself has long been interested in elven magical technologies, so she does not mind staying there a while. She also wants to become more worthy of the master, and for that she absorbs every scrap of knowledge greedily. She refuses to lose, and says loudly that she will also look for a way to help. They finish eating and she says delighted that she would like to ask her to teach her to cook next time. Still she sighs and asks why she should teach a love rival anything of the sort. Then she senses something and starts looking around, and Livia notices and says her name. She steps aside, takes a deep breath and says delighted and loudly that this is the master's scent. He should wait, because his maid is already hurrying to him. Marnus runs off into the forest extremely fast, and Livia, confused, considers what is happening, and then says loudly that this cannot be. She runs after her and shouts at her to wait. Meanwhile, Goblia and Rufna start snarling seriously at somebody, and Cross says he did not think they would be meeting again this quickly. Have her wounds healed yet? He says Ellis's name, since she is standing in front of him, and she agrees, entirely calm, and says it is thanks to him. The fact that he was this worried about her pleases her enormously. He says wary, that a wound that serious makes it natural. He wonders what exactly she is now, because if she was optimized, then when she shows her true nature is anybody's guess. She asks whether if it worries them that much, perhaps they should check whether she can grant them the intercession of the Holy Maiden's providence. Within seconds they are about to attack her, and Sufi asks them loudly to stop, and asks whether now is genuinely the time to burn their nerves on jokes like that. She knew coming with her was the correct decision. He looks at her and asks what this tiny body is supposed to be. She says it is a slime relay network, since particles have been peeling off her own body the entire way from the village, standing as reference points and carrying information. Either way, the Ellis in front of them is not going to fire the intercession of the Holy Maiden's providence for no reason. In the end, he accepts that and asks why she is here at all, because even with an intermediary along, he still does not trust her. She says the person standing here is not his ex-fiancé. It is an ordinary inhabitant of the upper world, and she has something to ask. What she wants is for him to travel with her to the land of the elves and help bring Raveheart down. The protagonist says he has never heard that name before. She says he is a disaster who in ancient times very nearly destroyed the kingdom of Rakan single-handedly. His name is forgotten now, and apparently he was eventually sealed away by the elven tribe. Except the spatial rifts appearing in the upper world are the skill he used. Perhaps that is a sign the seal is beginning to weaken. He says he understands the situation is serious, and he already said he no longer involves himself in the affairs of the upper world. Sufi says this could affect considerably more than the upper world, because she heard from Orpheus that somebody granted the demon's true name to his older brother. Moreover, spatial rifts up there are also a form of the summoner skill. Ellis says entirely serious, that if both of those skills connect somehow to darkness magic, then it is possible Raveheart's reach already extends down here. She is fully aware that asking him for this is not her right, except if she stays silent and walks past now, she takes something precious away from him again. What she is begging for is the loan of his power. He is startled by that and understands she is right, because for Livia's sake and for every villager's, he should help. He still has doubts. And at that exact moment he hears Marnis saying his name loudly. He recognizes her and turns around, and she says delighted that she missed him so much. She hugs him, pushes him onto the ground, and says she cannot believe the master himself came to see her. The MC says loudly and confused that she should stop inventing convenient excuses for herself. Incidentally, what brought her down here, and what became of the position at the estate. Also, the biting of his neck can stop. She stands up and says the Backhurst family has been completely destroyed, so she is unemployed now. She killed every one of them personally and without mercy. He should praise her and pat her on the head. Naturally, he is shocked by that, and she says there is no need to worry about the servants because she already found them new positions. She notices his confused expression and asks whether something is wrong. He says no, and Ellis, standing behind her, says that terrible as that family was, they were still his blood, so accepting this immediately must be hard for him. Marnis turns on her sharply, with fury in her eyes, and says loudly that this is not hers to comment on. She also tops the list of people on whom she intends to take revenge. She pays with her life for making her master suffer. He asks her loudly to wait, and she stops, because a system window opens beside them, and a voice says they have been waiting a long time for this. The fight for the Black Gacha. A special raid boss begins very shortly. Right away, they turn to that window and ask what the hell it is. Cross says, entirely serious, that this continues the raid boss announcement from a few days ago, because they said that defeating the raid boss earns a single spin of the Black Gacha. The system announces that the current raid boss is Magatsu Kanryu, the ferocious dragon of calamity and dark flame, an enemy that uses powerful fire breath. They prepare carefully and devise a strategy for destroying it. The battle begins in exactly 2 hours. He reflects that 2 hours delays the search for Livia, although if he can convince them, they have a chance of winning, since it is not only Goblia and Rufna here now, but Marnis as well. And just like that, the system announces the location, his village. He is startled by that and asks what they just said. He double-checks the information, and at that exact moment the villagers notice a dragon appearing above the village, are startled by it, and ask loudly what it is. Marnis, thoughtful, says she does not entirely understand what is happening yet, and that this dragon is said to be an incredibly ferocious monster whose infamy thundered even across the Far East. Perhaps even she has trouble with it. Sufi says she will contact her copies and warn the villagers about what is coming. The protagonist grabs his own head and declares loudly that this is a complete miscalculation on his part, because he was certain the raid boss would appear somewhere near him. However hard they hurry, the return journey takes more than a week. There is no version of this where they arrive in time. He says Marnis's name and starts to say something, and she immediately says she is against it. She turns to him, displeased, and says loudly that the two of them only just found each other again, and she does not want to be separated anymore. He says she is the only person he can trust with this. She becomes deeply embarrassed and asks loudly whether he thinks sweet words like that convince her. She is not leaving him regardless. Besides which, Ellis is here, and if she goes, who knows what that woman does. She says her name and asks her to look at something. She shows her the scar across her stomach and says stupidity and immaturity are what bought it. Once, showing a mark like that in his presence would have been unthinkable to her. Now she means to carry it until the day she dies, so the mistakes stay in front of her. She asks her to trust her, and to trust him. Marnis, displeased, clicks her tongue and says loudly that she understands everything. She simply goes there and does it. The goblin and the wolf appear reasonably strong, so she is taking them with her. The slime maintains contact through that slimy network stretching from the village itself. Correct. Sufi is surprised by that and says she is quite perceptive. She says she simply has topographical cretinism, and that is an essential quality in a clumsy maid. Therefore, those clones are their only shortcut, so she leads them even if leading them kills her. Ellis says that in that case, the intercession of the Holy Maid's providence goes towards straightening out her sense of direction. She does not get to finish, because Marnis turns to her and says loudly that she is categorically against it. She calls out to her master, embarrassed, and says she also simply does not want to be seen in that state anymore. She hesitates to finish it, and he strokes her head and says he understands everything. From now on, he leaves all of it to her, and he is counting on her. He runs on with Ellis, and she looks at him and says he has grown up so much. Within seconds, she transforms and asks, loudly, whether they are ready to go. She picks Goblia and Rufna up in her arms and says loudly that they hold on as tightly as they possibly can, because if they fall, she is not picking them up. She runs toward the goblin village at incredible speed, reflecting that she never did tell the master about that girl, although it hardly matters, since they are rivals either way. Meanwhile, he says her name and says that, returning to their recent conversation, he also helps her destroy Raveheart, because this raid battle brought him to his senses. She and Marnis both act for the sake of other people, while he alone was being stubborn, like an idiot. He does not know how strong this dark magic is, and with their rare skills, they can certainly handle it. She agrees, and he says determined that they hurry to the elven country. Meanwhile, Livia runs through the forest thinking about one habit of hers, because every morning, the moment she wakes up, she writes down today's date. Incidentally, her birthday is coming up soon. She wonders whether if she tells the master, he congratulates her. A little later, the MC reaches the city and says, so this is it, the elven country. Why are there this many other demi-humans in here besides elves? The atmosphere is clearly unhealthy. They hear an elf nearby saying loudly that he is asking them to let them through, except the cart will not fit. The demi-humans who dragged a table into the middle of that street start laughing loudly and claim elven is beyond them. Such kind creatures, elves. Friends, obviously, the elf takes out some coins and asks whether this will get them through. They thank him for the tip and say elves are so rich. Of course they want to step in for him. And the keeper of the Forbidden Lands, Celion, comes over, asks them to stop, and says that depending on the circumstances, they could be put on trial. After which they come to his house, and Cross asks whether those men can be held accountable. He says the land of the elves has that name and no ruler inside it. Law is the only thing anything rests on. Every inch of this territory sits under the system's watch, and anything illegal draws punishment the moment it happens. The behavior of those men is certainly vile, and they did not break the law. Therefore, all anybody can give them is a warning. He asks whether he understands this is none of his business, and whether the law should not be amended as soon as possible. He says sadly that changing the laws here has been simply impossible for 50 years, which relates directly to an ancient disaster called Raveheart. He is sealed in the Forbidden Lands now, and his dark magic has to be eradicated permanently. They also conducted research toward that goal for many years. He asks whether he said eradicate permanently, because does a skill not disappear on its own when its owner dies? He says no, and that skill is passed down to descendants over time, which means nobody knows in which generation a wielder of dark magic gets born again. In the end, their work succeeded. Also, 50 years ago, a ritual of complete destruction was performed, except what it cost them was any ability to rewrite a single law ever again. These days, the Forbidden Lands are extremely unstable. Demi-humans pulled in by that ominous aura started gathering around the area, and as a result, similarly marginalized people began settling inside the city itself. Security across this country is falling rapidly, and the laws cannot be changed. In the end, at this moment, they are completely powerless. Ellis calls to him and asks where a person can look at the Elven Code of Laws. Celion says they can study the archives directly through this crystal. He starts to say something else, and she is already looking at the book through that crystal and asking whether pages have been torn out. Now, the protagonist remembers meeting Marnis as a child, when she called him a strange boy and said she would gladly tear his family to pieces right now, except those stakes sucked her strength clean out, so she cannot even move properly. So if anybody finds out that he let her go, he understands that it kills him. Correct. He sat down in front of her and said that in that case she can kill him, because if all of it was useless anyway, then at least the people who end him are not that family. She threw a magic stone at him and said destroying human children is not a habit of hers, and she takes orders from nobody, although letting them get rid of him like that would leave a fairly bad aftertaste. The demonic foxes make this a special potion that hardens a body's defense, called a diamond fortitude pill. When the critical moment arrives, he swallows it, and dying stops being available to him. As for her, perhaps understanding the heart of a man like this requires going away and training as a maid. Should he still be breathing when she returns to these lands, she serves him with fox ears on. Currently, back in his village, the system voice says the battle resumes very shortly. 10 seconds until it resumes. The village is destroyed, and the inhabitants shout for the wounded to be brought here. This is only the beginning of the raid, and they are already in this state. Holding off those attacks is the limit of what they can do. They prepare to activate the protective barrier, which is now the only way out, since they need to hold until the assistant Sufi mentioned arrives. What the dragon does not know is what has been running toward that village for 2 hours. The countdown ends, and it releases an enormous stream of flame. Sadly, Orpheus watches that in horror and decides they are finished. And at the last possible moment, Marnus reaches them, blocks the attack with talismans, and says what a helpless collection of people they are. They call themselves the master's loyal servants. He turns to her and asks whether she is the assistant that was mentioned. She asks loudly and displeased how he dares address the master without respect. His loyalty is clearly insufficient. She starts to say something else, and at that moment the monster attacks her with fire breath. That makes her angry, and she says he should not imagine himself as anything special, being an unfinished lizard. She is not holding back. She ends this quickly and goes back to the master. A little later, the MC and Ellis come out onto a street where a great many demi-humans have gathered. He picks up a loudspeaker and says, "So, an announcement for everybody standing around the forbidden area. The lost chapters of the Elven Code have been restored, and a new clause has surfaced inside them. During inspection and conservation of the restricted area, entry by outsiders is strictly prohibited. Remaining inside that restricted area and interfering with their work is illegal, so they are asked to leave immediately. Otherwise, forced expulsion follows." To nobody's surprise, they laugh and say loudly that he should stop trying to deceive them. Why would rules that convenient suddenly appear? Forced expulsion means what, exactly? He could try taking that risk. Immediately after which, Cross puts a fist into one of them, hard, and throws him aside. The other demi-humans are thrown by that and say he genuinely did it. Is that not obvious assault? This is a crime, so he should be arrested, except the device does not react to any of it, and they ask loudly why he goes unpunished. He says calmly that this is what he told them. Forced expulsion is completely legal. The demi-humans ask loudly and unhappily whether this is a joke. They never got their true names, the way Veld or Ruga did. So how does anybody go home empty-handed after that? They do not care about these laws in the slightest. All of them charge, and Ellis calls to him and asks whether he thinks she did not restore that law, but simply modernized it in their favor. He says no, and that frankly in her position he would have done exactly the same. Because what matters is why she uses her skill. She used it to protect somebody, and that fact does not change. Luckily, hearing that, she smiles and says he is absolutely right, after which they beat every demi-human present. Move on. And she asks whether this is the forbidden zone. The protagonist stands next to her and says this is where Raveheart is sealed. What is she doing next? She says the Elven Seal is formed in subspace. Breaking through it from the inside or the outside is an extremely difficult task, although turning the intercession of the Holy Maiden's providence onto it, analyzing it and locating where it leaks from, certainly finds Raveheart. Except Minyu walks up to them, puts energy into her sword, and says none of that is necessary. She uses Brave Strike, creating an enormous sword of energy that goes straight through the spot in front of them. Both of them are extremely surprised, turn around, and say her name out loud. She addresses him calmly and says the two of them have not seen each other in a long time.